3 million years ago, back when the first groups of early humans began to appear on Earth, our protagonist was one of them. He seemed like any other Australopithecus at first glance, but there was something different about him, something that set him apart. Except having unusual obsession with hunting, MC thought he was just like everyone else, but soon he realized something was wrong about him. While others around him aged, weakened, and eventually died, he didn't. No matter what happened, he simply wouldn't die. Time passed, eons came and went, but he stayed the same. Well, not exactly the same. While the years left no mark on him, his body kept changing, growing larger, stronger, and more powerful. In this endless passage of time, the only things that kept him going were hunting, fighting, and battling anything or anyone that seemed worth his time. As someone cursed with eternal life and unbearable loneliness, those were the only things that gave him any joy. For nearly 3 million years, he lived this way, his body evolving day by day, becoming stronger and stronger. Eventually, he reached a point where his strength was unmatched, so much so that others began calling him the god of Earth, Mu. His power grew to such an extent that he defeated every other god in existence, claiming the title of the strongest in the divine realm. But after that, things started to change. With no one left who could challenge him, his once thrilling days of combat and excitement turned into an endless stretch of boredom. To show just how fed up he was with his boring daily routine, Mu raised his foot and slammed it down on the ground beneath him. The entire dwelling of the gods, which looked like a small planet, shook violently from the impact. But that wasn't even the worst part. The whole divine realm started trembling like crazy, leaving every god, angel, and even the evils within it absolutely terrified. Of course, this wasn't the first time God Mu pulled a stunt like this, and there were some gods who simply couldn't take being shaken up every single day. One of them was Lucifer, the second-ranked god in the divine realm. Mu, completely bored, acted like he didn't care about the chaos he was causing. His mind was consumed with the same thought that had plagued him for centuries. He had defeated every single worthy opponent without breaking a sweat, and now it had been over 1,000 years since he'd faced anyone who could challenge him. Letting out a deep sigh, Mu muttered to himself, being too strong is a problem too. As the words left his mouth, something clicked in his mind. After 1,000 years of mindless frustration, he suddenly felt like a genius. If his strength was the problem, then the solution was simple. He needed to find a way to weaken himself. In his mind, it was obvious. If he could get a weak body like the Earthlings, he'd have hundreds of opponents to fight. Suddenly, Mu stood up from his seat and shouted, "Dragonling!" Out of nowhere, a massive dragon appeared in the sky above him, then descended to the ground with a thunderous landing. The dragon's height was at least 5 times bigger than God Mu's throne, and from the way it stood, it didn't seem too thrilled about being summoned. But that was just the way the dragon looked. Those glowing eyes belonged to the top god's assistant, and Dragonleem was his name. Suddenly his demeanor changed and let out a deep growl and asked why he had been called. To his surprise, God Mu simply started walking away and casually told Dragonleem to take care of things while he was gone. However, things didn't go as smoothly as Mu expected. Out of nowhere, the dragon cast the spell Binding of the Absolute, and in a bold move shackled God Mu in an attempt to stop him. But the moment Mu turned his head and gave him a side glance filled with anger, the dragon's entire demeanor shifted again. His fierce and wild attitude melted away, and he suddenly looked scared and ashamed. Stammering, the dragon tried to explain himself, saying he didn't mean to offend his lord, but that Mu should have at least given an explanation, especially since there was a gods meeting coming up soon. Mu, however, didn't give 2 flying fucks about the gods meeting. Without saying another word, he started walking again, dragging the dragon along with the chains like they were nothing. Seeing his first plan fail, Mu's assistant quickly switched tactics and started playing the victim. He whined, saying that if Mu didn't show up for the meeting, he'd be the one stuck dealing with the other gods' endless complaints about Mu's actions. In response, Mu effortlessly broke the binding spell as if it was nothing. He turned to the dragon and yelled, saying he wouldn't go anywhere if instead of that the dragon agreed to fight him right now. That was all it took to completely change the assistant's attitude. Realizing that taking blame from the other gods was far better than being torn apart by God Mu, the dragon immediately wished him a safe and short trip. Mu smirked and walked toward what looked like a small version of Earth floating nearby. Stretching out his hand, he touched the surface of the mini-Earth. As he did, he began to wonder whose body he should choose to inhabit on Earth. To make the decision easier, he started listening in on the messages Earthlings were sending to the gods. Most of them were trivial and boring, but then one particular message caught his attention. It was a message that was questioning his very existence. At first, the message annoyed God Mu. However, it didn't take long for him to realize something. This person was the perfect choice for him to start his journey on Earth again. For the first time in 1,000 years, Mu felt genuinely excited. He had finally found a solution to his endless boredom. But while Mu couldn't have been happier, his assistant looked far less enthusiastic about the whole thing. For a brief moment, Mu thought about whether he should give some sort of explanation before leaving. But, true to his Sigma personality, he decided against it. Much to the dragon's surprise, he simply said goodbye, entrusted the place to him, and told him to take care of anyone who might show up in his absence. The dragon felt a mix of worry and frustration when he realized what was happening. God Mu was only sending his soul to Earth while leaving his body behind. Concerned, the dragon tried to remind him of the risks. If something happens to Mu's body while he's gone, his separated soul would also die on Earth. But Mu had already made up his mind. The idea that no one in the divine realm would dare even think about harming him gave him complete confidence that his body would be perfectly safe while he was away. Despite the dragon's attempts to stop him, though only through words, Mu brushed off his assistant's concerns and did what he wanted, just like always. Without further explanation, the scene abruptly shifted. It wasn't Mu anymore, but someone entirely different. Someone who had just defeated the demon lord after a grueling battle. The feeling of victory was overwhelming, and the person couldn't have been happier. But it wasn't real life. It was just the final scene of a video game that a player had finished moments ago. That player was a 17-year-old loser named Lee Ho. Lee Ho was painfully jealous of the heroes in every video game he played, those lucky protagonists who always managed to gather massive harems of cute girls during their ridiculous adventures. And as Lee Ho stared at the game credits rolling on his screen, he couldn't help but sigh, wishing his life were anything like theirs. Lee suddenly let go of his phone, and it slipped from his hand, falling as if from a great height. In mere seconds, the phone hit the ground with a loud crash, shattering into pieces. It was then clear why. Lee Ho was standing on the edge of a 3-story building, ready to end his life. With nothing left to live for, his body trembling and covered in injuries, he whispered a bitter farewell to this cruel and unfair world before jumping. As he fell, the wind whipping past him, Lee screamed with tear-filled eyes from the depths of his despair. "If there's a god out there," he shouted, "now's your chance to prove it. Send me to another world." Before he could even finish his plea, he hit the ground with a sickening thud. Blood splattered everywhere, and his head smashed directly into the pavement. By all accounts, he should have been dead. But then, something strange happened. Lee's hands twitched, shaking uncontrollably. His chest heaved, and he suddenly started breathing heavily, like someone who had just been pulled from drowning. Unbeknownst to Lee, God Mu's soul had possessed his body in the blink of an eye right before he hit the ground. Now, Mu was forced to endure the unbearable pain of Lee's broken and battered body, completely unaware of what had just happened. Meanwhile, Lee's soul had been transported to the divine realm. He stood there, utterly shocked, his jaw practically on the floor. What shocked him wasn't just that he was in some otherworldly place, but that he was standing face to face with a towering dragon, one that definitely didn't look happy to see him. But the shock was mutual. The dragon, too, was stunned. He hadn't expected to see a human so soon in the divine realm, same as Lee that definitely hadn't expected the first thing he'd see after dying to be a massive, angry dragon glaring right at him. Let's take a moment to rewind and see what really happened just 10 seconds before this entire incident unfolded. God Mu was standing there with that signature smirk on his face, lightly touching the surface of the mini-earth in front of him. As I mentioned earlier, he wasn't the least bit worried about leaving his defenseless body behind. He had full confidence. Too much confidence, honestly. The dragonling tried to warn him, urging him to think this through. But Mu, reckless as ever, he brushed off the warnings like they were nothing. Without a second thought, he sent his soul hurtling towards Earth, swapping places with Lee Ho's soul. The very next moment, the unexpected happened. As soon as Mu's soul entered Lee's body, he realized he was in a dire life-or-death situation. No time to adjust, no warning. He was in mid-air, plummeting toward the ground at lightning speed. Less than a second. That's all the time he had to process the danger he was in. And then it happened. Lee's body hit the ground with such an incredible force that it was almost impossible to believe. The impact wasn't just devastating. It was catastrophic. Bones shattered into pieces. The body was flung backward like a rag doll before finally coming to a rest. The pain? It was beyond anything Mu had ever experienced in his immortal life. But the pain wasn't the worst part. What really hit him was the sheer confusion. Why? Why did this happen the moment he set foot, well, soul, on Earth? How did he end up in such a mess, and so quickly? None of it made any sense. His hands trembled uncontrollably at first, the shock coursing through his borrowed body. But then suddenly, everything went still. His hands stopped shaking. The realization dawned on him in that chilling, silent moment. He was dying. No chance to change his fate, no time to fix what was broken. And just like that, his lifeless body collapsed onto the cold, unforgiving ground. The area was eerily quiet, with no one around to witness the fall of what was once a proud and mighty god. No one to help, no one to even notice. But this wasn't the end for God Mu. Not yet. As you know, some human muscles move without conscious control. These are called involuntary muscles, like the heart and internal organs. For Mu, who had spent 3 million years training his body, he had reached the absolute peak of understanding the human form. This allowed him to consciously control every single part of his body, including his vessels and even his internal organs. Nothing was off limits for him. That was exactly how, just a few seconds after dying, his heart started beating again. The pain was excruciating, even for someone like Mu. But by forcing his blood to flow through his vessels and repairing his heart, he managed to stop the bleeding. Slowly but surely, Mu began to rise to his feet as if nothing had happened, even though his entire body was still screaming in pain. But instead of being angry about this chaotic situation, Mu found himself oddly happy. Beaten up, covered in blood, it had been so long since he felt anything like this. This feeling convinced him that he'd made the right choice to come here. His next move was to sift through Li Ho's memories to figure out what kind of life this guy had been leading. It didn't take long for him to learn everything about Li. With that knowledge, Mu decided to head back to Li's home, his new base, to figure out his next steps. Surprisingly, Mu found it difficult to walk with Li's weak and injured legs, so, like an ape, he used his hands to support himself, both to move faster and to take some of the pressure off his legs. Not long after, he finally reached Li's house, though the first thing he noticed was a cat had left a poop right in front of the window. As soon as he entered the small, basement-like house, Mu sat down on the creaky bed and started reflecting on what he had learned about Li's life so far. According to Li's memories, he only had one male relative, and that person lived far away from here. It didn't take long for Mu to realize that the guy he had chosen not only lived alone, but was also poor and utterly miserable. His only occupation seemed to be attending some place called school. What amused Mu the most, though, was the memory of someone at school who seemed to have made it their life's mission to bully Li. Not only did this person constantly pick fights with him, but they also went out of their way to make Li's life a living hell. This, to Mu, was exactly the kind of starting point he had hoped for. It was messy, chaotic, and full of potential for challenges. He couldn't be happier about it. Feeling a surge of excitement, Mu threw a random punch into the air to celebrate, but the moment he did, a sharp and unexpected pain shot through his right arm. It felt as if the muscles in his arm had torn apart. Something was definitely wrong. Mu figured the pain in his arm was probably because of how he had overused his hand muscles while awkwardly crawling back home. It became pretty obvious that this body hadn't seen much action. The first thing Mu noticed was that Li had almost never used his arm muscles for anything strenuous, so even the simplest effort left them sore. Still, instead of feeling frustrated or angry about being stuck in such a weak body, Mu smirked. In fact, he was genuinely happy to feel pain like this, after thousands of years of living without it. The next day, the police discovered the bloodstains and shattered glasses at the scene where Li Ho's body had crashed to the ground. They quickly roped off the area, forbidding anyone from entering as they launched their investigation. Meanwhile, Mu casually returned to the crash scene, not to check on the investigation though. The real reason he was there was because that 3-story building near the scene was none other than Li's school, and Mu had decided to keep up with Li's daily routine. He strolled into the school, scanning the halls until he found Li's classroom. His excitement got the better of him as he slid the rail door open with way too much force. The door rebounded and slammed back into him, smacking him squarely and leaving Mu momentarily stunned. His triumphant moment was completely ruined. Muttering to himself, he slowly stepped into the classroom, drawing the attention of one of Li's classmates. The boy was immediately annoyed by the noise Li made as he entered the classroom. He shot him an irritated glare and called him "Idiot Li Ho," telling him to keep it down. Hearing this, Mu completely forgot about the pain in his face and began walking toward the boy. Mu stopped right in front of him, standing uncomfortably close, which left the boy momentarily shocked, but it wasn't Li's weak and frail appearance that surprised him. It was the unsettling, creepy smile on Mu's face. In that instant, Mu recognized this boy as the bully from Li's memories, the one who always made his life miserable. The bully, completely unaware that Li Ho was no longer the same person, scoffed and mocked him. "What's wrong with you, huh? Did you leave your glasses at home? Or are you just too blind and stupid to act normal today?" Before Mu could even respond, the boy suddenly swung his fist and punched him square in the face, as if to reassert his dominance over Li. The punch landed hard, and blood started dripping from Mu's nose and mouth, pooling on the floor beneath him. The bully smirked, clearly proud of himself, and mocked him again. "What happened to your glasses? Did you sell them for cash or something? Or did you just lose them like the idiot you are?" Even with the blood running down his face, Mu didn't flinch. He stood there calmly, unfazed by the punch. When it came to fighting, Mu had his own unshakable rules. To him, a proper and honorable fight could only begin when all parties involved had willingly shown their intent to fight. And right now, Mu was waiting for the right moment to respond. As someone always ready to face any opponent, whether it's a god, a beast, or a human, Mu's only concern was confirming his opponent's intent to fight. And the way Mu chose to confirm that intent was simple. He would stand still and take the opponent's first strike. That's exactly what happened here. After taking the punch, the familiar excitement and satisfied smile spread across Mu's face. Without any hesitation, Mu sprang into action, interrupting the bully mid-sentence with a sudden punch aimed directly at him. The boy, completely caught off guard, took the punch squarely, just as Mu had moments ago. But as Mu pulled his hand back, a sharp, unbearable pain shot through his arm. His muscles felt like they were tearing apart again, a brutal reminder that this wasn't his indestructible godly body, but a fragile, weak human one. The commotion quickly caught the attention of the teacher, who stormed over, shouting angrily and demanding that they stop fighting immediately. But by now, the noise had also drawn the interest of the entire class. Heads turned, curious and intrigued by the sight of a fight breaking out in the middle of the room. The bully, feeling humiliated and furious after being punched by a nerd for the first time in his life, couldn't contain his anger any longer. Ignoring the teacher's yelling and the watching crowd, he charged straight at Mu, ready to unleash his fury. Mu immediately tried to defend himself and managed to block most of the attacks. Well, kind of. While defending, he couldn't help but think that he would have ended this fight a long time ago if his new body could actually keep up with him. For a brief moment, he considered using some of his godly powers. But to his shock, they didn't work. That moment of disbelief distracted him, and before he knew it, he took another punch to the face. At least this one wasn't as hard as the last one. The bully wasn't about to back off from the person he believed was Lee, not until he made him regret throwing that first punch. On the other hand, Mu found himself in a pretty bad spot. He couldn't muster the strength to fight back with this weak body. No punches, no kicks, and without his godly powers, he was left with only one option. In a sudden move, he lowered his head, aiming at a specific spot, and took the incoming punch directly on his skull. The bones of his skull were the only part of this body that he could count on. Just as he expected, the bully's fist slammed into his head, and the impact immediately made the guy break the bones in his fingers. The pain was so intense that the bully screamed like a baby, and in that moment Mu couldn't help but feel like an absolute genius. To put an end to this ridiculous fight, Mu decided to take advantage of the bully's distraction before he could recover. This time, he was the one who rushed forward, grabbing the bully's hand in a sudden move. Without wasting a second, he used his head to strike, aiming directly at the guy's stomach or maybe even his balls, knowing most guys' weak spots are right there. The bully was caught completely off guard, unable to handle yet another wave of unbearable pain at the same time. But Mu wasn't done yet. He wanted to make sure this guy would never forget this day for the rest of his life. With another swift move, Mu raised his head and slammed it into the bully's jaw. This time, the pain was too much for the bully to handle. His eyes rolled back and he dropped to his knees in front of Mu like a defeated loser before finally passing out. All of this happened while everyone else stood there in shock, recording the entire fight. Watching the weakest guy in school take down one of the school's biggest bullies wasn't something anyone could believe so easily. But for Mu, things were different. He had just fought someone for the first time in thousands of years, using every bit of strength he could muster. The feeling was incredible, but now wasn't the time to celebrate. As his excitement faded, the pain from all the hits he'd taken came rushing in all at once. He could taste the sticky, metallic flavor of blood in his mouth. At first, it didn't seem like something even God Mu could handle so easily, but it only took a moment for him to realize something surprising. He was more than okay with it. After such a long, hard time, it actually felt satisfying to experience the pain of a good fight again. A few moments later, when Mu's excitement finally settled, he stared at the unconscious boy's body like he wasn't done with him yet. Mu sat down next to him, and for some reason, probably because the boy gave him such a tough fight, he thanked him. Then, in a completely unexpected move, Mu leaned in, lowered his head, opened his mouth wide, and bit the boy's ear, making blood splatter everywhere. But Mu didn't just bite the ear. He actually tore off a small piece of it and spat it onto the ground right in front of all his classmates. Horror filled the air. None of the students could believe what Mu had just done. It was like watching a crazy person. Mu, however, didn't care at all about what anyone thought. He calmly wiped the blood off his face, still glaring at the boy's body, who, even after losing part of his ear, didn't so much as twitch. This wild act of biting off the bully's ear was actually Mu's way of leaving a mark on his opponent, someone who had given him a fight that he truly enjoyed. It was his twisted way of showing gratitude, while also marking them as someone worthy of his attention. These opponents were later referred to as Mu's playthings. However, it was clear, Only strong opponents who gave him exciting battles could earn a spot on this list. Back then, being called one of Mu's playthings was almost like a badge of honor, a symbol of strength. Ironically, in a way, it was similar to how humans in some eras would mark animals to show they had been neutered, except Mu's mark wasn't about humiliation, but recognition. Soon enough, the story of the second-year bully who got beaten by the weakest guy in school spread faster than lightning. The most shocking part for everyone wasn't just that the bully got beaten, it was that he basically got neutered. The boy's condition was so bad that they had no choice but to call emergency medical services to come and take care of him. Like all the other curious students, Mu was also watching as they transferred Lee's classmate to the hospital. Of course, Mu didn't care about his health. He was more curious about how they managed to call for help so quickly using just a mobile phone. As the ambulance drove off, Mu waved his hand, saying goodbye to his first opponent and wishing to meet him again someday. That's when one of the teachers, who was absolutely furious, appeared behind him and ordered him to follow him to the teacher's office. The moment they got there, the teacher exploded, yelling at Mu and asking if he'd completely lost his mind. He demanded to know why he'd done something so wild and reckless to his classmate. At one point, the teacher's anger boiled over, and he attempted to hit Mu with the binder in his hand. But Mu didn't flinch. He didn't even move an inch. Not only was he unbothered by the threat of punishment, but he actually blushed. He looked excited, thrilled even, as if he was already thinking about the chance to fight another opponent soon. Seeing Mu's expression made the teacher change his mind immediately and stop his hand midair. Not wanting to risk the same fate as the student in the hospital, he decided to skip the punishment altogether. Instead, he turned around and told Mu, who he believed was Lee Ho, to bring his parents to school tomorrow. Mu had braced himself, expecting to get hit by the teacher, but when the punishment, which meant confirmation of the battle, didn't come, he gave up on the idea of fighting back. Just then, the teacher dismissed him, saying he could leave school earlier than the others. Without saying much, Mu did as he was told and left the school. On his way to Lee's house, Mu's mind wandered. Unlike other gods who have complete knowledge of the worlds they're responsible for, Mu wasn't sure what the teacher meant by leave earlier. Was it a suggestion to return to his base, or something else entirely? Since nothing else made sense to him, he assumed it was just that. He decided to use this unexpected free time to heal from the injuries he'd gotten earlier and train his fragile new body. If he wanted to fight more opponents in the future, he needed to get stronger. His hand was visibly shaking from the pain of the damage he'd taken. At that moment, he wished he could use some of his godly powers, like mana, to heal himself faster. Mana, as Mu understood it, was a power beyond what most of humans were capable of. In some places it was called chi, or chakra, but most gods referred to it as mana. To put it simply, mana was the life force that existed everywhere in nature. It gave humans extraordinary abilities, allowing them to become hunters in some worlds, wizards in others, or even powerful players in different realms. But here, in this world, Mu couldn't rely on it, no matter how much he wanted to. For now, he would just have to endure the pain and focus on adapting to his new life and body. He tried once again to channel his mana, but it vanished within seconds. This reminded Mu of the moment during his earlier battle, when he'd tried to use mana and failed there too. Frustrated, he finally realized he would need to focus solely on training his physical body and rely entirely on it from now on. Before long, Mu arrived at Lee's home and collapsed onto the bed. Knowing that his recovery would take a lot of time, and that there wasn't much he could do about it, he made the decision to return to the god's realm to check on what was happening there. In an instant, just like the day he first came to Earth, his soul shifted back to his original body. As soon as Mu regained consciousness, his eyes widened in shock. Right in front of him, Lee Ho was choking the dragonling, refusing to let the poor creature go. The weak boy, who had always been bullied on Earth, now turned to God Mu as soon as he noticed him. Letting go of the dragon, Lee approached Mu with a newfound confidence and demanded that Mu hand the dragon over to him. Lee didn't know who Mu really was. He had no idea he was talking to a god. All he knew was that he was only temporarily in this realm and would eventually leave again. Lee wanted to take control of the dragonling for himself, thinking he could use it to dominate in his new life. Mu, however, didn't like how Lee was acting, so arrogant and commanding. Without hesitation, Mu summoned a godly hand and tightly grabbed hold of Lee, making it clear that he couldn't just order around his lord like that. Lee was completely shocked. He didn't expect this to happen at all, but God Mu didn't care about his protests or complaints and started dragging him off to somewhere else without a second thought. Mu had decided to give the boy a second chance to live in another world, but the look on his face suggested he had something else on his mind. Minutes later, they arrived at the domain of Lucifer, the second-ranked god in the divine realm. Mu entered the scene confidently, his firm steps making it clear to anyone around that he was there. Of course, there wasn't anyone else around except Lucifer himself, who, unlike Mu, was diligently keeping a close eye on his planet, Elmur. Mu marched straight into Lucifer's castle without even bothering to ask for permission, walking in as casually as if Lucifer was just some ordinary guy. Naturally, Lucifer wasn't thrilled about Mu's rude behavior. Without even giving them a chance to explain why they were there, Lucifer immediately rejected whatever it was they wanted, not even bothering to hear them out. But Mu didn't care about Lucifer's opinion in the slightest. He flatly told him to open the gate because he was about to send the boy to the planet Elmur. As expected, Lucifer reminded him that Elmur wasn't Mu's planet, so he had no right to make such a decision. On the other hand, Mu wasn't having it. He leaned in and reminded Lucifer who the stronger god was in this scenario, making it clear that he could do whatever he wanted. To drive his point home, Mu added that if Lucifer doubted his strength, he was more than ready to prove it, anytime, anywhere. Poor Lucifer knew he was no match for Mu, so he couldn't help but tremble in frustration. Seeing Lucifer hesitate and waste time, Mu stepped forward, deciding to handle everything himself without waiting for Lucifer. As Mu approached and touched the surface of Elmur's planet, Lucifer, caught off guard, quickly reminded Mu that interfering with another god's domain was strictly forbidden among the gods. He warned Mu that if a god who isn't in charge of a domain touches it, an unbreakable barrier would activate and block all access. And just as Lucifer said, the barrier appeared. But to his complete disbelief, Mu effortlessly shattered it in seconds, something Lucifer never thought possible. Shocked, Lucifer stared at Mu, who calmly remarked that the rules of the universe could be changed easily if someone truly wanted to change them. Then, Mu opened his godly hand and released Li Ho, urging him to step forward and leap into the hole he had created on Elmur's planet. Li hesitated, clearly scared, but Mu reminded him that this was what he had always asked for, and now the opportunity was right in front of him. Li once again asked Mu to give him the Dragonling so he could dominate in his new life, but Mu showed no intention of handing over his own assistant and simply shot Li straight into Elmur's planet, forcefully sending him to Isekai. After that, Mu couldn't help but wonder why kids these days don't want to work for what they want and just expect everything to be handed to them on a silver platter. With things settled and nothing else left to do, Mu turned to Lucifer and casually told him to take good care of the kid before departing. Lucifer, on the other hand, humiliated and seething with anger, could only wish for the power to tear Mu limb from limb. Lucifer's story wasn't so different from Mu's. He was once known as the first demon lord in history, the one who stood above all life on Elmur's planet. After claiming the title of the strongest, Lucifer, in his arrogance, dared to challenge the god who ruled over his world. Back then, in the first moments of their battle, Lucifer summoned a blinding light that quickly transformed into a massive sword, a magical blade far larger than the god himself, and hurled it straight at him. Even the god couldn't withstand the sheer power of the attack. Overwhelmed, he was struck down, split in two by the massive sword, unable to dodge or defend himself. After defeating that god, Lucifer took his place, but even that wasn't enough to satisfy him. He went on to challenge every other god in the divine realm, defeating them one by one and claiming the ultimate throne. As a demon, he became the god of gods. Absolute, invincible, supreme, legendary, and one of a kind among them all. Before long, he earned everyone's respect, something he believed he truly deserved. But his days of glory didn't last. One day, Mu showed up and beat him just like he had crushed all the others before him, completely destroying Lucifer's mighty image in front of everyone. That day, consumed by rage and humiliation, Lucifer made a vow. He promised himself that he would get revenge for this disgrace, cursing Mu as a human-born bastard in his fury. Back to the present, Mu was casually riding atop his Dragonling, heading toward his domain, completely unaware that something in the sky was secretly watching him. A demon, most likely sent by Lucifer, was spying on him to figure out what Mu was up to and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back. Just like Lucifer, who's counting down the minutes for his chance to get revenge for his humiliation, the bully from Li's school, who had just regained consciousness, couldn't wait to see Li dead. Still lying in his hospital bed, the boy grabbed his phone and decided to call someone tougher to teach Li a lesson. Fueled by burning anger, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the name of that person he was looking for. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, someone was going hard on a punching bag. That guy's name was Kang Cheol, the youth division middleweight boxing champion. His intense training session was suddenly interrupted by an obnoxiously loud ringtone. Annoyed, Kang stopped mid-punch, sweat dripping down his body. and turned to see whose phone was making that ridiculous noise. That's when another guy, a blonde, walked in and casually said it was his phone. He strolled over, picked it up, and answered, sounding irritated. That guy was Hyung Chul, a boxer with 2 years of experience under his belt. As expected, the caller was none other than the beaten-up bully. With desperation in his voice, and without any introduction, he told Hyung he'd buy him a new phone if he wanted, but asked him to do one small favor first. At first, Hyung was a bit surprised to hear the request, but since it sounded like an easy and good deal, he agreed, and asked what he needed to do in return. The next day, during class, when everything seemed normal again, the bully walked in as if nothing had happened the day before. As he made his way to his seat, the entire classroom suddenly went silent for a moment, with everyone's eyes fixed on him. Then, the murmurs and whispers started. The students were talking about how someone who used to bully others ended up in such a pathetic state. At first, he tried to ignore it, but when the whispers turned into jokes about him being neutered, he couldn't take it anymore. To show he wasn't someone to mess with, he slammed his backpack on the floor and yelled at them, saying he could still take them all down, even when he got neutered. He challenged anyone who doubted his strength to fight him. That's when the class president, a girl with glasses, stood up and shouted back, telling him to either shut up or leave the classroom. Seeing that girl dared to talk to him like that for the first time only made him angrier. Frustrated that even the class president dared to stand up to him, he completely lost it. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a random chair and tried to throw it at her to remind everyone they should fear him like they used to. Before he could do anything, the door suddenly swung open, and a massive Hulk-like teacher walked into the classroom, demanding to know what all the fuss was about. To everyone's surprise, the bully instantly dropped into his seat and acted as if nothing had happened. The teacher looked around and noticed the class president standing, clearly angry. He asked her what was going on and why she was out of her seat. However, the girl didn't spill the truth. Instead, she quickly returned to her seat and assured him it wasn't anything worth mentioning. The teacher didn't press further, but for some reason he told the girl to meet him after class. Something that the girl got curious to know why. When the school day ended, she met him as instructed, and it turned out he wanted a favor. Since she was the class president and someone he could trust, he asked her to check on Lee Ho, who had been absent that day and wasn't answering his phone. In exchange, the teacher promised to write her a recommendation letter for her senior year. It was framed as a request, but the girl knew she couldn't exactly say no. Reluctantly, she agreed. Before long, she found herself standing in front of Lee's house, looking completely uninterested in whatever situation he might be in. Wanting to get this over with as quickly as possible, she didn't waste any time. She walked up to the door and knocked, calling out to see if anyone was home. When no one responded, she hesitated for a moment before deciding to check if the door was locked. Turning the doorknob, she realized it wasn't. To her surprise, the door wasn't locked, so she slowly stepped inside the house. The moment she walked in, she froze in shock. Right there, in front of her, was Lee's lifeless-looking body, surrounded by a filthy room where bugs seemed to be playing hide-and-seek. Lee's appearance was horrifying. His eyes had rolled back completely white, and his mouth was wide open. The sight made the girl scream in terror, thinking Lee was dead. Without wasting another second, she grabbed her phone and called for an ambulance. The paramedics arrived quickly and rushed Lee to the nearest hospital. It didn't take long for the doctors to figure out what had happened. Lee had probably fainted from pure starvation, abandoned by Godmu, who had left his body earlier. He was hospitalized and hooked up to a nutrient IV to stabilize him. Just then, something strange happened. As Lee's body lay still, it suddenly twitched. In an instant, Mu returned to Lee's body. The moment Mu opened his eyes, he was completely disoriented. The place didn't look familiar at all. Confused, he tried to figure out where he was and how he'd ended up there. Before he could make sense of anything, he felt something odd. Looking down, he realized something was attached to his hand. It was the fourth line delivering the nutrient serum. As a god who had lived only for battle and fighting, Mu had no knowledge of human tools or technology in this era, and this strange serum was no exception. He stared at it with a mix of curiosity and unease, trying to process what was happening. Even though he didn't understand what the serum was, God Mu immediately figured out that it was sending something into his body, and only through his vessels. With his godly knowledge of what was happening inside him, it didn't take long for him to realize it was nutrients. He could sense his body absorbing them rapidly, speeding up his recovery. To Mu, it felt like some kind of healing magic, though he knew very well it wasn't magic. As Lee started moving his head around, regaining consciousness, the girl sitting nearby finally noticed he was awake. However, the creepy smile on his face made her think he was a little crazy. Still, she asked if Lee knew what had happened to him that caused him to faint. Not waiting for an answer, she grabbed her bag, stood up, and announced she was heading back to school to report everything to the teacher, as he had asked her to. Mu quickly sat up and tried to stop her. He didn't know who this girl was exactly, but he assumed she was the one who had helped him recover so quickly. However, even after realizing that, he didn't thank her. Instead, in typical Mu fashion, he asked for something else entirely. The girl was in a hurry to leave, but Mu was eager to gather more information about Earth and how people lived here. Pulling the serum out of his hand, he gave his usual creepy smile and asked if she knew a place where he could train to get stronger. The girl turned her head slightly and gave him a side glance. Honestly, in her eyes, this boy looked like anything but an athlete. Add to that the poor, dirty condition of his house. It didn't exactly show if he really cares about sports. Still, after a moment of thought, she suggested a specific place for him. It wasn't anything fancy, just an outdoor gym at a nearby park with some simple workout equipment. Not wasting any time, Mu made his way to the park and began his training. He quickly started doing pull-ups on the bars, pushing his body as hard as he could. When he finally grew tired, he dropped to the ground to take a break, sweat dripping off his body. As he looked around, Mu couldn't help but feel impressed. To him, these simple pieces of exercise equipment looked like professional training tools. It had been almost 4,000 years since he'd last set foot on Earth, and after that, he hadn't bothered to check on human progress as the Earth God. Seeing even these basic workout machines left him in awe. Back in his time, humans trained with something entirely different, primitive methods that were far harder and less efficient. This modern equipment, though simple by human standards, was revolutionary in Mu's eyes. Mu started randomly testing each piece of equipment, even though he had no idea how any of them actually worked. Suddenly, in the middle of his training, something small, like a pebble, hit him on the back and fell to the ground. To his surprise, it was the beaten-up bully from earlier, and this time he had brought someone along, a boxer named Hyung, to fight him. Even with the boxer beside him, the bully acted like a barking dog, yelling insults at Lee from a safe distance but not daring to step closer. Mu couldn't care less about his barking. Calmly, he sat down, picked up the rock, and asked who had thrown it. The beaten-up guy, feeling a little braver now that Hyung was there to back him up, shouted that he was the one who did it. He started ranting about how Lee would pay for hurting him, bragging about how Hyung, his cousin and a professional boxer, was going to beat him to death. But before he could finish explaining, Mu saw an opening and caught him off guard with a sudden punch. The guy hit the ground, screaming in pain as his already broken nose got smashed again. This was the result of starting a fight with God Mu by throwing a stone, and of course, Mu couldn't have been happier about it. That was on Earth, but in the realm of the gods, things were a bit more complicated. The time for the usual meeting of the gods had arrived, but Mu was nowhere to be seen. As his only assistant, the Dragonling had to attend the meeting in his place. With his lord absent, the nervous little dragon stuttered as he awkwardly began to deliver Mu's message. Before the Dragonling could even get through the first few words of the letter, Lucifer suddenly interrupted. Glaring at the dragon, he demanded to know why a mere assistant dared to step into a meeting meant for gods, let alone speak first, as if he were someone important. Lucifer's intimidating demeanor scared the poor Dragonling out of his wits. Panicked, the dragon quickly clarified that he was only there to deliver a message from God Mu and had no intention of disrespecting or offending anyone with his presence. Determined to fulfill his duty and get out of there before things escalated, the Dragonling began to read the letter with a trembling voice, but the message turned out to be nothing out of the ordinary. As usual, Mu was simply asking the gods to let him know if they came across any worthy opponents for him to fight. That was it. Lucifer couldn't hold back his anger after hearing that and slammed the table with a resounding bang. As the second most powerful god in the divine realm, he couldn't stand how Mu not only did whatever he pleased, but now even ignored the meeting and the gods entirely. Lucifer wasn't wrong, and most of the gods silently agreed with him. However, even in Mu's absence, none of them dared to openly criticize him. Lucifer pressed on, declaring that the gods' meeting was meant to ensure the stability and safety of their worlds. As the third strongest god, and of course as someone already in Mu's playthings list, the archer god finally spoke up. He argued that if, same as always, any abnormalities occurred, even on Earth, they were the ones who always should take care of them instead of Mu, and that was most unacceptable thing for strongest god among them. Seizing the moment, Lucifer slammed the table again, his voice booming with frustration. He shouted that Mu's habit of treating everything like a game was pushing all the worlds to the brink of collapse. In his opinion, the few times Mu actually decided to solve something usually ended up making things worse. To make his argument more convincing, Lucifer turned to the god of Cyclops, the 9th-ranked deity in the divine realm, and asked if he remembered what Mu had done 1,000 years ago when the Cyclops planet was on the brink of destruction. Back then, a massive ugly creature, as large as the Cyclops planet itself, attacked, a rare being known as a void creature, capable of devouring an entire planet in seconds. Just as the void creature began tearing the Cyclops planet apart, something suddenly shot straight through the middle of it, splitting it into two unequal pieces. That something, of course, was God Mu. With his usual cheerful and flushed face, delighted at the chance for a fight, Mu had effortlessly killed the enormous creature in an instant. Lucifer used this event to drive his point home, trying to make everyone, especially the Cyclops god, see that Mu was to blame for the aftermath of the destruction. He explained that if Mu had cooperated with the other gods instead of acting alone, there wouldn't have been any casualties. Having made his case, and likely swaying the other gods to his side, Lucifer declared that they could no longer stand by and let someone unfit to be a god continue risking the safety of their worlds. On the other side, the dragonling was left speechless. He couldn't do or say anything to defend his lord. The only thing he could do was silently pray, begging his lord to return before things spiraled even further out of control. The scene shifts back to Earth, where the beaten guy started making noise again. He barked at Mu, warning him once more that his boxer cousin is going to make him pay for what he did to him. Hyung, the so-called boxer cousin, was intrigued. He couldn't help but be a little impressed by how fast Mu had moved and punched earlier. Curious, he asked if Mu practiced any sports, like martial arts, but Mu casually replied that he didn't play any sports, because all he wanted was to fight, not play. Mu's response, however, made Hyung think of him as nothing more than an overconfident, dumb middle schooler. Spitting out his chewing gum with a smirk, Hyung took a fighting stance and said he was ready to fight, just as Mu had apparently wanted. Hyung decided to start first, moving quickly to test this guy and see if he was all talk or actually had some skill. His opening strike was fast and sharp, landing hard on Mu's face before Mu could dodge or block. But despite the satisfaction of landing the first blow, something about Mu stunned Hyung. There was something strange, something downright unusual about this opponent, and it sent a chill running up his spine. As an experienced boxer who carefully observes his opponent's movements, Hyung found it strange that Mu didn't move an inch, even when he had clearly been watching the punch coming from the start. Just like the beaten guy who had hired him, Hyung had no idea that his opponent wasn't human, but a god. And not just any god, a god who was absolutely obsessed with fighting. What Hyung also didn't know was that Mu never dodged a preemptive strike. For him, taking the first hit was like a signal, confirming that the battle had officially begun. With his usual unsettling, overly excited grin, Mu suddenly shouted, "Is hand-to-hand combat your favorite thing?" His creepy smile and strange behavior made Hyung wonder if this guy was just some crazy teenager. Then, out of nowhere, Mu mimicked Hyung's fighting stance and launched himself forward. Hyung didn't take it seriously at all, thinking it was just a dumb copycat move. When Mu threw a punch, Hyung blocked it with his hand effortlessly, or so he thought. The force behind Mu's punch sent Hyung sliding backward, surprising him completely. His hand throbbed in pain from underestimating his opponent's strength. He couldn't believe how much power this seemingly weak and scrawny guy had. Meanwhile, Mu looked even more thrilled. His face lit up with excitement as he realized his attack had worked perfectly, just by copying what Hyung had done earlier. There was one thing Mu had to take into account. His current body wasn't something he could rely on just yet. When he tensed his muscles as hard as he could at the moment of impact, the strain left his arm muscles screaming in pain, like they wanted to quit and take a break. Of course, Mu didn't care about the state of his muscles or how much they were suffering. In fact, the more pain he endured, the more he enjoyed the fight. For him, it only made the battle even more satisfying. The thrill of this fight couldn't even compare to the feeling of battling creatures in his godly form. It was raw and exhilarating in a completely different way. Suddenly, to Hyung's surprise, Mu pulled off his belt and wrapped it around his fist. The fact that his current fragile body could cause trouble for him, especially since recovery and healing would take significantly longer, pushed him to come up with this idea. The beaten guy, still watching from the sidelines, thought using a belt made the fight unfair. But neither Mu nor Hyung cared about his opinion. Hyung rushed forward again, this time fully aware that he couldn't afford to underestimate Mu. He started throwing punches, left, right, one after another, trying to overwhelm him with speed and power. Mu managed to block most of the incoming strikes, but even so, he found himself in a pretty rough situation. His movements were limited by the pain in his body, and Hyung's attacks were relentless. In the middle of defending himself, Mu started analyzing his opponent's movements, only to realize they were fast and precise, but way too predictable. Just by observing Hyung's fighting style, Mu quickly began to anticipate his every move. At first, it was hard to figure out, but less than a minute into the fight, Mu was already dodging Hyung's attacks with ease. And if that wasn't enough, when Hyung tried to catch him off guard with a different move, Mu not only blocked the attack but also turned the tables by punching his arm mid-swing. It only took seconds for Hyung to process what had just happened and how his arm ended up broken. He began screaming as the shock wore off and the pain set in. Mu watched him silently, almost amused by the way Hyung reacted. The screaming made Mu wonder if Hyung and that guy from Lee's class were really cousins or something, as they seemed to share the same overly dramatic tendencies. Mu didn't waste much time though. He sealed his victory with another sudden punch to the distracted Hyung, knocking him out cold for a little while. The sight left his friend, or cousin, or whoever he was, completely stunned. Things went from bad to worse for him as Mu's face shifted into a scary, excited expression, practically radiating his eagerness to fight. He declared it was time to pay for all the trouble caused, especially since this wasn't the first time they'd messed with him. The once bully, the guy who had been so arrogant earlier, knew in that moment that with Hyung out of the picture, there was no one left to save him. He had no doubt that a painful fate awaited him now, and there was no escaping it. Mu slowly walked toward Lee's classmate to settle things for the day. As he got closer to the beaten-up guy, Mu noticed that the guy had no intention or will to fight back, and so there was no joy or honor in beating up someone acting so scared. The beaten-up guy, for a moment, noticed Mu's hesitation and thought that if he kept acting this way and just admitted he didn't want to fight anymore, everything might end peacefully. But it was too late to play the victim now. Before he even had the chance to say anything, Mu punched him in the face in one quick move. After all, this was the same guy who had started today's fight by throwing that small stone and bringing a boxer to take Mu down. He couldn't back out now, and even if he wanted to, Mu already had more than enough reason to beat him again. As expected, Mu didn't show a shred of mercy and kept hitting the guy however he wanted, testing out his new copied fighting techniques on his opponent's body one after another. Even as the guy's face and body were covered in bruises and blood, Mu wasn't satisfied. He finished it off with one final brutal knee strike straight to the guy's already battered face. After putting all his strength into making this an unforgettable day for that guy, Mu finally felt satisfied. He wondered, with a mocking tone in his mind, why the guy wouldn't just admit defeat, but deep down, Mu knew he hadn't given the poor guy even the slightest chance to do so. After finishing with both of them, Mu walked away, knowing he had other things to take care of. Not to mention, like all his previous opponents, he left his mark on that boxer and added him to his growing list of playthings. The beaten-up bully, on the other hand, after learning his painful lesson, was muttering Lee's name under his breath, calling him a crazy bastard. It wasn't long before Mu returned to Lee's house. Sitting on his bed, he felt great knowing everything was going exactly as he wanted, and he could enjoy fighting almost every day. However, just like before, his weak muscles and fragile bones that often gave him trouble, even breaking easily while defending himself, were annoying and a bit concerning. Still, in order to hold on to this feeling, a mix of fighting opponents stronger than him and experiencing the pain and recovery throughout his body, Mu decided he would do whatever it took. He decided to return to the God Realm first to see what was going on there and to get what he had asked the Dragonling to prepare for him. Like always, he focused and, while sitting, tried to leave Lee's body and return to his original form. But this time, unlike before when his soul would transfer instantly, several seconds passed and nothing happened. Mu slowly opened his eyes and squinted, glancing around, only to realize he was still in Lee's house. He couldn't help but wonder why he couldn't return to his body in the God Realm. The reason for this incident went back to a few days ago in Lucifer's domain. That was when Mu had forcefully thrown Lee onto Elmer's planet without Lucifer's permission. As we already know, in that day, Mu had completely ignored Lucifer and, without caring about his opinion, came and went as he pleased, unaware that his actions were pushing Lucifer to his limits. On his way back to his domain that day, the Dragonling had asked Mu about his journey to Earth. Mu explained how much he enjoyed it, but also mentioned the weakness of his new body. During that conversation, Mu had ordered his assistant to find a recovery magic orb for him while he was gone, hoping it would help his weak body on Earth recover faster. There was just one small problem. Magical items were common on Elmer and a few other planets under Lucifer's control. They were abundant in those worlds because of the plentiful mana there. Unlike Earth, where magical items and objects can only be obtained through divine blessings or whims, they are incredibly rare. Because of that, only a handful of people throughout human history have been able to use them. Naturally, those who could were often regarded as godlike beings by humans. Not long after, Mu arrived at his domain, where the dragonling had promised to find a recovery magic orb for him the next time he returned to the god realm. When Mu got off the dragon, his assistant reminded him once again about the upcoming gods meeting. That's when Mu casually searched in his pants, saying he had prepared something for him because of all the complaining. To the assistant's disbelief, it wasn't anything grand, just a small letter, and of course we already know what's written inside it. After delivering his message and doing what he considered his responsibility, Mu approached the miniature Earth model and placed his hand on its surface again to return to Li's body. The dragonling, clearly annoyed, angrily tried to convince him to at least wait and attend the meeting before leaving. But all the complaints fell on deaf ears as Mu completely ignored him, just like before, and transferred his soul back to Earth. Unbeknownst to both of them, a small demon hovered in the sky, silently observing and reporting every move to Mu's greatest enemy. The scene shifted back to the present, where Lucifer was analyzing the situation. He had no idea what Mu was up to, but he was certain his body was now empty of a soul. The fact that Mu hadn't shown up for the meeting made Lucifer realize he wouldn't be in the god's realm for a while. That's when it hit Lucifer, realizing the time has come to act. This was his chance, a once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity to finally get his revenge. There was no way he was going to miss it. Without any warning and determined to get rid of the one obstacle standing between him and Mu, Lucifer suddenly used his life taxidermy spell. As the spell activated, sharp purple lightning bolts, shaped like spears, appeared above the dragonling. But the dragonling's sharp senses didn't fail him. Not one to be caught off guard, he leaped back just in time, dodging every single spear-like attack in less than the blink of an eye. His previously awkward and ashamed expression quickly shifted to one of seriousness and readiness for battle. With a firm voice, he demanded an explanation. What's the meaning of this? He asked sharply. His eyes glowed with intensity as he pressed further, seeking confirmation. Lucifer, are you seriously declaring war against Mu, the god of Earth? Are you serious? Lucifer, now filled with confidence, knowing Mu wasn't around to interfere, floated slowly in midair. Then, with a booming voice, he declared that he would personally expel Mu from the seat of divinity. He knew exactly what those words meant, and he didn't hesitate to confirm it. It was an official declaration of war. The dragonling didn't waste any time. Without hesitation, he compressed his fiery breath and unleashed a deadly blast of flames that looked more like a laser, shooting straight toward Lucifer. At first, it seemed like Lucifer was caught off guard by the sudden attack, but even without expecting it, he effortlessly dodged it with ease. Strangely, instead of dissipating, the dragon's attack spun around the god's planet-like realm and exploded violently on the far side of it. The explosion was massive, so intense that the archer god had to quickly conjure a magical shield. First, he used it to protect himself, then extended it to shield the other gods attending the meeting. Unlike the others, Lucifer didn't flinch. He didn't move a muscle, not to run, not to shield himself, nothing. The waves and flames from the explosion, like the aftermath of a nuclear blast, soon reached the meeting, roaring toward them with unstoppable force. As expected from the gods, neither Lucifer or the dragonling, nor anyone else took any damage. Realizing his first deadly attack had been completely useless against Lucifer, the dragonling decided to use his ultimate move, polymorph release. The moment he activated it, his entire body began to transform. Not just his arms and legs, but every part of him started expanding. Wild red lightning crackled around him, and a fierce aura surrounded the dragon, making it clear just how serious he was about protecting his master. But even after such a legendary transformation, Lucifer wasn't the least bit impressed. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The demon god smirked and announced confidently, "I'll deal with you as Mu's little girl easily. Then, it'll be Mu's turn to pay for what he did to me." The dragon, however, had no intention of letting that happen. He was fully committed to defending his master, no matter what it cost him. But things didn't go as the dragon had planned. Mu's royal assistant was easily defeated by Lucifer, unable to even leave a scratch on him. His entire body was trapped in Lucifer's life taxidermy spell, leaving him immobile and badly injured. The archer god let out a sigh and decided to leave, casually stating that the atmosphere here wasn't suitable anymore for a proper godly meeting. Everyone else, however, was left frozen in shock, stunned by the aftermath of the battle between Lucifer and the dragonling. They were too scared to make a move, let alone help either side. The archer god's departure didn't escape Lucifer's notice. Suddenly, Lucifer called out to him and, with a piercing side glance, demanded to know whose side he was on, whether he supported the expulsion or opposed it. The archer god, however, just kept floating away, casually responding that he was neutral, neither supporting nor opposing. Lucifer didn't like the answer, but he made it clear he was fine with it, as long as the archer god didn't interfere. Then, turning to the rest of the gods, Lucifer coldly asked if anyone objected to Mu's expulsion. But after witnessing the dragonling's state, someone as powerful as a god utterly defeated, none of them dared to speak up. Meanwhile, the dragon was still alive, and tried to warn Lucifer, reminding him that he was no match for God Mu. But Lucifer just smirked and responded with a chilling revelation. He knew that Mu wasn't here and was instead living in a weak, pathetic human body on Earth. The dragonling was stunned. He hadn't expected Lucifer to know this secret, especially since he thought he was the only one aware of it. And in that moment, everything started to click. It all made sense now, why Lucifer had suddenly decided to rebel against Mu. Lucifer, however, didn't admit that he'd learned the secret by spying on God Mu. Instead, he shifted the blame onto the dragon, claiming that his overconfidence in his strength and lack of vigilance had given Lucifer the opportunity to figure it out. The dragonling couldn't stand to hear such disrespectful words. With no other options left, he decided to make one last desperate attempt to stop Lucifer. Using his massive tail, he launched a surprise attack, hoping to catch Lucifer off guard. But once again, things didn't go as he planned. Lucifer remained perfectly still, pretending not to notice until the very last second. Then, with precision and ease, he dodged the attack and slashed through the dragon's tail with a magical weapon. Whether it was a spear or a sword, it didn't even matter. Lucifer's power was undeniable. The poor dragon's tail was cut into several pieces, and there was a reason Lucifer didn't just finish him off. He knew that as long as Mu's assistant was alive, he could use him to find Mu on Earth. The thought of confronting him in that weak human body and making him suffer after all the humiliations Lucifer had endured filled him with satisfaction. His devilish laughter echoed in the air, while the dragonling coughed up blood repeatedly, his body trembling and powerless to do anything to stop Lucifer. Later that day on Earth, things weren't looking much better for Hyung. Covered in wounds, he was getting harshly scolded by his coach for getting into a street fight. To make things worse, he was being forced to take a long recovery break right before his important matches. After the lecture, his coach finally dismissed him, and as Hyung made his way out of the gym, he couldn't help but mentally blame Lee for the mess he was in. Just as he reached the exit door, Kang walked into the gym, leaving the two of them awkwardly face to face. Kang immediately noticed Hyung's beaten-up appearance and sour mood. Without hesitation, he asked what had happened to him and his hand. Hyung, feeling embarrassed, couldn't bring himself to admit that he'd been beaten by some random, weak-looking guy. Knowing that Kang was one of the best boxers in the country, a sneaky idea popped into Hyung's head. He lowered his bruised face, putting on a shameful and sad expression, and started lying about what had happened. To make it more convincing, he even forced himself to cry, letting tears fall onto the floor as he explained how he had stepped in to help his brother who was being bullied, only to have the bullies gang up on him and beat him mercilessly. He really went all out, crying like a little kid and covering his face, trying to look like an innocent victim who was just trying to do the right thing. To Hyung's surprise, Kang didn't seem moved at all. He simply ignored the tears and walked past him, casually reminding Hyung that he had no one to blame but himself. Kang told him he needed to be more careful, especially before his competitions, and walked away without another word. Seeing his plan fail, and with Kang now out of sight, Hyung immediately stopped crying, his face shifting to one of disappointment. But just as he turned to leave, he froze when Kang suddenly called out, "By the way!" For a moment, Hyung panicked, thinking Kang had seen right through him and realized the whole thing was a fake act. But to his surprise, it was the complete opposite. Kang actually believed him, and was now asking for the name of the person who had done this to him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Mu was still sitting on Lee's dirty bed. He couldn't stop thinking about why he couldn't return to his original body, his frustration and confusion growing by the second. Based on his divine knowledge and of course his experience, there could only be one reason why he wasn't able to return. It had to be that his body was seriously damaged. Even this reason didn't sit right with Mu. He was convinced that not only was a dragonling, someone as strong as a god, protecting him, but his godly body wasn't something that could be easily harmed. His eyes widened in shock as the realization hit him. He pieced the whole incident together and thought, what if all the gods joined forces to attack me? That seemed to make the most sense. He suddenly jumped out of the bed, panicked. If his theory was right, he didn't have time to waste. He needed to act fast. But try as he might, he couldn't think of anything to do, and that only made him angrier. Frustrated, he punched Lee's pillow to release his anger. The thought that things could spiral out of control if he didn't return to his body made him feel even worse. The idea that those gods, who wouldn't dare face him one-on-one, were now cowardly taking advantage of his situation was unbearable. Unable to hold back his fury, Mu started punching the bed and the pillow repeatedly. In his mind, he wished for just one chance to turn the tables and teach all those cowardly gods a lesson. If he got that chance, he vowed to make stew out of the lot of them. Finally, after a few minutes of messing around, he got tired and stopped punching. He realized it was better to calm down and think things through. He reminded himself that the dragonling, his protector, wasn't someone who'd go down easily, even if all the gods teamed up against him. That thought helped God Mu calm down a little. He started to think, if I can't do anything about my original body right now, I might as well focus on this one. At least it'll give me a better chance of staying alive. With that in mind, he headed back to the training area. This time he was putting his full effort into strengthening the rest of his body, ignoring his arm muscles for the moment. Training his abdominal muscles for the first time made Mu feel like they were screaming in pain. But oddly enough, that pain made the training more enjoyable for him. While he was hanging and pulling himself up, the more pain he felt, the louder he laughed. He laughed so hard it echoed around the place. Of course, his obnoxious laughter made everyone around him think he was some crazy, creepy kid. Just hearing and seeing him annoyed them to no end. In the middle of his intense training, someone suddenly called his name. The unexpected voice startled Mu, causing him to lose focus and fall straight to the ground with a loud thud. The person who called him was none other than the girl from before, Lee's class president. She was clearly annoyed, but not because of Mu's loud noises. No, she was upset because Lee hadn't shown up to school for several days. To avoid making a scene, they decided to have their conversation somewhere calmer. They found a bench in a quiet corner and sat down. Mu started the conversation, casually saying, "Why would I need to go to school? It's not exactly a place where I can train my body." Hearing this, the girl frowned and asked, "Why does he want to train all the time anyway?" Mu shrugged and replied simply, "I train to get stronger, that's it." The class president tilted her head and asked, "And why do you want to get stronger?" Mu grinned and said, "To fight better and take on bigger opponents, of course. My body's too weak right now, and that makes everything harder." From there, Mu launched into an excited rant, rambling on about his reasons for fighting and training. He talked for hours, barely stopping to breathe. The girl had no choice but to sit there and listen to his endless nonsense. By the time the sun was starting to set, she still hadn't managed to convince Mu, to come back to school. She was running out of ideas, but then, suddenly, an idea clicked in her mind. Casually, as if it were no big deal, she said, "What's the point of training so hard if there's no one to fight you?" Her words hung in the air, catching Mu completely off guard. To make his point clear, he asked Lee to take a look around, pointing out that there's no one here who could challenge him, no matter how strong he gets. The girl stood up and, as she started to leave, said, "All you have to do is come to school, meet some people, and start some conflict. Then, you'll have plenty of people to fight." With that, she walked off, leaving the boy to think it over. As she left, Mu couldn't help but feel a little impressed by her reasoning. She had a point. After what he did to those poor bullies, they wouldn't dare come near him again. And without them, he needed to find someone stronger to fight if he wanted to improve and make this body stronger. For the first time, he actually considered going to school. Just as he was mulling it over, a shadowy figure appeared behind him and called out, asking if he was Lee Ho. The figure was wearing a mask to hide his identity and carrying a weapon. Mu, on the other hand, didn't bother answering the question. He already knew what this was about. His shocked expression shifted into one of relief. Things were going much easier than he had expected. Now, he didn't even need to search for his next opponent, as his opponent had come straight to him. With a small smirk, Mu simply turned his head, calmly preparing himself for the inevitable first strike and the confirmation of battle. It was obvious that the masked guy was Kang Cheol, but there was something about Kang that set him apart from the other bullies Mu had faced. Years ago, when he was just 15 and starting to excel in boxing, his sister had become a promising rookie ballerina. As her only family, Kang supported her in every way he could, mentally, emotionally, and however else he was able to help. Everything was going well until she caught the attention of a creepy stalker. Soon the man's obsession grew worse with each passing day, until one day, he completely lost control and crossed the red line. He secretly followed her, and when she turned into a quiet alley, he decided to make his move to carry out his sick intentions. Luckily, Kang happened to be nearby and saw what was going on. Before the stalker could harm his sister, Kang jumped in and, with a surprise attack, managed to stop him before any damage was done. The police were called and the stalker was arrested, but because Kang had stepped in before anything illegal actually happened, there wasn't enough evidence to punish him properly. The man was released not long after, but his obsession had now reached a dangerous peak. It had turned into madness, mixed with a thirst for revenge. Before long, the creepy man found the girl again, this time in another quiet spot. But now, he had brought along a kitchen knife, clearly planning something much more cruel. However, Kang showed up once again, seemingly out of nowhere, and stopped the crime. But this time he wasn't fast enough. His sister's leg was badly injured, and her future as a ballerina was shattered, like a swan with broken wings. Kang blamed the law for failing to protect her, and from that day on, he decided he couldn't trust it anymore. Instead, he vowed to do whatever he thought was right. His first act? Beating that creepy man within an inch of his life. But that was just the beginning. Kang resolved to handle what the law couldn't. Whenever he came across a suspicious gang or someone who looked like they were about to bully or harm others for no reason, Kang would step in. He'd give them a warning, not with words, but with a not-so-gentle move using his new favorite weapon. Fate turned Kang into an anti-bully vigilante, someone who saw fighting not as violence, but as judgment. And so, the reason he came after Mu wasn't much different. Back to the present, Mu stood there, accepting Kang's preemptive punch without any resistance. Even though he got hit with a surprise attack from behind, something that could have easily knocked him out, Mu quickly realized it was just a light punch, nothing like the heavy blows he was used to as a first strike. He couldn't help but wonder if Kang just wanted to test his reflexes, or if the punch was meant as some kind of warning. Either way, Mu didn't care. All he needed was confirmation to start the fight, and now he had it. As usual, Mu wasn't exactly dissatisfied about being in another fight, completely clueless that this opponent wasn't going to be as easy as the others. Kang, however, didn't rush to begin the fight officially. He hesitated, surprised by the fact that Mu wasn't running around beating people up for fun like he'd been told. Kang had no idea it was all a lie made up by Hyung to impress him. Mu, on the other hand, had no interest in explaining himself or clearing up the misunderstanding. He casually ignored Kang's questions and told him to stop wasting time with small talk and do something already. That, of course, hit a nerve with Kang and only made him believe Hyung's story even more, further convincing him that Mu really was as crazy as he'd heard. Kang did exactly what Mu asked for. He dashed forward and started trying to beat him up without wasting any time. Mu, however, stayed on guard and prepared to defend himself, like he was a pro boxer or something. Kang didn't hold back, throwing punch after punch, but surprisingly, Mu dodged every single one of them. With each dodge, Mu's confidence grew bit by bit. Seeing this, Kang quickly realized that his opponent wasn't just all talk like other bullies. He actually knew a thing or two about fighting. So, Kang decided to step it up a notch and use one of his boxing tricks. He threw a light right punch to block Mu's vision, planning to catch him off guard and land a heavy strike using the opening. But to Kang's surprise, Mu had already anticipated the move and blocked it too. For Kang, though, this was just a warm-up. It felt like he'd found the perfect punching bag to practice on. He started throwing punches again, but this time, Mu could clearly feel the difference in power compared to the earlier strikes. As expected from a champion boxer, Kang used his skills and experience to keep the pressure on, refusing to give Mu even a moment to catch his breath. Punch after punch came at him, relentless and powerful. On the other hand, Mu was completely cornered and couldn't do much. Kang was relentlessly targeting Mu's weak spots, making it almost impossible for him to focus on the fight. Things got even worse when Kang found an opening and landed a bone-crushing punch to Mu's side. The pain hit him instantly. It was like getting kicked in the balls twice in a row. Kang backed off for a moment, letting Mu deal with the sharp pain in his side, but not without making a point. He coldly mentioned that he was deliberately going after Mu's weak and injured spots because, in his judgment, unworthy people didn't deserve any mercy. But instead of being scared, impressed, or even angry, Mu, still struggling with his pain, started laughing. That laugh threw Kang off for a moment, but then it got under his skin. He couldn't believe Mu's reaction and it made him furious, pushing him to become even more ruthless than before. Meanwhile, Mu had already figured out the massive gap between Kang's strength and his own. It was painfully clear. This guy was on a completely different level than him with Lee's body. Mu knew he couldn't beat Kang in raw power, but as someone obsessed with fighting, giving up wasn't an option. Admitting defeat wasn't in his nature. Facing a stronger opponent who didn't fight fair, Mu realized he'd have to play by the same rules. He just needed to focus, stay sharp, and wait for the right opening. As someone with thousands of years of battle experience, he quickly recalled one of his fights that felt eerily similar to his current situation. It was one of those rare, 1-in-1,000 battles where Mu was nearly overpowered. Even in those painful moments, he never regretted fighting. He always felt a strange satisfaction from the thrill of it. But back then, it wasn't just about enjoying the fight or even the pain. Mu wanted to win, no matter what. So, he forced himself to calm down, shutting off all his emotions. For a brief moment, the creepy grin disappeared from his bruised, ugly face as he started to carefully analyze his opponent's movements. When another punch was about to come straight for his face, Mu made a move. Using his dirty, torn cloak, he distracted his opponent just enough to create an opening for himself. The more Mu thought and used his tiny, bird-sized brain, the smarter and more dangerous he became. Back then, he managed to capitalize on that opening and landed several direct hits on the giant monster he was fighting. But to his disappointment, his attacks didn't seem to have much of an effect. That thing was on a whole different level than him. Despite knowing he was outmatched, Mu didn't stop. He kept using his small brain to find openings while keeping his emotions in check, refusing to give in or give up. Mu was defeated that day and somehow managed to survive, but even in those agonizing moments, he couldn't help but enjoy the thrill of slipping through it. The situation now wasn't much different, so Mu decided to use the same strategy, shutting down his emotions and using his brain to try and win. If that didn't work, well, then he could at least enjoy getting beaten up. His first move was to shut off his emotions and put on a sullen expression, but since he had no clue how Lee's face would look after suppressing his feelings, he just forced himself to improvise for the time being. His new expression, combined with his already ugly face, irritated Kang more than ever. It pushed Kang to the peak of his anger, as he thought Mu was mocking him on purpose. This time, Kang charged at him, determined to finish it once and for all with his raw power. Mu, however, acted like he was just fooling around, pretending to be completely unaware of what was coming his way. As Kang kept moving forward, throwing punches wildly, Mu stepped back, dodging the attacks as best as he could. It didn't take long before his back hit a tree, making him realize he needed to switch tactics. Suddenly, an idea popped into his head. He dug his foot into the ground and, with a quick motion, kicked dirt up as fast as he could. Some of it managed to hit Kang's face, but since Kang was wearing protective glasses and quickly shielded his face with his hands, it didn't do much damage. Instead, it only confirmed Kang's suspicion that Mu was a criminal who deserved a beating. All of a sudden, Mu lowered his head, causing Kang to hesitate for a moment, but it was all an act. Mu smirked and taunted him, asking if he'd stopped attacking because he was scared. The jab hit its mark, and Kang's temper skyrocketed, giving him all the motivation he needed to keep going. Without hesitation, Kang launched another attack. However, Mu, with his goofy-looking face, was surprisingly ready this time and dodged the punch with ease. But Kang wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily. With a sudden move, Kang appeared behind Mu, trying to attack from his blind spot, but once again, Mu managed to dodge it. This time, though, Kang's fist grazed Mu's chin, causing a little damage. But it wasn't something Mu even cared about, because he was convinced his plan was working. Kang couldn't focus like before. It didn't take long for Mu to notice one of the biggest differences between Kang and the other two opponents he had fought earlier. Kang's fighting style was far more aggressive, unlike their defensive approach. In Mu's opinion, except skill and ability, the ground was the key reason for this difference. That also explained the real purpose behind throwing dirt earlier, not to actually hit Kang's protected face, but to scatter dirt and small rocks on the ground, creating countless obstacles that made it harder for Kang to move freely. Kang's aggressive fighting style, fueled by Mu's mocking behavior, made his moves predictable and easier to block with minimal effort. Everything was falling into place according to Mu's plan. After struggling to keep up and getting beaten earlier, Mu was now managing to dodge Kang's attacks again. But dodging wasn't his ultimate goal. He was trying to force Kang to move around recklessly, increasing the chances of him stepping on the scattered dirt and small rocks, eventually losing his balance. Soon, Mu got exactly what he was waiting for. Kang stepped on a small rock, lost his focus, and gave Mu the perfect opening. Wasting no time, Mu jumped into action, knowing he couldn't afford to miss this chance to turn the fight in his favor. He aimed for a vital spot, but mid-air, he realized his arm wasn't responding, probably from all the strikes he had blocked earlier. Still, he didn't let that stop him and used his elbow instead, landing a heavy blow. For a moment, Mu wondered why his arm had suddenly stopped working and forced him to use his elbow, but it didn't matter much. The elbow strike turned out to be way stronger than any punch he could have thrown. Kang's glasses shattered, and he was left stunned, completely caught off guard. Naturally, Mu couldn't resist using this moment to get under Kang's skin again. He started mocking him, throwing insults and making fun of how easily he'd been hit. But then something went wrong. Mu was so caught up in planning his next move and taunting Kang that he failed to notice what was happening in the moment. While Mu was busy mocking him, Kang had used his weapon and crushed Mu's leg. It didn't take long for Mu to feel the unbearable pain. He dropped to his knees, stunned, as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. Kang, now standing tall, rested his weapon on his shoulder, smirking. It was his turn to mock Mu. "What's the matter? Want to laugh and mess around now? Or is this not so funny anymore?" Kang had had enough of Mu. No one had ever annoyed him this much. so much so that he decided to break Mu's jaw, making sure he would never laugh again. Mu was still on his knees, unable to move even an inch to dodge or defend himself. Just before the blow landed, Mu realized something. He had lost. Mu closed his eyes, bracing himself for the hit, while his thoughts drifted. He wondered if, after nearly 4,000 years, he was finally going to taste failure again, and Kang was ready to remind him what that bitter moment felt like. But just a split second before Kang's strike could crush Mu's head, something, a piece of rock maybe, came flying out of nowhere and hit Kang directly in the face. The impact was so sudden that it made Kang stumble, and the object disappeared, rolling into the trees in an instant. Whatever it was, it stopped Kang's attack and saved Mu. Now distracted, Kang quickly looked around, trying to figure out who had thrown it. Things got even more complicated when he heard a faint, weak voice calling out, "Master," and getting closer. Kang's instincts kicked in. As someone who took pride in hunting bullies from the shadows, he couldn't risk being seen. Without wasting any time, Kang grabbed his sweatshirt, threw it on, pulling the hood over his head, and dashed away before anyone could appear and see his face. As soon as Kang disappeared, a small creature that looked like a monster appeared from behind and, with a trembling voice, called out, "Master!" Mu turned his gaze to see who was calling him, and to his surprise, it was a small, lizard-like creature with horns. As someone who had once raised that lizard to a dragon and made it worthy of being his assistant, Mu recognized it immediately, despite how different it looked now from a dragon. With no one else around to cause trouble, Mu and the dragonling headed back to Li's house. Once they were settled, the dragonling began explaining everything about Mu's current situation in the god's realm and his own story, that how ended up on Earth with this body. According to him, after his defeat against Lucifer, Lucifer found Mu's godly body and trapped it in an unbreakable, impenetrable barrier that separated time and space. This made it impossible for Mu's soul to return to his body. To ensure no one interfered with his plans, Lucifer took Mu's body to his own domain, where he kept a close watch on it. A satisfied smile was always on Lucifer's face, knowing that, without his body, Mu couldn't do much against him. However, there was one small problem. Lucifer couldn't enter Earth to finish him off so easily. There was only one way for him to do so. He had to convince the dragonling to reveal how he could access or enter Mu's planet. Lucifer also brought the defeated dragon to his domain, promising him that if he cooperated and helped him get to Earth to get rid of Mu, he would make the dragon the new god of Earth in Mu's place. Lucifer was confident that this offer might tempt Mu's assistant into betraying him for the chance to gain power. The dragonling, however, didn't give a clear response. Instead, he whispered something so quietly that Lucifer couldn't make out what he was saying. Annoyed, Lucifer demanded that he speak louder, at least enough for him to hear his answer. Finally, the dragonling spoke up, but instead of answering directly, he pointed at the barrier around Mu. He asked Lucifer if the barrier, which could block time and space, could also stop attacks from passing through it. Lucifer assumed the dragonling was asking because he wanted to rescue Mu, so he confidently assured him that no attack could harm or penetrate the barrier. He even emphasized how invincible it was and told the dragonling to just give up and consider joining his side instead. But then something strange happened. Lucifer noticed the surroundings were starting to get brighter. Suspicious, he turned to see what was going on, and what he saw made him freeze. The dragonling's injured body was glowing with a golden light, crackling with energy. At first, Lucifer was shocked, trying to figure out what the dragonling was planning. But his shock quickly turned to fear when the dragonling suddenly shouted, "Massive self-explosion!" In that moment, before Lucifer could react, the roof of his castle, the very place he used as the base to control his domain, was completely shattered. But in the next second, his entire castle was obliterated, disappearing like it had been hit by a nuclear bomb. And yet, that wasn't even the craziest part. The explosion was so massive that it burned an entire side of the god's realm to ashes. The dragonling had used 99% of his strength for that explosion, and as a result, he reverted to his smallest, weakest form, a tiny lizard. Covered in smoke and dust, he did his best to make a run for it before Lucifer realized what had happened. Knowing there was nowhere safe for him anymore, the poor lizard had only one place to go, back to his master on Earth. But Lucifer wasn't about to let him escape that easily. Emerging from the dust, furious and betrayed, Lucifer stormed after him, clearly angry enough to turn the lizard into stew for what he saw as an abuse of his kindness. The dragonling sprinted as fast as he could, desperate to stay out of Lucifer's reach. But before he could make it, Lucifer summoned a magical spear and hurled it at him with all his might. The little dragonling, now missing part of his tail, was only a few meters away from Mu's throne and the gateway to Earth. Despite everything, the magical spear missed him, and he managed to leap onto Mu's throne, then onto the miniature Earth's surface, vanishing from godly domain and reappearing in Earth's sky. Completely drained of energy, Mu's poor assistant didn't even care where or how he was going to land. He simply closed his eyes and let fate decide for him. And, as it turned out, fate had chosen him to be his master's savior. The object that had hit Kang's face earlier, stopping him from landing the final blow, was none other than this tiny, exhausted lizard. That was everything he could remember, and Mu, after hearing the Dragonling's explanation about everything that had happened, fell deep into thought. His now small assistant couldn't help but wonder if something was wrong, but as expected, Mu wasn't sad. He was furious. Furious enough at Lucifer that, if he ever got the chance to return to his original body, he wouldn't let Lucifer live another second. All of a sudden, Mu's expression shifted from anger to excitement as he realized he finally had a chance to fight Lucifer again, a proper, all-out battle. Even the little one, his assistant, after all these years wasn't used to how quickly Mu's attitude and emotions could change, so he was a bit startled by it. Mu sprang out of Lee's bed, buzzing with excitement, finding yet another purpose to keep going, but deep down, he knew he stood no chance against Lucifer in this body. The only option was to work harder and make Lee's body stronger. However, Lee's weak, battered body was in such bad shape that even throwing a light punch at the air made him feel like everything was breaking. Mu couldn't help but wish this new body could heal faster. Then, it hit him. He had told Dragonling to find a magical orb for him the last time they met. Turning to the small lizard, he asked, almost hopelessly, if there was any chance he got that and had brought it back to Earth. To his surprise, Dragonling had actually brought the magic orb, or at least that's what it claimed. Since he didn't have anything like a pocket or bag to carry it, the little lizard had been hiding the orb deep in his stomach. Now, at Mu's request, he slowly began to cough it up. But because the orb was bigger than the lizard itself, Mu's assistant struggled a bit to deliver it to his god. Once he finally finished, Dragonling explained that it was a dragon bloodstone infused with a one-time healing spell. The little lizard apologized for only bringing one, saying he was in a hurry, and of course, he couldn't carry more. Mu didn't wait for his assistant's saliva to dry and immediately picked it up to take a closer look. As soon as he held it in his hand, he thanked Dragonling and told him this orb would be more than enough for now. Without hesitation, Mu activated the orb, releasing its healing effect immediately, making it to shrink in size simultaneously. Only a few moments later, Mu's body was surrounded by a green aura radiating from the orb, and his wounds started healing instantly. But that wasn't even the best part. Mu suddenly noticed something surprising. The orb's effect wasn't just limited to healing. He could feel his muscles becoming more responsive, almost sensitive in a way they weren't before. There was only one explanation. The orb must have also been infused with a body enhancement spell, which was visibly improving Lee's weak body. Noticing Mu's impressed reaction, Dragonling proudly admitted that he'd personally put effort into it and infused his own magic into the dragon bloodstone. Mu appreciated it as he stared at the leftover remains of the orb, thinking that it must be because it was used on a weak human body. Not all of its power had been consumed, which explained the leftover fragment. He handed it to the little lizard, giving him permission to use it for himself. However, Dragonling didn't want to waste it on himself. Instead, he decided to store it for Mu to use later in case of an emergency. Just like before, he carefully pushed it back to its resting place, deep inside his stomach. The scene suddenly shifted to a rare yellow lizard on the other side of the city. Surprisingly, it was the favorite pet of the girl from earlier. She didn't see it as just an animal. It was one of her closest friends. She even wished it could talk so that neither of them would ever get bored. Not long after, she stopped playfully annoying her pet and returned it to its cozy home. She needed to head out, likely to school. Since pets weren't allowed there, she needed to leave it behind to live its own life for a while. Peace returned to her home as she attempted to leave, but that day, life at school was no different. Everything seemed calm and peaceful. No one was bossing others around or causing any trouble. Even the beaten-up bully from before was quietly sitting at his desk. Now wearing glasses, he was fully focused on his studies. The pain he had endured after facing Mu had knocked some sense into him. Instead of wasting his time, he was now preparing for exams, determined to turn things around. Everything was fine until Mu decided to make one of his usual over-the-top, dramatic entrances into the classroom. The moment he walked in, he noticed the beaten-up guy and, without hesitation, asked if he wanted to go for another round of fighting. It wasn't clear if Mu was just messing with him or being completely serious, but before he could get an answer, the president girl appeared behind him, acting all surprised to see that Lee had actually decided to show up at school after being absent for so long. Mu, with the little lizard crawling under his shirt and causing a slight commotion, casually replied that he was only here because she had convinced him earlier. Of course, he added that the only reason he came was to look for someone to fight and beat to death. His intimidating expression and choice of words made the girl wonder what kind of chaos he was planning to stir up this time. But since there didn't seem to be any immediate signs of trouble, she just wished him good luck. Half of the day passed, and nothing exciting happened to make Mu's day interesting. On the floor below his class, two students were chatting about the recent events at school. Those two happened to be Kang and a girl from his class. Since he always seemed so clueless about anything going on at school, the girl was filling Kang in about the second-year student who had recently been humiliated. She explained the details with a bit of gossiping flair, while Kang listened with mild curiosity, still trying to piece together what had been happening around him. As the school day came to an end, Kang and the girl began walking toward the exit, with her eagerly explaining everything she'd heard in detail. According to the rumors and what she knew, the nerdy guy, who used to get bullied all the time, had one day turned the tables on his tormentor. He beat the bully so badly that the guy lost consciousness and had to be rushed to the hospital. If that wasn't shocking enough, the nerd had supposedly ripped off the bully's ear in a wild move, earning him the nickname Neutered from then on. Kang had no idea at first that she was talking about Lee, but as she described the incident, along with Hyung's appearance, especially his ripped-off ear and Mu's suspicious behavior, Kang quickly pieced it all together. There was a high chance that the nerdy guy she was talking about and Lee were the same person. It suddenly hit Kang. Hyung's crocodile tears and his whole act of pretending to be a victim had been a ploy to manipulate him into taking action. But since it was all in the past and there was nothing he could do about it now, Kang decided to let it go, at least for the time being. On his way back home, what Kang didn't realize was that he was taking the same path as Mu. Mu, meanwhile, was feeling disappointed and frustrated that his day had turned out to be so dull. Everyone at school had been too busy scribbling away on their notebooks or phones, and there hadn't been a single invitation to fight, or even the confirmation of one. Just as Mu was about to sink further into hopelessness, something caught his eye. It was Kang, of course, awkwardly walking and looking visibly embarrassed as he chatted with his female friend. Since Kang was wearing glasses and a mask to hide his face yesterday, Mu didn't recognize him right away, but something about him felt oddly familiar. His hair color, height, and build seemed similar, but his muscle size and its form was the one that sparked Mu's suspicion. In just a second, that suspicion turned into certainty. He completely lost control and shouted, "It's that guy from yesterday!" His loud voice and sudden outburst, of course, caught Kang's attention. Kang turned his head, and the moment he did, he saw Mu charging toward him with a crazed look on his face. Without thinking twice, Kang bolted, running as fast as he could, leaving his shocked friend behind. As Kang sprinted away, he couldn't stop wondering how Mu had recognized him. He was sure the expensive mask and glasses he'd bought were enough to hide his identity, so why was this lunatic chasing after him? Kang couldn't come up with an answer, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let himself get caught. The last thing he wanted was for this crazy guy to report him to the police or something equally disastrous. Desperate to escape, Kang decided to make an unpredictable move. He spotted an alley up ahead and, without hesitation, veered off his path, jumping straight into it in hopes of losing Mu. Mu kept chasing after him, determined not to let Kang get away so easily. But as he turned into the alley, Kang was nowhere to be found. It was like he had vanished into thin air. Mu had been looking forward to using this perfect chance to fight Kang, but his hopes were crushed when he realized he was gone. Dragonling popped out of Mu's shirt, asking if that was the same guy who had dared to challenge his lord yesterday. Wanting to help his god track down the rude human, the little lizard requested permission to sniff him out using the strong male scent he had picked up when Kang hit him the day before. Mu gave him the green light, and Dragonling immediately sprang into action, sniffing around like a well-trained puppy. Just as Mu's assistant was fully committing to his new role, someone suddenly appeared right in front of him, stopping him in his tracks. Lucky enough not to get stomped on, the little lizard tilted his head up to see who it was. To his surprise, it wasn't Kang at all, but the president girl from Lee's class. She stood there, stunned, staring at him with wide eyes. Her shock didn't last long, though. It quickly shifted to a delighted blush as she looked at the adorable little lizard. Clearly, it was her first time seeing something so cute, and she couldn't help but be intrigued. The Dragonling had no idea who this girl even was, unaware of the fact that unlike other humans, she actually loved lizards more than anything else. Without thinking about himself that he was a demigod and wasn't supposed to be seen by humans, he casually told the girl to step aside so he could finish his task. Things didn't go as he expected. The girl, completely ignoring what he said, fearlessly scooped up the little lizard in her hands like it was a stuffed toy. The Dragonling was totally caught off guard and struggled to wriggle free from her grip. Frustrated and feeling helpless, he snapped at her, giving an angry warning, reminding her that he wasn't someone she could just mess with or be rude to. For a brief moment, he wished he had even a tiny bit of his magic left to launch a spell and escape. But while the Dragonling saw this girl as a nuisance, maybe even an enemy, the girl didn't feel the same. In fact, she found him absolutely fascinating. Despite his strange and unique appearance, she couldn't believe she was holding a talking lizard in her hands. To her, he was the cutest, most adorable thing she'd ever seen, so much so that she instantly liked him even more than her own beloved pet, the one she'd always cherished above everything else. Suddenly, the dragonling spotted an opening and bolted, freeing himself and darting behind his lord for safety. Hiding behind Lee's body, he quickly apologized to God Mu for failing because of the girl, blaming it on the fact that he'd lost all his power. Before Mu could even respond, the girl approached him with a serious expression, one that looked downright terrifying to the little lizard. She asked if, by any chance, that tiny creature was his friend. Mu glanced at his visibly shaken assistant and somehow confirmed it by saying, "Friend? Not sure about that, but yes, that little one is my obedient assistant." The girl finally introduced herself as Kim Yujin, though it was obvious she was jealous. Jealous that Mu had such an obedient, talking, and, let's be real, adorable lizard. Her expression was so easy for Mu to read, and though he wasn't entirely sure why she looked so stunned and envious, an idea popped into his head. With a sudden and unexpected move, Mu shifted his leg, the one the dragonling was clutching onto for dear life, closer to the girl and said, "If you want, I could lend him to you for a bit, in exchange for a little information." Of course, the poor dragonling's opinion didn't matter to Mu in the slightest. And Yujin? She lit up at the offer. Obviously, she would do anything to hold the lizard for a while. Giving up some information was the smallest price for her to pay. Without waiting for her to respond, Mu reached down, grabbed the dragonling by the neck, and handed him over to her. "Take him. You can keep him as long as you like, but there's someone you have to help me find." Kim was so mesmerized by the lizard that she didn't hesitate to agree, not even stopping to ask if they were tracking down a criminal, a good person, or something else entirely, and of course, that was exactly what Mu wanted to see. Without a second thought, and as if he didn't care about his assistant at all, he casually tossed the little lizard toward her. To Kim's surprise, the poor thing spun midair and landed right on top of her head. The dragonling couldn't help but wonder how his lord could abandon him so easily, like he was nothing. Meanwhile, Mu didn't waste a moment. He started walking off, telling the dragonling to stay with Kim Yujin for a while and return on his own later. Still in shock, the dragonling tried to ask where his master was planning to go without him, but Mu just ignored him completely, acting like he'd suddenly found something exciting to do after what had been a dull day. Not long after, Kim and the dragonling arrived at her house, and things were, well, a little awkward. Kim couldn't help but wonder if the lizard was mad at her for being dragged along against his will, and truthfully, he wasn't thrilled about the situation. But since he couldn't defy his lord's orders, he sighed and introduced himself. After a moment, he stretched out his tiny hand and, trying to keep things professional, explained the situation to Kim. "As per my master's instructions," he said, "you'll be actively cooperating with me from now on." Kim was momentarily taken aback at the sight of a tiny lizard trying to boss her around, but the way he acted, and the fact that she could say or do whatever she wanted with him, made her heart skip a beat for a second. Still, she didn't want to come off as rude, so she placed her fingers on the dragonling's tiny hand and gave it a little shake to show respect. As she did, she asked, "By your master, do you mean Li Ho?" The dragonling didn't respond, but his silence seemed to confirm her guess. Taking that as her answer, Kim nodded and said she was willing to cooperate with him if that's what he wanted. Then, with a proud grin, she announced her position. "By the way, I'm the president of my class." The dragonling blinked, completely confused. "What's a president?" he asked, tilting his little head. Seeing his puzzled reaction, Kim chuckled and explained, "It means I'm like the leader of my class, and besides that, I'm also ranked first in my grade." Hearing this, the dragonling's eyes widened in realization. "Ah, so that's why my master chose this girl, because she's an important person." But as this thought settled in his mind, another realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. If this girl was the leader of her class, then that meant my lord wasn't the leader. Unable to hold back his curiosity, the dragonling asked, "Wait, does that mean Lord Li Ho isn't the leader of your class?" Kim paused for a moment, her expression shifting as she got lost in thought. After a few seconds, she finally replied, "Li Ho? He's not even an average student in our class. Honestly, he's one of the lowest in everything." The dragonling froze, utterly stunned by her answer. For a moment, he just stood there, trying to process the shocking information. The moment Mu's assistant realized what she said, he shouted in disbelief, thinking Kim was talking about Mu himself. The idea seemed completely impossible to him. To clear up what he assumed was a misunderstanding, the tiny lizard, now sweating with both discomfort and frustration, without mentioning Mu's name, firmly declared that his master was the strongest being in the entire world, stronger than any god. The dragonling, acting as if he were still in his terrifying dragon form, started bossing Kim around again. He demanded that she do her absolute best to help his master become even stronger so he could finally get his revenge. Kim, on the other hand, was impressed by what she assumed was the little lizard's wild imagination and sweet talks about Lee. Amused, she agreed to help, but only on one condition. Dragonling should accept to visit her often if he wanted her help. The Dragonling paused for a moment, considering her condition. In truth, he had already planned to use Kim as a human source to gather information about what was happening on Earth, and now her condition was the perfect excuse to visit her more often and get the intel he needed. Without hesitation, he agreed to her terms, and the two of them struck a deal. As the most loyal servant who had sacrificed his life countless times for his lord, the Dragonling was determined to do whatever it took to help his master reclaim the title of the strongest. Deep in his heart, he believed every move he made would bring his master closer to his rightful place at the top. At this time, Mu, who was also focused on getting stronger, was busy doing some intense, borderline crazy training with his newly strengthened body. Unlike before, when he struggled with even the simplest exercises, now he could handle everything with ease, like it was no big deal. As the sun began to set, Mu decided he'd done enough for the day. Jumping down from where he had been training, he glanced at his body, visibly satisfied with his newfound strength. Not only had he recovered much faster than he'd hoped, but his physical strength had almost doubled. Like always, almost like it was a habit, he decided to show his excitement by swinging a punch. But this time, instead of throwing a random punch into the air, he confidently aimed at an iron rod nearby. The results were better than he could have imagined. Not only did he not break any bones, but for the first time, he didn't even feel pain in his hand. For a moment, he was thrilled with himself. But then, his happy expression quickly faded into disappointment as he remembered why he had come all the way out here in the first place. He had hoped to see Kang, in addition to squeezing in some training. Now that the sun was almost gone, Mu figured it was better to head back. He realized there might be a better chance of running into Kang at school in the next few days anyway. With that thought in mind, he decided to call it a day and leave. Mu left the training spot, leaving behind a reminder mark there, forever. As he walked through the streets, the disgusting smell of his sweat clung to the air around him. Luckily, no one was nearby to catch a whiff of the unpleasant stench. But as Mu unintentionally reached Kim's neighborhood, his sweaty scent had gotten so strong that it seeped through the air and hit Dragonling's sharp senses. The tiny lizard, who was busy using the girl and her PC to gather information, froze the moment the smell hit him. As expected from a dragon with sharp senses, he recognized it instantly. Without wasting a second, Dragonling jumped down and left the girl behind to enjoy her peace and quiet. "Thanks a lot," he called out, waving as he dashed off. Now, acting more like an excited puppy than a dragon, Dragonling followed the scent trail, leaping from rooftops to walls in search of his master. It didn't take long for his keen nose to lead him straight to Mu. With one final leap, he dashed to the edge of a building and jumped right onto Mu's shoulder, landing perfectly in place. Mu was a little surprised to see him. The Dragonling greeted him and then proudly announced that he had completed what he thought was his mission. Neither of them realized that, in a nearby alley, someone was being beaten up. The Dragonling was thrilled that he had found a royal assistant for himself, one who promised loyalty to Mu too, but his excitement only distracted Mu, causing him to miss what was happening nearby as they walked past. However, after taking a few steps away, the Dragonling's sharp nose picked up something familiar. It was a scent that belonged to the guy he had been chasing earlier. The little lizard was right. It was Kang, acting like Batman and beating someone up in the shadows. But this time, the guy getting beaten wasn't just some bully or thug. He had stolen a bicycle. Instead of apologizing, the thief started threatening Kang, saying he'd send someone after him if Kang didn't let him go right away. As expected, that only confirmed for Kang that he had picked the right target, so he doubled down. Kang was so focused on dealing with the thief that he didn't realize Mu had appeared behind him, looking thrilled to have found him again. But it didn't last long. Kang quickly felt the danger behind him and turned to see who was secretly watching him. As soon as he spun around, he realized it was the same weird boy from the other day, the one who, despite admitting defeat, just wouldn't leave him alone. Everything seemed tense and on edge, except for the little Dragonling, who was facing the other way and clinging to Mu, insisting they were going the wrong way. The Dragonling kept pointing in another direction, saying they should head that way. As usual, Mu ignored his loyal companion and focused entirely on the person he had been searching for. Both of them locked eyes, Mu, looking determined, and Kang, unsure of what to do. Mu began moving, taking slow, deliberate steps forward. Kang, on the other hand, tried to explain that there had been some kind of misunderstanding, and that Mu shouldn't attack him like this. But Mu didn't care, not about the little lizard on his shoulder, nor about what Kang was trying to say. Mu suddenly picked up his pace, making it clear he was ready to strike. Kang still didn't show any intention of fighting back, at least, not until the very last moment. That's when he realized that if he didn't defend himself, things could go really, really badly for him. He quickly took a defensive stance, bracing himself to face Mu head-on. Kang had defeated Mu in the past, and the reason for his hesitation this time was that he realized Mu wasn't the kind of person who deserved to be beaten like he'd once thought. Mu, on the other hand, couldn't care less about what Kang thought. With his fully recovered and stronger body, he was confident and ready to face him again. Their clash seemed inevitable. Mu was determined to attack, and Kang was equally determined to defend himself. But surprisingly, nothing happened. Both of them froze in place, right in front of each other without making a single move. Mu had been pretending to attack, hoping to provoke Kang into making the first move so he'd have a reason to officially start the fight, but Kang didn't fall for it. The boxer guy, who had been watching Mu's movement closely, was shocked to see this wild-looking guy who had been chasing after him suddenly stop and show no intention of fighting. In the middle of their standoff, while Kang was fully focused on Mu, the thief seized the opportunity. With a quick move, he snatched Kang's weapon. Now, with the weapon in his hand and a solid excuse to fight, the thief was ready to make Kang regret ever defeating him so mercilessly. The thief swung the weapon at Kang, shouting in anger and aiming to seriously injure or even kill the boy, but Kang was faster than he expected. With a quick movement of his legs and a sharp turn of his head, Kang stepped out of the weapon's path just in time. As he dodged the attack, Kang realized that Mu was now the one directly in line to take the hit. Instead of feeling happy to see the creepy, overly persistent guy get hurt, Kang felt a pang of worry for his safety. But it was too late. He couldn't do anything to stop it now. Mu, on the other hand, had been watching the attack closely from beginning to end. He could have easily dodged it, or at least blocked it, but he didn't. After absorbing that magical orb, Mu had been itching for a fight. If Kang wasn't willing to face him, then who better to fight than this guy? The preemptive strike landed hard, right on top of Mu's head. Strangely though, the blow, which could have easily knocked someone unconscious or even killed them, left nothing more than a small scratch on Mu's head. That was all the confirmation Mu needed. With an excuse to start a fight now, he didn't waste any time. Mu retaliated immediately, delivering a powerful kick to the thief's stomach. The force of the blow caused the thief to lose control of Kang's weapon, unintentionally tossing it into the air. The weapon spun in the air for a moment before Mu caught it just as it was about to hit the ground. Without wasting a second, he swung it behind the beaten thief's neck and yanked the ugly man toward him in one swift motion. As soon as the thief was close enough, Mu struck him directly in the face with a brutal headbutt. Mu seemed to enjoy the sight, while the thief was on the verge of passing out from the pain. The man clutched his head with one hand, desperately trying to ease the pain, thinking Mu was done after that strike. But it wasn't over, not even close. Mu wasn't about to let this guy off the hook without giving him a proper beating. Like a punching bag, the thief took hit after hit as Mu landed punches wherever and however he wanted. Sometimes he even used Kang's weapon to make the punishment feel more satisfying. The relentless blows continued until the thief could no longer handle it. He collapsed to the ground, shaking from the unbearable pain, tears streaming down his face as he cried like a helpless child. Mu stood over him, feeling satisfied that he had taught this guy a lesson, to never dare attack anyone else again. But that smug, satisfied smile on his face quickly faded. Mu realized he didn't enjoy one-sided, boring fights like this. It wasn't fun or even a little bit challenging for him. Mu thought back to how he felt when he first arrived on Earth and fought Lee's bully, or even that other guy, Hyung. He was far better and way more interesting than this one. Mu made up his mind. The only person worthy of being his opponent right now was Kang, no one else. Just then, he remembered that he had come here only to face Kang in the first place, not this ugly guy. He quickly turned to see where Kang was, but, to his surprise, Kang had completely disappeared. It seemed like Kang had taken the opportunity to make a run for it while Mu was busy with the thief to finish Kang's anti-bully job. As Kang hurried to get away quickly and quietly, he couldn't help but wonder how Mu kept finding and showing up wherever he went. Little did Kang know, that crazy-looking guy who seemed to enjoy fighting so much was actually a god. Even so, Kang was so caught up in trying to escape and get Mu's excited face out of his head that he didn't notice the dragonling. The little lizard looked completely distracted, obsessed with something on the other side of the street. As Kang rushed past, he accidentally kicked the dragonling right in the rear, sending the poor little thing flying forward. Kang was in such a hurry, though, that he didn't even stop to check what, or who, he had just kicked out of his way. A little while later, Kang arrived home. He stepped inside, casually kicked off his shoes, and sent them flying across the room without even bothering to use his hands. His mind was completely consumed with thoughts of Mu and that freaky face of his, always looking so pumped and ready to fight anyone. Just then, his sister, who had been outside, walked in. With a teasing tone, she shouted, "The prosecutor has arrived." Kang's 26-year-old sister, Hina, had decided to switch careers after that stalker case. She became a prosecutor with the goal of bringing justice to cruel criminals. Kang and Hina shared the same purpose, but it seemed they had chosen very different paths to achieve it. With a playful shove, Hina pushed past Kang, grinning as she mocked him again, saying, "How dare you block the path of a great prosecutor?" Kang, clearly annoyed, like any other brother would be, warned her about the consequences of making him use his powers. With that, everything settled down. Hina headed to her room to change her clothes, but not before calling out to Kang, asking him to make ramen for both of them since there was nothing else to eat. As Kang stood there, he couldn't help but think about that wild day when his sister got injured. The way Hina was acting now, so lively and full of energy, made Kang wonder if she had truly moved on from that incident or if she was just pretending. It was something he couldn't figure out. For Kang himself, forgetting that day wasn't an option. The next day, while everyone else was peacefully heading to school, Mu was doing the same. But instead of carrying a backpack or even a single book, he was only carrying Kang's weapon. And of course, the dragonling perched on his shoulder. The poor dragonling looked beaten and exhausted, muttering apologies for his failure last night. But, as usual, Mu didn't care about what the little creature was saying. Some of the students walking nearby, including Lee's bully, couldn't help but stare at the little dragonling, wondering if the thing on Mu's shoulder was a Komodo dragon. But none of them dared to get close enough to find out. That's when something caught Mu's attention. It was, of course, Kim Yujin, the class president. As soon as she spotted her little lovely lizard, her face lit up with excitement. She started jumping up and down, clearly thrilled to see her talking friend again. But her happiness didn't last long. Mu quickly reminded her that it was time for her to help him with the favor he'd asked for. That's when Kim remembered the deal she had made when she agreed to borrow the talking lizard the other day. Mu himself didn't have much information to go on. He only knew that the person he was looking for wore some kind of mask and protective glasses. But that was enough for Kim to instantly realize who he was talking about. She told Mu she had heard stories about the guy, someone who acted like a bully hunter, stating he was famous for immediately pummeling anyone who behaved like a bully. Unfortunately, Kim didn't seem to have any detailed information about Kang beyond those common rumors, which left Mu feeling a bit disappointed. Still, he was confident they'd cross paths again soon, and next time, he swore he wouldn't let Kang escape so easily. What Mu didn't realize, though, was that Kang, the very person he was thinking about, was already there, secretly approaching and observing him from behind. Kang didn't stop there. Instead, he came even closer, and to Mu's and even the dragonling's horror, he leaned in and whispered, "Stay in your seat after class. I'll come find you." With that, Kang withdrawn his weapon, casually walked past Mu and continued on his way. Mu, on the other hand, hadn't expected to face Kang so soon. It was so sudden that just hearing Kang's voice sent shivers down his spine. Still, after all those planning to kill him in the first sight, Mu let Kang go away without any complaining. Watching how Kang and Lee behaved, Kim couldn't help but wonder if they were friends or if there was something between them that she didn't know about. Without knowing who really Kang was, she gathered her courage and asked Lee, "Who's that guy anyway?" Meanwhile, as Mu stood there, looking forward for his encounter with Kang after the day's class while watching how he is getting away, with just one word, replied to Kim Yujin, "Bully hunter." From that moment until the end of class, Mu's hopeful and excited expression didn't fade. The idea of finally facing someone worthy of spending his time made Mu feel both nervous and excited. To calm himself, Mu kept repeating to himself that he could wait as long as it took if it meant having a real fight. But it was all just an act, his eager face masking the chaotic thoughts in his mind. In reality, he was on edge, nervous to the point where his right leg wouldn't stop shaking. It was a clear sign that, despite his outward confidence, he was struggling to keep control. At the same time, the situation couldn't have been worse for the dragonling, who had chosen that very leg to hide under Mu's pant leg and rest during his classes. But now, he'd been dealing with what felt like an endless earthquake since the morning. That long school day, for both the dragonling and his master, finally came to an end. The students, except for the night study group, were free to leave. Without wasting a moment, Mu quickly found the class president girl and handed over his little assistant, who was clearly feeling nauseous, telling her he had something urgent to take care of. Without hesitation, Kim Yujin gladly accepted, almost as if it was the best thing that could have happened to her. She picked up the little lizard in her arms and started walking toward the exit, blissfully unaware that if she squeezed the dragonling just a bit too hard, she'd have to deal with him throwing up right then and there. Without asking any questions or doing anything else, she happily left the classroom. And as soon as she was gone, leaving only Lee Ho behind, a hand suddenly appeared from the other side of the room. Of course it was Kang, who jumped out and made his presence known. The long-awaited moment had finally arrived for Mu, and he realized the time for the fight had come. Kang didn't waste any time. He stepped into the classroom, shut the door behind him, and reached into the depths of his backpack. With a calm but deliberate motion, he pulled out his training gloves and slipped them on. Mu was a little surprised, wondering if Kang was planning to do the same thing he had done before, when he used his belt to wrap around his hand for protection and better performance. As Kang slipped on his second glove, he looked at Mu with a curious expression and asked if he actually loved fighting. Mu's response wasn't what Kang expected. Mu shook his head and outright rejected the idea, saying he didn't fight because he loved it. Before they could continue talking, what Mu truly loved flashed through his mind. First and foremost, it was the pain and shock he felt when he got hit. For most people, it would be the last thing they'd want to experience. But for Mu, enduring that kind of pain after thousands of years made those moments oddly satisfying. Second was the burning sensation in his muscles, screaming at him after being pushed beyond their limits during a movement. And third, because for over 3 million years, fighting and battling had been the only thing that made him feel truly alive. With that mindset, Mu believed he didn't fight because he liked it. He fought because it was a necessity for him, a part of his existence. Yet, as he thought about it, his face twisted into a creepy, overly excited expression that made Kang pause. In that moment, Kang couldn't help but think, this guy is completely insane, maybe a psycho, or something even worse. Kang didn't bother overthinking Mu's strange behavior. Instead, he unzipped his backpack again, pulled out another pair of training gloves, and tossed them to him. He acted like he was there for a friendly sparring match, not a fight to the death. Mu let the gloves hit him square in the face on purpose, not even blinking from the impact, but still managed to catch them mid-air before they fell. Kang calmly placed his backpack in the corner and, with a serious expression, told Mu to put the gloves on. He explained that he wanted to keep things fair, mentioning that he couldn't even take a fight seriously unless his opponent looked like more than just some random thug. In an instant, Mu slipped on the gloves and dashed toward Kang, clearly excited to put his new gift to good use. He threw the first punch, and as expected, Kang blocked and dodged it at the same time. Kang looked slightly annoyed by how hasty Mu was, not even giving him a chance to say what he wanted to say, but he quickly calmed himself down, reminding himself that he came here for a fight, and this was the fight. No point in getting upset. After exchanging a series of random punches and blocks, both of them stepped back for a brief moment. That short pause was all Kang needed to assess the situation and refocus. Drawing on his experience as a pro boxer, he reminded himself that the first thing he needed to do was relax his body and avoid letting his muscles stiffen up. This wasn't just about brute strength, it was about control. Kang took his first step, and that was all the opening Mu needed to charge in again, recklessly going for another attack. But unlike last time, Kang was more than ready. Not only did he defend himself without taking any damage, but he also turned the tables and landed a heavy punch right on Mu's jaw. If that wasn't enough, he used the new opening to follow up with another strike, this time hitting Mu on the opposite side of his face, and even harder than the first punch. As Kang looked at his hand, he couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. The power and precision behind his punches left him amazed at his own performance. He was so impressed with himself that he began reviewing, or maybe even replaying the motion on Mu, almost as if testing it out again to see how it worked. First, he loosened up his muscles, then let the rotational force of his body flow through his fist and fingers, transmitting all that power straight into his opponent's body. Now, it was Kang who looked genuinely excited, eager to teach Mu some painful yet practical boxing lessons. Meanwhile, Mu couldn't deny he was impressed by Kang's skill. He realized that if it weren't for the body enhancements he'd received from that mysterious orb, those punches could have done some serious damage. But instead of being discouraged, Mu felt even more exhilarated. This was exactly what he'd been craving, a fight that was both challenging and painful. With that thought driving him, he couldn't help but press on, determined to continue what he believed was a proper fight. On the third floor, a red-haired guy was dozing off during the night self-study class. Out of nowhere, his body started trembling uncontrollably, like he was having a nightmare about seeing a ghost. He jolted awake, looking completely disoriented, as if he had no idea where he was. Once he snapped back to reality, he noticed a not-so-friendly note on his desk. The message called him out for always sleeping during class. Without bothering to figure out who left the note, he glanced at the clock on his phone and decided it was time to leave. He grabbed his backpack, stood up from his seat, and, a few moments later, found himself on the stairs, heading down to exit the school. Feeling a bit hungry, the scruffy-looking guy pulled out a snack from seemingly nowhere and started eating it. As he reached the second floor, something weird caught his attention. A shadow moving up and down in the second year's class at this hour. It was clearly someone, or maybe two people, but he couldn't tell who or they. That shadow, of course, belonged to Mu and Kang, who were still locked in their fierce fight. At that moment, Mu found himself cornered, with no way to do anything but defend himself. Thinking fast, he came up with an idea. He lifted his foot into the air and, in a sudden and unexpected move, planted it firmly on Kang's chest, stopping and surprising him. But that wasn't all. As Kang staggered slightly, caught off guard, Mu aimed to follow up with a kick to his face. Kang managed to protect his face, but it was clear he was furious. He glared at Mu and demanded to know why he suddenly started using his legs when kicks are forbidden in boxing. Mu, now confident with his newfound strategy, was ready to attack again. With a smirk, he replied, "What are you talking about? I don't even know what boxing is." Before Kang could respond, Mu leapt toward him, aiming another kick while taunting, "Who said we're only using fists in this fight, huh?" His kick landed hard, strong enough to push Kang backward. For a few moments, Kang was visibly struggling. A part of him even started to believe Mu's words. But as a trained boxer, he was completely unprepared to deal with kicks. Before Kang could regain his focus, Mu took advantage of his confusion and landed another solid kick. The once dominant boxer now found himself in a bad spot, cornered and unable to do anything but defend himself. Kang couldn't help but wonder how someone who looked so weak could deliver such powerful kicks to his upper body. To Kang's shock, Mu suddenly switched tactics and aimed a kick at a vital point in his lower body. Kang froze, completely unsure of how to respond. One thing was certain: if that spot got hit, it would be over for him. He would collapse and be unable to continue the fight. Just as he feared, Mu struck the weak spot effortlessly. But to both surprise, nothing happened. He didn't even feel a hint of pain. Mu immediately retreated, putting distance between them. Yet he was smiling, a smug, knowing smile, as if he'd held back on purpose and deliberately avoided finishing Kang off. In truth, Mu had used his full strength in that attack, but the physical enhancement of the Dragonling's power had worn off, as though it had never existed. Realizing this, Mu started to panic. He knew that without the enhancement, he was no match for Kang. Meanwhile, Kang, still a little surprised, noticed something was off. He knew Mu wasn't that kind of person to show mercy to anyone, but still had no idea why he hadn't gone for the finishing blow. But then, as if divine insight struck him, Kang smirked and said mockingly, "Don't tell me, you suddenly lost your power." Kang had no clue that his random, ridiculous guess about Mu was actually spot on. To him, the only thing that made sense was that Mu was just exhausted and worn out. He had no idea about the orb or the Dragonling buff. Mu, on the other hand, didn't say a word and just kept pretending everything was fine, like Kang was completely off base. But that didn't change Kang's mind. He'd already pieced together the situation in his head, and it was enough to make him burst out laughing after their intense fight. Mu looked like he had no idea how to keep going in this mess of a battle. Meanwhile, the red-haired guy standing behind the classroom door was watching them. The sight of two awkward-looking people trying to fight each other while laughing like it was some comedy show wasn't exactly entertaining for him. In fact, it was so annoying that he decided to just leave instead of wasting any more time on their silly fight. It wasn't clear if this scruffy-looking guy was strong or skilled, but for some reason, watching Kang and Mu's battle left him feeling grossed out. Just as the red-haired guy walked off, Kang finally stopped laughing. His face turned serious as he charged at Mu, knowing this was the perfect moment to take advantage of the situation. Mu, on the other hand, found himself in a pretty bad spot, trying to use his leg to block Kang's attack or at least make it harder for him to land a punch. But that simple plan wasn't enough to stop Kang. Instead of aiming for Mu's face, Kang went straight for a vital spot, one that Mu had unknowingly left wide open. Mu thought his knee would work as a solid defense, but things didn't go the way he expected. With just one strike, not only did he feel the sharp pain, but being on one leg caused him to spin around almost 90 degrees, leaving a perfect opening for Kang. Kang didn't waste any time. He landed a bone-crushing punch right to Mu's head. The hit was so strong it sent Mu flying several meters backward, but even that wasn't enough to knock him out. Mu slumped against the wall behind him, realizing that without the enhancement buff, there was no way he could stand up to Kang's solid, muscular body. One desperate solution crossed his mind. If he could just use a small amount of his original mana or inner energy, he could easily overpower this gorilla. But since he'd already tried and failed to use his mana several times, that idea didn't seem very reliable right now. Still, Mu decided to take a chance, because even the smallest shot at doing the impossible was better than nothing. He pushed himself up to his feet, gathered his courage, and focused as hard as he could to summon even a tiny bit of magic into his fist before attacking. Putting all his trust in that slim hope, he confidently launched himself at Kang, now relying on his non-existent magic. But Kang, like it was nothing more than a kid's punch, easily caught Mu's fist midair before it could even land. Seeing the opportunity to mock Mu again, Kang teased him with a smug grin, which now looked more lively, but still lacked any real excitement or effort. Then, out of nowhere, Kang suddenly felt something strange, like energy or a weird sensation passing through his body. It caught him so off guard that he instinctively turned his head to look behind him, trying to figure out what it was. That momentary distraction was all Mu needed. He didn't hesitate for a second and took full advantage of Kang's lowered guard, throwing another punch straight at his face. This time Mu's punch wasn't as strong as it would have been with the enhancement buff, but for some reason it hit Kang harder than expected. Hard enough to make him feel a little dizzy, but also enough to snap him back to reality and refocus all his attention on his opponent. Kang managed to grab Mu's other hand after that punch, but once again, he felt a stronger wave of energy passing through his body and moving toward his back. Instinctively, he turned to see what it was that just passed through him. Whether it was magic from Mu or just some strange sensation didn't really matter. What did matter was that Mu used this moment to take advantage once again. This time, he relied on the most dependable weapon in his arsenal, his head. Mu's headbutt struck hard, sending Kang stumbling backward. He hit the classroom door with a loud crash and collapsed, completely knocked out. Mu stood tall and proud in front of him, wondering if his plan to use mana in his attacks had actually worked or if it was all just his imagination. After a moment, he realized that he'd somehow managed to channel a small amount of magic into his fist by redirecting a little bit of mana into his body, using a new method he'd never tried before. But honestly, the thrill of being able to use magic wasn't nearly as exciting as the thought of what he wanted to do to Kang now. Looking like a caveman who hadn't eaten in a year and just found a feast, Mu approached Kang's unconscious face. But he wasn't planning anything too crazy. He was just eager to leave his mark on him, in his own way. At the very last moment, fate somehow managed to wake Kang up, letting him save his ear for another day. As soon as he came to his senses, he realized Mu was about to mark him as neutered, just like Mu's other unfortunate victims. But that wasn't something Kang, a champion boxer, was going to let happen so easily. He quickly shoved Mu away and got to his feet, still feeling dizzy but determined to stop him. Kang immediately admitted that he had underestimated Mu and accepted his loss, but that didn't mean he would let Mu rip his ear off. He wanted to say something, probably about the strange sensation he'd felt earlier before getting knocked out, but the pounding pain in his nose and his spinning head weren't letting him form a single coherent thought. So instead of explaining, he made a quick excuse and decided to leave for now, thinking it was best to get as far away from Mu as possible, as quickly as possible. Watching Kang walk away, Mu couldn't help but feel disappointed. He'd been really looking forward to adding Kang to his list of playthings, but it clearly wasn't going to happen today. A while later, at Kim Yujin's house, the little dragonling was struggling under the weight of a bag that looked to be twice his size. It was so heavy that he was already sweating before he'd even started moving. Apparently, the bag was full of stuff that either he or his master had asked Kim to buy for them. With no better option, the dragonling braced himself and headed back, choosing the hard way, leaping down from rooftops instead of sticking to the normal, safer paths. As he started running toward Lee's house, the little dragonling suddenly spotted Kang in the distance, looking dizzy and holding his injured face. The moment he saw him, the dragonling immediately recognized him. It was the same guy who had kicked him in the butt the other day for absolutely no reason. There was no way he was letting this chance for revenge slip away. He quickly dropped his bag on the ground and crouched into a ready-to-jump stance on top of it. Then, like a bullet, he launched himself toward Kang, aiming to headbutt him square in the face, just like his master had done earlier. But luck wasn't on his side. Kang, despite his dizzy state, spotted the dragonling at the last second and instinctively threw a punch, smacking the poor lizard midair. For a moment, Kang was freaked out. Dazed and confused, he didn't even recognize the dragonling and was left wondering what kind of weird animal had just attacked him. He was so out of it, he couldn't even process what was happening. Kang thought about giving the dragonling a proper beating for scaring the hell out of him, but in his current condition, that just wasn't an option. Instead, he shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and continued on his way, desperate to get home and rest. As soon as Kang disappeared, someone else arrived at the scene, standing over the dragonling's crumpled body. And of course, it was none other than Mu. He stared down at the dragonling, beaten and sprawled out on the ground, wondering if the little guy was dead or still alive, and, more importantly, what was inside that bag lying next to him. The next morning, Mu was walking through the streets on his way to school again, but this time with one noticeable difference. He was wearing a brand new school uniform and carrying a dragonling on his new backpack. The dragonling seemed perfectly content being carried like this. It was definitely more comfortable and secure than sitting on Mu's shoulder or hiding under his clothes. Just then, Dragonling proudly mentioned that Kim Yoo-jin, his royal and ever-reliable assistant, was the one who bought the uniform and backpack for Mu, only to satisfy him. Dragonling seemed to like his new home, and declared he wouldn't come out from there, wanting to stay hidden and avoid drawing any unnecessary attention for the time being. Meanwhile, Kang was walking down the other side of the street when he spotted Mu. Without hesitation, he crossed over to greet him and, with a curious look, asked why Mu was wearing a school uniform on a Saturday. To Kang's surprise, Mu simply replied, "What's Saturday?" Kang felt a little disappointed, or maybe even annoyed, thinking Mu was trying to mess with him so early in the morning. He decided not to argue about it, though, and instead attempted to bring up what he wanted to tell Mu the day before, but hadn't been able to. Kang asked Mu again if he actually liked fighting, and once more, Mu gave the same answer, saying he fights because he has to. It was hard for Kang to believe that, especially after seeing the excitement on Mu's face during his battle yesterday. However, Kang didn't complain about it and instead got straight to the point. He requested Mu to hang out with him from now on, adding that if Mu agreed, he wouldn't feel bored anymore because he wouldn't have to keep looking for fights. As soon as Mu heard that, his whole body started trembling like crazy, and that scary yet excited smile lit up his face again. Kang didn't need any words to understand Mu's answer. It was written all over him. It wasn't easy for anyone to change Mu's opinion about someone, but somehow, Kang had managed to do it. Suddenly, Mu felt like Kang might actually be a good person. Everything seemed to be going well for both of them until Mu suddenly blurted out, "Take me somewhere I can fight right now." Kang froze for a second before explaining that he didn't mean they were going to fight immediately. He was talking about some other time. Meanwhile, the Dragonling was secretly watching their conversation from the safety of the bag, either trying to stay hidden or plotting how to get his revenge for losing to Kang twice before. The next Friday morning, at Juryogi High School, which was different from Mu's school, a student was standing guard at the restroom entrance, refusing to let anyone in, even those who were about to burst and desperately needed to go. Inside the restroom, a big guy was grilling another student, asking him how much money he had made. That student was the same thief Mu had beaten up the other day. Nervously, the boy pulled out some cash and said it was only 20,000 won. The big guy, who looked eerily similar to Mu's original form, same build, same face, got furious and yelled that it wasn't even close to what he'd asked for. His name was Yangzhou, and he seemed to be the top bully of their school. The little thief, clearly one of Yangzhou's lackeys, started whining about how Kang had interfered and messed up all his hard work. Hearing Kang's name made Yangzhou completely lose his cool. He threw a heavy punch at the wall, his face turning red with frustration as he couldn't handle the idea of some random guy constantly ruining things for him. Yangzhou wanted to catch Kang and punish him, but since he couldn't track him down easily, he ordered the little boy to gather everyone under his command immediately to pursue him. The scene shifted to Saturday evening, where Mu and Kang were walking through the streets together. Kang opened up, saying how grateful he was. He admitted that he used to fight recklessly, always lashing out and beating looking thug people up for no real reason. But after meeting Mu, something had changed in him. For the first time, he realized he could actually enjoy fighting, not in a blind, violent way, but with purpose and control. Always looking for an excuse to fight, Mu replied, "Why don't you just fight me now instead of wasting your time searching for random people to beat up, so both of us can enjoy fighting?" Kang, however, didn't actually plan to fight Mu since he wasn't the type of person he was looking for. Still, he promised they'd have a rematch one day, in a fair battle, but not right now. While Kang was responding, Mu suddenly noticed smoke coming from a distance. Kang noticed it too and looked surprised. Out of curiosity, he sniffed the air and it smelled like cigarette smoke. He couldn't help but wonder how many people were smoking at the same time to create such thick smoke. Without wasting time, he quickly put on his mask and then glasses, figuring it was probably time to meet their first target of the day. Without hesitation, and as always, Kang jumped into action, using the dense smoke to sneak closer unnoticed. Two guys were standing in front while more were hanging out deeper in the alley. One of the guys in front spotted Kang before the others did, but assumed he was just a passerby. With an arrogant tone, he demanded Kang hand over his wallet. At that moment, Kang knew for sure he'd found the right target. Without a second thought, he threw a punch straight to the guy's face. Seeing Kang's appearance and this action, the other guy suddenly recognized him as the famous bully hunter and shouted in alarm. His yelling immediately caught the attention of the rest of the group, making Kang realize he was now up against at least 5 more people. He hadn't expected to run into so many bullies at once, and that's when it hit him. He wasn't alone. He quickly called out to Mu for help. Mu, who had already covered his head with a jacket to hide his identity, was blushing with excitement at the thought of a proper fight. Kang fearlessly charged at them first, shouting for Mu to follow. But Mu just stood there, trembling, not out of fear, but from being overly excited. Same as before, he couldn't start fighting like this. He needed someone to throw the first punch at him. Just then, the guy Kang had punched earlier grabbed Mu's leg and, confused by why he was just standing there, asked if he was with Kang. The answer was obvious. And since Mu had been waiting for any excuse to start, he decided to count that as a pinch, and the first strike he needed to officially join the fight. With that, he launched into action. In less than a few minutes, the two of them had taken care of the thugs, giving them a proper and well-deserved beating. However, Mu found it all incredibly disappointing. These guys were nothing but weaklings, going down after just 1 or 2 hits. It wasn't nearly as fun or challenging as he'd hoped. Kang, on the other hand, was satisfied with the outcome. Spotting a small bag on the ground, he immediately picked it up and handed it back to its owner, the person who had been cornered and robbed by those thugs. It was a red-haired girl, already pushed to her limits, desperate to be rescued. But she wasn't just some random stranger, and Kang immediately recognized her. She was from his school, even in his class, the same girl he secretly had a crush on. Before Kang could say a word to comfort her or even get a simple thank you, several other guys showed up at the scene. Dragonling tried to warn his master, but Mu had already noticed them. These guys weren't random. They were here because one of the thugs, before getting beaten, had managed to send a message saying they'd spotted Kang. They called him Iljime, which in Korea meant someone like Robin Hood. The guy who got that message, of course, was Yangjo. And now, Yangjo and his gang had arrived, ready to punish Kang for always interfering and messing up their so-called work. Seeing them, Kang realized it was time to get serious. Without hesitation, he decided to continue the fight with his weapon. Meanwhile, Mu's disappointed expression quickly turned into one of pure excitement as he realized the fight wasn't over yet. The real fun was just about to begin. Under Yangzhou's command, his gang charged at Kang and Mu all at once, determined to take them down by any means necessary. Kang and Mu stood their ground, calmly waiting for them to make the first move. Mu, however, was struggling to keep his emotions in check. He was so thrilled at the thought of an all-out brawl that he couldn't stop himself from drooling uncontrollably. Mu didn't wait for Kang to say anything. Without wasting a second, he charged at the group, taking them down one by one with a single strike each and moving on to the next opponent like it was a game. He knocked out 3 in a row, and just when he thought things couldn't get any more fun, a heavy slap landed across his face. Of course, it was Yangzhou. With that single and effortless move, Yangzhou had caught Mu off guard and thrown him to the ground. Looking annoyed, Yangzhou demanded to know why there were 2 Iljimes, when, as far as he was concerned, there should only be 1. Meanwhile, a little further away from the chaos, the red-haired guy, Heijin, who had been disgusted watching Mu and Kang fight the other day, happened to be passing by. He was muttering to himself, wondering why his calls hadn't been answered. But as he walked a few steps closer, the noise from the commotion caught his attention. Curiosity got the better of him, and he couldn't resist checking out what was going on. What he saw was a mess. A bunch of guys fighting and going at each other like a pack of wild goats. Just like last time, Heijin felt disgusted after watching only a few seconds of the brawl. But just as he was about to ignore it all and walk away, something stopped him in his tracks. His eyes caught sight of the girl backed into the corner and Kang standing in front of her, ready to protect her with everything he had. For a moment, Heijin froze. Something about seeing that girl made him lose his temper entirely. The reason behind Heijin's disgust toward fights went all the way back to his childhood, back when his father was an MMA champion. To Heijin, his father was everything, someone he deeply respected and admired, the strongest person he knew. He couldn't have been prouder to call him his dad. But everything started to change when his father began using some kind of illegal drugs to get stronger. At first, it wasn't obvious, but over time, things spiraled out of control. His father became addicted, and the effects of the drugs made him lose his mind at times. Heijin was just a little kid back then. He didn't understand much about drugs or addiction, but it didn't take long for his view of his father to shatter completely. The man he once saw as his hero became a monster, turning their home into a living nightmare. His mother eventually ran away to save her own life and escape the endless beatings from her husband, but she didn't have the chance to take her kids with her. Heijin was left behind, and he wasn't alone. He had a little sister who needed his protection. With nowhere to go and no way to escape, the red-haired boy endured everything. He did everything he could to shield his sister from harm, taking the brunt of his father's outbursts. But deep down, he knew this couldn't go on forever, realizing he couldn't even survive like this. Determined to find a way out, Heijin started watching his father's matches over and over again, studying his moves and techniques. He practiced in secret, learning everything he could. Years passed, and as Heijin grew older, he eventually reached the same size as his father. One day, when Heijin was slapped across the face for no reason, he didn't hold back. Without hesitation, he punched his father. He had reached his limit. He was done living a miserable life like this, and now he believed he had grown strong enough to finally put a stop to it. His father was completely caught off guard. It was the first time Heijin had ever dared to stand up to him, but instead of backing down, Heijin's defiance drove his father into a fit of rage. Blinded by anger, his father muttered something insane, that it was time to kill not just Heijin but his innocent little sister as well. Hearing those words made Heijin realize his father was about to cross a line that could never be undone. In that moment, Heijin lost control. Fueled by anger and fear, he did the unthinkable. He killed his father that day. Heijin had committed murder, but the court showed some sympathy for his circumstances. He was sentenced to just 1 year in a juvenile detention center. After serving his time, he returned to school, but life didn't get any easier. During his school years, Heijin was forced to work tirelessly to earn enough money to support both himself and his sister. He couldn't afford to get sick or injured. His body was his only asset, the one thing keeping their lives afloat. So, when he saw people like Mu and Kang treating their bodies recklessly, throwing themselves into fights without care, it disgusted him. But now everything felt different. This time, he couldn't look away. He couldn't ignore the situation, especially since that girl was his sister, the sister he had devoted his entire life to protecting. Her safety was at stake, and he couldn't turn a blind eye. Her name was Daljun, and she still hadn't noticed Heijin standing a little distance away. Her brother couldn't help but wonder how she had ended up in this situation, but in the end, it didn't really matter. All that mattered was keeping her safe. Without paying any attention to the girl or realizing he was being watched by her brother, Youngjo just stood there, looking confused about why there were suddenly 2 people acting like Iljimais this time. Unfortunately, Mu had collapsed to the ground, unconscious, while the horrified dragonling nervously tried to wake him up. Thinking he was done here and ready to deal with the next Iljimai and end this nonsense, Youngjo didn't even notice Heijin appearing behind him. Out of nowhere, with a sudden and unexpected strike, Heijin hit Youngjo's weak spot, catching him completely off guard. Shocked, Youngjo dropped to his knees, unable to figure out who had the nerve to attack him from behind. But that wasn't the end of it. Heijin grabbed Youngjo's head with one hand and used all his strength to slam it into the ground, finishing off the big guy as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, the dragonling was desperately trying to wake his master, shouting louder and louder. But before he could finish his task, Heijin stepped on him. Not to hurt him, but simply to walk past and get to his sister as fast as he could. Kang noticed his presence shortly after but couldn't figure out who he was or why he was there. Kang was even more baffled when, in the blink of an eye, Heijin took down 2 bullies like it was nothing. Only 2 thugs were left, and before they could react, Heijin reached them, grabbed their stunned faces, and slammed their heads against the walls beside them. When he reached Kang, Heijin gave him a cold, serious look and said they had all crossed a line they should have never even thought about. Kang quickly realized Heijin wasn't like the other thugs. He was clearly here for the girl. Panicking, Kang tried to explain himself and the reason he was there, but before he could get a word out, Daljun suddenly shouted, "Brother!" That distracted Kang, making him wonder if Daljun and this guy were actually siblings. From their looks, the answer seemed obvious, but before Kang could fully wrap his head around it, Heijin took the opportunity to attack. As a champion boxer with fast reflexes, Kang noticed Heijin's approach and threw out a random punch to defend himself, but Heijin easily dodged it and found the perfect opening to strike. Surprisingly though, instead of punching or kicking, Heijin just placed a hand on Kang and gave him a firm push, making him stumble backward without actually hurting him. Then, without wasting any time, Heijin grabbed the frightened Daljun's hand, pulling her and saying, "Pull yourself together and run with me." They started running, but before Daljun could take more than a few steps, she accidentally dropped her small blue wallet, or whatever it was, without realizing it. Heijin, however, had no time to point it out. He suddenly noticed a much bigger problem standing in their way. Blocking the exit of the alley and looking absolutely furious was Yangzhou, and this time, he wasn't messing around. Yangzhou began shouting angrily, demanding to know who Heijin was and why he suddenly showed up and ruined everything. But Heijin had no intention of answering his questions or stopping for a chat. He was ready to force his way out, but before he could make a move, someone else stepped in and did the job for him. Out of nowhere, Yangzhou was caught for the second time and punched square in the face. It was Mu. He had regained consciousness after the earlier attack and took this chance to strike back. Heijin hadn't noticed Mu until now and was momentarily confused, wondering who this guy was and where he'd come from to clear the path for him. But there was no time for questions. Heijin used the opportunity to take his sister and get them out of there. Meanwhile, Mu seemed overly thrilled to be back in the fight, excited not only to have been beaten but to dish out some hits of his own. Kang, however, scolded him, demanding to know why he had exposed his face and made himself an easy target for everyone. Back where Yangzhou was, he was struggling to even stand, disoriented and trying to figure out where the second hit had come from. He raised his dizzy head just in time to see the 2 Iljimais running off in the distance. He wasn't in any condition to stop or even chase after them, and the realization made his temper boil over. Swearing loudly, he promised himself that he would find them again, and when the time came, He would tear them apart one by one. The scene shifted to a few hours later, where Kang had sketched a simple picture of Yang Zhou. He was trying to explain to Mu who that guy really was and what their next move should be. According to Kang, Yang Zhou was one of the most infamous delinquents in the area. But it wasn't just him. There were two others like him, Kwak Du-gyeon from Gyeokugi High School and Kim Chun-gu from Huiparam High School. Together, the three of them were known as Godori. Each one was the top bully in their respective school. Mu didn't know much about the other two, only Yang Zhou, and Kang didn't want to focus on them for now. He just wanted to explain the situation so Mu could better understand what was going on in the area. After introducing the top three delinquents, Kang mentioned that they didn't used to cause this much trouble, at least not until Yang Zhou showed up and changed everything. Things had gotten so bad that members under Godori command were now extorting money from people in broad daylight. Kang also pointed out that the guys they fought earlier, before Yang Zhou arrived, were probably part of the Godori gang, but not directly under Yang Zhou's command. Based on everything Kang had seen and figured out so far, it seemed like Yang Zhou was the key figure in the gang, and that's why he acted like the leader back then. Despite how carefully and thoroughly Kang tried to explain everything, Mu still looked lost and clueless, like he hadn't understood a single thing Kang had said from the start. He asked Kang to explain the delinquent and extortion parts again from the beginning because he couldn't remember what any of it was about. When Mu also mentioned that he didn't even know what Godori meant, Kang lost his temper. He snapped, asking if Mu even had a brain and, if he did, why it seemed like it was just for decoration and not actually working. That's when Dragonling popped out of his little hiding spot, unable to sit quietly while his lord was being insulted like that. Perching on top of Mu's head with his newly sprouted tail, he shouted at Kang and even called him a bastard. Acting overly confident again, like he was still in his original mighty form, Dragonling demanded to know how Kang dared to be so rude to God Mu. Shocked, Kang had no idea what Dragonling truly was and was completely caught off guard by his sudden appearance. He stared at him, confused, and mumbled, wondering what kind of frog could talk like that. Of course, calling him a frog didn't exactly sit well with Dragonling, who still believed he was a mighty dragon. Mu, as casual as ever, introduced Dragonling as something like his assistant or maybe a friend, which only made the situation even weirder. At this point, Kang couldn't help but feel suspicious about the whole thing going on with Mu. The way Mu seemed completely clueless about everything, even basic stuff, like the names of the days of the week, made Kang wonder if he was missing some fundamental knowledge entirely. And now, adding a walking, talking frog as his assistant? It didn't take long for Kang to form some quick conclusions about the strange mess he had gotten himself involved in. Mu was kind of impressed that a mere human like Kang had already figured out he wasn't originally human. Both of them ended up speaking their minds at the same time. Kang openly wondered if Mu was an alien, while Mu casually declared that he was a god. But to Kang, Mu looked like anything but a god. And staying true to his clueless nature, Mu immediately asked what Kang meant by alien, clearly having no idea what that was. This whole back-and-forth conversation was happening in President Kim's house. She couldn't help but wonder why they were even there while she was being forced to mend Mu's ripped-up shirt for him. A few minutes later, her annoyed expression softened into a happier one when Dragonling plopped down on her feet and started playing with her phone. To simplify things for Mu's tiny brain, as Kang put it, he explained that, whether he was a god or an alien, their target for now was the big guy who slapped Mu and knocked him down before Mu managed to punch him later. Kang was clearly blaming Yang Zhou for everything that had happened to Daljun, and just thinking about what she'd gone through made Kang's blood boil with anger. Mu, on the other hand, finally understood who they were supposed to focus on. He was oddly kind of happy about having had a real fight, even looking back on the unique experience of getting beaten up by Yang Zhou. But deep down, Mu also knew the truth. There was no way he could take on Yang Zhou in a proper, fair fight, especially not in his current state. The size difference alone made it a nearly impossible challenge for him. Mu suddenly felt excited again. The thought of fighting someone stronger than him felt like the best challenge he could ever have, but reality hit him hard a moment later as he realized he could easily get knocked down again. To avoid that, he knew he needed to train harder, much harder than before. Kang agreed, pointing out that Mu was no match for Yang Zhou and suggesting he come train at Kang's gym. However, Mu immediately shot down the idea, saying he didn't like Kang's training style, which focused only on bare-knuckle fighting. Mu believed he needed a completely different kind of training, something more diverse, more intense, and way rougher than anything he'd done before. Just then, Dragonling, who had been playing with Kim's phone, suddenly perked up. He jumped down and crawled toward Mu, excitedly declaring that he had found exactly what Mu was looking for. It was a video, probably online, showing a challenge in an underground arena. The video featured an undefeated fighter with a 13-win streak, someone who usually took down his opponents in just seconds. The girl streaming the fight asked if anyone else dared to face this guy. To make things even more interesting, she announced a reward of 1,000,000 won for the winner. Both Mu and Kang were intrigued, watching the video closely and listening to what the girl was saying. What caught their attention the most, however, was when Kang recognized the undefeated fighter in the arena. He confirmed that the guy was one of the Godori gang members. Mu, wanting to be sure, asked Kang for more confirmation. "Are you saying he's part of the gang you mentioned earlier? The one we need to deal with?" Kang nodded, confirming it. That was all Mu needed to hear. He immediately set his next goal. He would use this chance to train hard, defeat Yangzhou, and after that, he would take down Godori gang one by one. That was on Earth, but things looked way more serious in the divine realm. A powerful magical attack had struck the domain of the Earth god. The attack was devastating, and from the way it hit, it was obvious Lucifer was behind it. He was throwing everything he had into breaking through Earth's barrier, determined to get his shot at finishing off Mu. This time, he even pushed himself beyond his limits, convinced he'd managed to create a crack in the barrier. He knew if he didn't take advantage of this moment while Mu was still weak, he'd end up in a life-or-death situation once Mu regained his strength. As the smoke and dust around the mini-Earth began to clear, Lucifer couldn't take his eyes off it, desperate to see the results. But to his disbelief, the mini-Earth was completely unharmed, not even a scratch on its barrier, even after Lucifer's ultimate move. As expected, Lucifer couldn't stand the sight of his failure. He was sure the barrier should have been shattered by now. What made him even angrier was the memory of that day when Mu had effortlessly, with just a flick of his finger, broken through the barrier of Lucifer's planet and tossed that ugly boy inside it like some worthless object, without even caring about Lucifer's opinion. The fact that he couldn't do the same, no matter how hard he tried, made Lucifer feel like he was going to explode with rage. The situation on Earth wasn't much better for Yangzhou either. He was burning with anger, just like Lucifer. Unable to keep his cool and maybe trying to calm himself down a little, he started punching and kicking the door in front of him while shouting and cursing at the Iljimays for unfairly beating and humiliating him. He stood there, struggling to not think about it, at least for now. But then it became obvious. The door he was attacking was a bathroom door, and some poor guy was trapped inside. The guy freaked out so badly that he lost control 3 times before realizing what was going on. Yangzhou eventually walked out of the public restroom, feeling defeated. All he could think about was how he'd been beaten up and humiliated by a bunch of weaklings, and to top it off, he hadn't gained anything from the day. The guy who had been waiting outside for him, the same small guy from before, tried to cheer him up. With a smug grin, he pulled out something he'd swiped, Daljun's blue wallet, which she'd dropped without realizing it. Yangzhou snatched the wallet and started shaking it up and down to see what was inside. A few measly coins fell to the ground, and that's when Yangzhou lost it. He thought the little thief was mocking him by offering such a pathetic amount of money. What he didn't notice right away was that Daljun's ID card was also inside the wallet and had fallen onto the floor near the coins. It was her school identification card, and apart from the school's name, it had her photo, her full name, and other details on it. Yangzhou picked up the card and stared at it carefully. After a few seconds, his mood completely shifted. A sly grin spread across his face as he realized he could make good use of this information to finally get back at those damn Iljimays. That day ended without much explanation, and the next morning, Mu and Dragonling were walking through the streets. Dragonling was trying to help guide him to his destination by reading the map President Kim had drawn for them earlier. It seemed like Mu was heading toward the arena, the place Dragonling had shown him in the video the other day. Before long, as a guy with a dog was about to pass by them, Dragonling accidentally let out a small fart. Neither Mu nor the guy seemed to notice and just kept walking, completely unaware of what had happened. But for the dog, with its sharp sense of smell, it was impossible to ignore. The moment that little fart reached its nose, the dog snapped. It completely lost control, going on a rampage. Whatever that fart contained or however it smelled, it clearly hit the dog in the worst way possible. Without hesitation, the dog lunged at Dragonling and gave him a solid bite on the butt, like it was trying to punish him and seal his exit so he wouldn't do something that gross again. Once the dog had delivered its justice, it calmed down and let Dragonling go, but not without leaving him with a lesson he'd never forget. As they started to part ways, both Dragonling and the dog shot angry glares at each other. Dragonling, confused and still sore, couldn't figure out why he'd suddenly been attacked by such a lowly creature. Assuming the dog was just crazy, he vowed to get his revenge someday. A few minutes later, with Dragonling's guidance, they finally reached their destination. The little girl from the video was sitting at a table, reviewing participants and either accepting or rejecting them based on their fighting experience. When it was Mu's turn to be evaluated, the girl immediately noticed he was a high schooler because of his distinctive school uniform. She even recognized which school he was from, but just to confirm, she asked if she was correct. Before Mu could respond, Dragonling popped his head out of his hiding spot and whispered for him to just say yes and agree with her. Clueless as always, Mu did exactly what Dragonling told him to do. The girl then moved on to her next question, asking what kind of fighting experience Mu had that qualified him to participate in the arena. Once again, Mu had no idea what she was talking about or what she meant by experience. Sensing his confusion, the girl tried to explain further. She was asking about any kind of fighting background, like boxing, wrestling, martial arts, or even street fighting. This time, Mu finally understood what she meant. He paused, started counting on his fingers, and looked like he was trying really hard to calculate something. With Dragonling's help and using every ounce of brainpower he had, Mu confidently announced he had 3 million years of all sorts of fighting experience. The people standing in line behind him immediately burst into laughter, thinking he was just some clueless idiot trying to be funny. Unlike others, the girl in charge of accepting participants actually liked Mu's answer and decided to let him join the fight. She then asked for the entry fee, which was 50,000 won for those who passed the interview. From behind, Dragonling pulled out some money from who knows where and handed it to Mu. If anyone was curious where he got the cash, you would probably figure out that the sneaky little lizard was a pro thief who had taken advantage of Kim's trust to swipe her wallet. However, since neither Mu nor Dragonling could count money properly, they didn't realize they only had 46,000 won, 4,000 short of the required fee. Luckily, the girl seemed to like Mu, so she let it slide and gave him a discount for the remaining amount. With that taken care of, Mu stepped aside to make room for the next person in line to be interviewed. As Mu walked away, something caught his attention, making him stop and turn his head to get a better look. It was a big guy in a green hat and jacket, casually leaning against a column, lamppost, or whatever it was. Mu stared at him for a few seconds, observing him closely. Something about the guy's appearance and physique grabbed his attention. From the sheer size and definition of the boy's muscles, which Mu could easily spot even at a glance, it was obvious he was someone who trained seriously. Mu wasn't entirely sure though, as he hadn't seen the man's face, but based on his overall appearance, Mu suspected it might be the same guy Kang had mentioned, the one from Godori. The guy had completely captured Mu's full attention, but strangely enough, it seemed like that boy, despite standing out so much, wasn't paying any attention to his surroundings at all. The situation got a little weird a few minutes later when the event was about to start, and the guy finally revealed his face. Turns out, it wasn't a guy at all. It was actually a girl, or at least a guy who looked way too much like a girl. The little girl in charge of streaming the event decided to kick things off with an introduction of the undefeated champion. Both the champion and the announcer girl stood in the center of the arena, while the others formed a wide circle around them, keeping some distance. The short girl tried to hype things up, shouting the champion's name, Whistlego, a fighter with an impressive record of 13 wins in a row. And then, of course, there was Mu. Acting clueless as always, he stepped forward like an idiot, completely unaware that this wasn't supposed to be a one-on-one fight just between him and the champion. He planted himself in the middle of the arena, got into a fighting stance, and declared he was ready to start the battle. His unexpected behavior caught everyone off guard, including the short girl who was trying to run the show. But Mu, as usual, didn't seem to notice the shocked reactions around him. Instead, with a goofy smile on his face, he announced that he was about to start the fight right now. And unlike his usual approach of waiting for a preemptive attack, Mu decided to go for it first this time. In his mind, standing in the middle of the arena meant both sides were already good to go. But before he could even make a move, the short girl rushed over and stopped him dead in his tracks. She looked completely baffled, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was clear she thought Mu was about to ruin the whole event. Rolling her eyes and clearly frustrated, she tried to explain what was going on, just in case Mu's IQ wasn't high enough to figure it out on his own. She reached into her small pocket, pulled out a piece of paper, and held it up for Mu to see, explaining that he needed to follow the rules and couldn't just jump in and fight the champion like that. The paper showed the tournament format, where everyone had to participate in battles first, and the winners of each match would face off until only one person was left standing. It seems Mu decided to cooperate, and almost an hour later, 3 battles had already finished, and the winners had been decided. Now, it was finally Mu's turn. He stood in the spot he had been waiting for all along, ready to fight. His opponent, as fate would have it, turned out to be the same guy whose dog had attacked Dragonling earlier. The little girl hosting the event once again tried to hype things up and make the battle more exciting. She introduced Mu as the self-proclaimed fighter with 3 million years of experience, a statement that, of course, no one believed. Then she introduced his opponent as a master of Chinese martial arts, a polite and composed guy, unlike his chaotic dog. Dragonling was watching the match from a distance, his eyes darting around as he overheard people placing bets on the fighters. He felt a sense of pride and excitement knowing that his lord's match was finally about to begin after what felt like forever. But just as he was getting into it, his attention was pulled away by something else. On the other side of the arena, a dog was barking nonstop, making such a racket that it was hard to ignore. Even with all the noise and commotion around, the constant barking was so irritating that it managed to cut through the crowd's excitement and found a way to annoy Dragonling. The dog seemed strangely familiar to the Dragonling. Its crazy-looking face and wild behavior practically screamed its identity. After a moment, the Dragonling finally remembered. It was the same dog that had bitten his butt earlier when they were on their way here. Fueled by the memory of that painful attack, he suddenly leaped out of his nest, not with a small, simple jump, but with such force and height that people thought a bird was flying overhead. In the blink of an eye, he landed on the ground, not clumsily like a lizard, but with the grace of a skilled master. His landing was near Mu, startling his lord, who couldn't help but wonder what was going on. But the Dragonling was too furious to respond to Mu's question. His focus was locked on the dog. It was as if they could understand each other's language when the Dragonling challenged the dog to a fair fight in the arena. To everyone's surprise, the dog seemed to understand him. Shaking its head wildly, it broke free from its collar. The next moment, the dog dashed forward, weaving through the crowd, and stopped in the middle of the arena. That's when its owner, the Chinese guy, finally realized everyone was talking about his dog. He had no idea why his pet had suddenly run over there, looking so fired up. Unlike everyone else, the interviewer girl found the whole thing fascinating. Not only did she choose not to stop the fight, but she also enthusiastically announced a rare double battle event, owners against each other and their pets against each other. Of course, it was all for the sake of drawing more viewers to her stream. Again and more dramatically, she introduced Mu as the 3 million-year fighter and his opponent as the Chinese martial arts international student. For the second part of the showdown, she dubbed it as the little new sprouted tail lizard versus the Chinese mad dog. For a moment, the Chinese boy, just like everyone else around, stared at the Dragonling, wondering what kind of creature he was, with those horns and wings. Before he could get any answers, the short girl announced that the fight was about to begin. Trying to be polite and showing a bit of confidence, the Chinese guy started explaining the technique he was going to use. He said it was an ancient style that mimics the movements of animals. He shaped his fingers like the paws of a wild beast and claimed that no unarmed human could stand up to this technique. He dashed confidently towards Mu, warning him not to underestimate him. Mu just stood still on the other side, waiting for the boy to get closer. In a flash, the guy reached Mu and tried to strike him with his fingers, believing he had mastered the tiger style. But unfortunately for him, Mu moved quicker and landed a punch right in his stomach. The boy tried to scream from the pain, but couldn't even get the sound out. He collapsed onto the floor, shocked, finally realizing that he was the one who had underestimated his opponent and was now paying the price. At that point, Mu questioned this kind of martial art and the technique itself, pointing out that no matter how hard the Chinese guy tried to copy the movements of animals, a human body still has its limits, and those moves can be easily predicted and stopped. The Chinese boy slowly got back on his feet, struggling to handle the pain from Mu's single hit. For a moment, he realized his opponent wasn't just some regular kid his age. Mu felt more like a huge concrete wall, way stronger than him. Still, he decided not to give up so easily and was ready to try everything he could. As a last resort, he chose to use a technique his master had specifically told him never to use against people. The Chinese guy, whose name I still don't know, suddenly put one hand on the ground, then the other, which caught Mu off guard. Our main character couldn't help but wonder what was going through this strange guy's mind. While Mu's fight was just starting to get interesting, most people were actually more curious about the battle between Dragonling and the dog, Cerberus. Poor Dragonling, who'd lost almost all his strength and power, was desperately trying to figure out how to deal with this crazy dog. But before he could come up with a plan, the dog charged at him, ready to go after him again. As Cerberus rushed at Dragonling, it looked like all he wanted to do was bite the little lizard, but there was more to it than that. A little before reaching Mu's assistant, the dog suddenly stopped and spread its legs out to the sides. As you'd expect from a Chinese boy's pet, the dog pulled off a ninja move, making it look like there were 3 of him at once. Not just Dragonling, but the whole crowd, especially the streamer girl, was amazed by the Chihuahua, wondering if it was some kind of trained ninja dog. Things got even trickier for the poor lizard when Cerberus attacked, and he found himself facing 3 of those wild dogs with nothing to defend himself. He quickly tried to protect himself with bare hands, thinking that only the one in the middle was real and the others were just fakes. Dragonling went after the one in the middle, the one he thought was real, hoping to stop it before it hurt him, but he was unlucky. The real Chihuahua was actually the one on the left. The dog took advantage of the opening and bit Dragonling's neck hard, making the poor little demigod scream and call for help. After Cerberus finally let go, the streamer girl wrapped up the whole scene for her viewers, talking about the dog's victory. But the crazy Chihuahua wasn't about to let Dragonling off the hook and was already getting ready to attack again. The scene then shifted back to his owner, where the Chinese guy was down in a pose like he was about to do push-ups. But he wasn't working out. It was his way of copying the movements of four-legged animals, getting ready to face Mu in a totally new way. In no time after focusing, the Chinese guy dashed as fast as he could toward Mu. Meanwhile, Mu just stood there, looking calm and completely unfazed by what was happening. Seeing the Chinese guy's unique, and honestly kind of funny technique, the people watching started laughing, wondering what kind of silly martial arts would teach someone moves like that. In the crowd, the Chinese guy's master was there too. Whether it was really him or just his spirit wasn't clear. But one thing was obvious. He wasn't happy to see his student ignore his warning about not using this move on people, especially not in front of an audience. Still, the Chinese boy didn't care about the crowd or even his master. He was totally focused on taking down Mu, and nothing else mattered. Finally, Mu started to show a bit of emotion, trying to figure out what his opponent was planning and how he should defend himself. Before he could come up with a useful plan, the Chinese boy suddenly jumped into the air and went straight for him, aiming to hit him with what he thought were tiger's paws. This time, Mu was caught off guard and didn't have enough time to react, since he was still a little thrown off by the guy's low stance from a moment ago. And just like that, the Chinese boy actually managed to reach Mu's face and, just like a tiger, swiped at him, thinking he'd slashed Mu's face into 5 uneven pieces, or at least that's what he believed happened. After landing a bit further away from Mu following his jumping strike, the Chinese boy watched as Mu, who caught off guard, held his face in pain. Soon, Mu let go and realized he had really underestimated this kid. If he'd actually had claws instead of just fingernails, Mu's face probably wouldn't be in one piece right now. It turned out the only thing the Chinese boy's attack left behind were 4 not-so-deep scratches on Mu's face. Still, the fight was just heating up, and his opponent wasn't about to let him off that easily. The Chinese boy charged at him again, determined to do whatever it took to win against Mu. But this time, he didn't repeat his tiger move. Instead, he started using different animal moves that he thought might do some real damage. One moment he was copying a cat's style, the next he went wild and actually bit Mu's leg like his chihuahua, and after that, he tried to back-kick Mu in the face like an angry horse or donkey. Mu started to realize he couldn't figure out how to fight back, since he'd never faced anyone who fought using all sorts of four-legged animal moves at once. Our main character began to feel stuck, because he just couldn't predict any of his opponent's next moves. True to his nature, even in this tough situation, Mu actually started to feel excited. He realized he'd always wanted to experience a moment like this, fighting hard in a real battle. Suddenly, without really meaning to, Mu's eyes landed on Cerberus, who was standing next to him and looked ready to attack the Dragonling again. Since Mu's opponent was always copying four-legged animals like his dog, it hit him that their weak spots were probably the same too, and that was the area right behind their head, along their back. Right then, Mu figured out how to deal with his wild opponent. Just at that moment, the Chinese guy rushed at him again, coming in with his unique attack. But out of nowhere, he slowed down before reaching Mu, because he saw Mu suddenly kneel down, clearly about to try something sneaky. The other guy had no idea that Mu was gathering all his strength in his legs, flexing his muscles to the max. The Chinese boy tried to attack quickly and stop Mu, but before he could get there, Mu shot up into the air like a kangaroo, so high that his opponent totally lost track of him, wondering where the 3-million-year fighter had disappeared to. Everyone watching started recording the jump in shock, yelling in disbelief because no one thought a human could ever jump that high. With all the noise from the crowd and everyone filming, the Chinese martial artist realized he needed to look up fast and get ready to defend himself. But before he could really react, Mu landed right on his head with one foot, then came down with his other foot on the guy's butt, adding some extra force to make the move even more effective. Now, actually looking happier after all that struggling, Mu realized he'd figured out the best way to attack this four-legged guy. From above, since nothing else seemed to work. People nearby started cheering for Mu, while a few looked pretty mad since they had bet on the Chinese fighter and lost their money like this. After knocking down his opponent, Mu suddenly remembered his assistant was still fighting and got curious about what was happening with the Dragonling. But when he looked over, he saw the Chihuahua had already handled the dragonling like a pro and was now standing there, barking at Mu. The situation got a little weird when Mu suddenly stared at the dog with a scary look, like he was upset to see his assistant had just defeated by this ugly-looking dog. The dog's tough attitude disappeared in an instant, and it went limp like it was playing dead, probably because its instincts told it that Mu was way out of its league. Just then, the announcer declared Mu the winner and announced that the Chinese man's pet was forfeited to him, which made the crowd cheer for Mu once again. With everything dealt with, Mu had just one thing left to do: leave his mark on the worthy opponent who had given him such a hard time. But the dragonling, who was barely hanging on, stopped him and warned that it was forbidden and would just cause trouble, especially since everything was being live-streamed. For once, Mu decided to listen and let the announcer continue with the matches. With that match done, 4 winners were decided. Over the next hour, there were 2 more battles. The 13-win streak champion took both and moved on to the final, waiting for her next challenger. Now it was time for the 7th match, Mu versus his new opponent, with the winner heading to the final. The short announcer girl started hyping up the fighters again. On one side was Mu, the 3-million-year fighter, and on the other side, as she explained, was a professional boxer with tons of experience and victories. To everyone's surprise, it turned out to be none other than Huang, the same guy Mu had beaten up badly last time. Huang still had marks from their last fight, visible on his arm and ear. Facing Mu again, especially when he still wasn't fully healed, was probably the last thing Huang wanted. On the other hand, Mu, being a little slow on the uptake, didn't recognize Huang right away. But after staring at him for a bit, he finally remembered. Unlike Huang, Mu actually got excited, grinning like a kid who just realized he'd get to beat up this tough guy all over again. Despite everything he'd been through, especially his painful last fight with Mu, Huang decided to face Mu again. Only this time he promised himself he wouldn't let his guard down. Both of them stepped forward, ready for the rematch. Just then, the girl in charge called out to start the fight with a single question: who's going to take on the undefeated champion? Right away, both Mu and Huang tried to land the first punch, not breaking eye contact for even a second. Almost like they were trying to show off, they both went for punch to punch, testing each other's strength. Even though Huang's arm still wasn't fully healed, or at least pretending like that, he used that very hand to hit Mu. And, surprisingly, it was Mu who felt the pain shoot through his fist. Mu quickly pulled his hand back, unable to move his fingers because of the sharp pain. Unlike Mu, Huang didn't feel a thing. In fact, he felt a bit relieved to finally give Mu a taste of the pain he'd gone through. After all, Mu was the reason his arm had been in a cast. Mu tried to pull himself together, but the pain was almost too much for anyone to handle. Then again, Mu wasn't just anyone. He decided to use that overwhelming pain as a reminder that he was alive, and that's exactly why he'd come all the way to Earth. With a twisted, intense look on his face in that moment of agony, Mu managed to shock Huang. But instead of just surprising him, Mu's reaction also served as a warning, reminding Huang not to take this guy lightly. Thinking fast, the boxer guy came up with a quick, effective plan and started launching a series of strikes at Mu. Huang wanted to throw Mu off his game by hitting him with a bunch of quick jabs, hoping to distract him. The plan was to find the right moment and then land a powerful kick to finish things. On the other side, Mu was starting to feel better and managed to defend himself pretty easily. With a determined look, Huang moved on to the second part of his plan. He was pretty sure Mu thought of him as just a boxer and would never expect a kick, so he figured this would be his ace up his sleeve. But even before Huang could actually swing his leg, Mu had already picked up on what was coming just by watching the way Huang's foot muscles moved. Feeling confident, Huang started trash-talking Mu, thinking he'd already won, even while his leg was still in the air and hadn't landed anywhere. What he didn't know was that not only had Mu seen the kick coming, but he was also ready to turn the tables. In a flash, Mu landed a sudden punch right to one of Huang's vital spots. Mu had actually learned this technique from Kang, who'd used it on him a while back, but he never got a chance to try it until now. Just like what had happened to Mu before, Huang's body twisted helplessly to the side, turning a full 90 degrees. That move set up the perfect opening for the second part of the technique. As you might know, this move is a 2-part combo. The second part is a brutal strike to the face that follows right after the punch to the knee. Just like Kang did before, Mu pulled it off perfectly, catching Huang completely off guard. Huang couldn't handle the force of that blow. He hit the cold ground hard and was out cold. Suddenly, Mu leapt onto Huang. He wasn't about to take advantage of the moment to kiss that ugly guy. No, he ruthlessly tore off another piece of Huang's ear, completely ignoring Dragonling's earlier warning. The guy who used to bully Lee and then became a quiet boy was in the crowd watching. As someone who had experienced this moment and had been marked by Mu before, he was more terrified than anyone else there. With nobody daring to step in and stop Mu, things finally settled down. Now it was time for the final match against the tall girl with a 13-win streak. Mu was pumped. He'd been waiting for this moment ever since they tried to keep him off the mat and wasted his time. As the seconds ticked by, he started losing control of his body, practically shaking with excitement. Even before the short girl could finish her speech and officially start the fight, Mu lunged forward, eager to get the upper hand. But before he even got close, the girl used her long legs to kick him right in the face. Even though it caught him off guard, Mu managed to block the attack and protect his head, but he was still amazed at her speed. They jumped right back into the fight, no time wasted. But honestly, it felt more like a one-sided beatdown. The girl kept coming at him with kick after kick, barely giving Mu a chance to do anything except dodge or block. He was stuck, unable to figure out how to get close enough to land a hit of his own. They paused for a moment. Mu was breathing hard, trying to figure out how to turn things around. He knew anyone from Midori would be tough, but he also knew he had to find a way to win. The only move he could think of was to do something unexpected. So he pulled the same goofy face he'd made the first time he fought Kang. His opponent was a little thrown off, actually looking worried that something might be wrong with Mu and maybe they should stop the fight. But that was exactly what Mu wanted. He used the moment of confusion to close the gap with a sudden leap. While he was jumping toward the girl, he kept up the silly expression, hoping it would distract her just enough so he could catch her off guard. But his hopes were crushed. Before he even got close, she landed a solid kick right to his face. Even after taking that heavy hit, Mu immediately switched to a backup plan. He gathered all his strength in his leg and, in a flash, spun around to throw a perfect spinning kick toward her face. Unfortunately for him, his leg wasn't quite long enough to land a knockout blow. His awesome spinning kick only managed to knock off the girl's hat, leaving her surprised but unhurt. After that, Mu quickly backed up to a safer distance, already trying to come up with his next move. One thing started to really bother Mu: the huge difference in their size. He couldn't help but wish he'd picked a better body to possess instead of this short guy. Meanwhile, the girl finally realized she'd been underestimating her opponent just because of how he looked. Now, she decided, it was time to get serious. Faster than before, she lunged forward and aimed a direct kick right at Mu's midsection. She landed the kick just like she planned, but Mu was quick enough to block most of the impact by using both hands. Still, that wasn't the end of it. The girl immediately jumped into the air, going for another spinning kick. This time, Mu found himself in a really bad spot. One good hit could have taken him down for good. But then something strange happened. Right as the kick was about to connect, Mu seemed to vanish. Either he dodged so fast it looked like he disappeared, or he actually did vanish for a second. Just like everyone else watching, the girl was completely stunned, trying to figure out where he went. After she landed gracefully, like a pro taekwondo fighter, she quickly looked around to see what was going on. That's when her eyes spotted Mu, and what she saw shocked her even more than before. To her disbelief, Mu was now moving on all fours, just like an animal, copying the Chinese guy he'd fought earlier. Apparently, Mu figured this was his best shot at beating this lamppost girl, so he was ready to try anything. Mu felt pretty sure that by switching up his fighting style, he could at least throw his opponent off and maybe get a better shot at winning. And honestly, his plan was working. The tall girl clearly had no idea how to handle Mu when he moved like this. As soon as Mu lunged at her like a wild dog, the girl tried to kick him in the face like before. But something was different this time. Her moves were way less sharp, almost like she was getting nervous, and Mu dodged her attacks easily, one after another. The more she realized she didn't know how to deal with someone coming at her from such a low stance, the more anxious she got. The crowd started cheering for Mu when they saw his new technique was actually working against the girl with the 13-win streak. Among the crowd was the Chinese guy Mu had fought earlier, and he was honestly blown away that Mu could copy his style so well after just one match, especially since he himself had trained for 5 years and still struggled with it. He and even his master's ghost were quietly impressed by Mu's talent, listening to the same people who used to laugh at that style now cheering for Mu as he did it. But the one who was most impressed was the Chinese master's ghost, who could see just how perfectly Mu was pulling off his technique. Back to the fighters. Mu kept dodging the girl's strikes, one after another. But all of a sudden, he decided he needed to do more than just avoid her hits. He started circling around her on all fours, moving as fast as he could. The tall girl looked even more confused and shocked than before, wondering what kind of animal could spin around like that. Besides, maybe a cockroach. Not sure how to stop him, she suddenly sensed that Mu wanted to use her blind spot to launch an attack. Without thinking, her body just reacted. She spun around and kicked out, and this time she actually hit something. Only after making contact did she look more closely to see if she'd finally landed a blow on Mu, or if he was still standing. But all she'd managed to hit was her own hat, which was somehow floating in midair. The slightly battered hat fell to the floor, showing off the handiwork of its owner. Quicker than lightning, Mu suddenly appeared on the girl's other side. She hadn't noticed that it was all part of his plan, a trick to distract her and find an opening. In the next instant, she realized someone was standing right in front of her. She was shocked, only now realizing how easily she'd been tricked. That was Mu's moment to shine, not by copying the moves of small, sneaky animals, but by showing the strength of a mighty behemoth, something the girl definitely deserved. We all know Mu lived for 3 million years as one of the earliest humans on Earth, but he didn't always stay there. About 3,000 years before he became the god of gods and the god of Earth, he was forced to live on the Lucifer's designated planet. It didn't take Mu long to realize that, unlike Earth, this place was overflowing with endless mana. Because of that, nearly all the animals there evolved rapidly into what we now call monsters. Even in such a doomed place, Mu not only survived, he kept getting stronger by hunting and eating those monsters. But there was one creature that was different from all the rest. Its size alone set it apart, but Mu soon discovered its power too was beyond anything he'd ever faced before. That's actually why Mu wanted to copy the behemoth's skills today, because the behemoth's authority still impressed him. Honestly, it makes the most sense for Mu to try and imitate the moves of such a massive, powerful creature instead of just copying regular animals. That's the story behind Mu's technique. Now, he quickly came up with a simple plan in his mind for how he'd actually copy the behemoth's move. It wasn't too complicated. He just needed to rearrange his muscles to mimic the creature as closely as possible, and then strike. Surprisingly, Mu wasn't planning to punch the girl. He was going to attack in a different way. The tall girl, caught off guard, couldn't do anything but watch the attack coming. Mu hit her hard, so hard and fast that she couldn't believe it was coming from a scrawny, short kid like him. But that wasn't the end of it. The force behind Mu's attack was so strong that it sent his opponent flying, kind of like she'd been hit by a speeding truck. She went flying backward until she crashed into the same bench and table where the short girl had been interviewing the participants. Strangely, she didn't pass out. Instead, she just felt a sharp pain in her side, probably from some broken bones. Unfortunately for her, Mu wasn't about to let her off the hook. He leaped after her, ready to finish things off using both hands and putting every ounce of his strength into it. This wasn't even his own move. It was the behemoth's technique he was trying to copy. But right in the middle of the air, before Mu could pull off the perfect move, the announcer girl jumped in. She stepped in at just the right moment and saved the tall girl, declaring that the match was already over since the tall girl had been thrown out of the ring. Not long after that, the short girl announced Mu's victory over the famous champion with a 13-win streak, of course adding a little surprise to the announcement. She wasn't the only one surprised. Everyone around them was even more shocked. Some people were amazed at how strong Mu was and that he managed to beat the girl, while others were stunned that the announcer girl jumped in to save Mu's opponent with an excuse no one had ever heard before. Without caring about their opinions, the announcer wrapped up her broadcast, pretending to be satisfied with how things turned out. But as soon as the streaming ended, her attitude changed completely. With an annoyed look on her face, she told Mu she'd give him his 1,000,001 prize. He just needed to follow her. A few minutes later, the girl led Mu into a quiet alley nearby. As they walked, she started talking. At first, it seemed like she might try to pay Mu in some other way, maybe even by offering herself, but that wasn't the case at all. Mu wasn't the kind of guy who cared about that stuff, even if she tried. As you might expect from someone as feisty as the short girl, she had something totally different in mind, something Mu had no clue about. Without any warning, the short girl spun around with a quick move. Then she suddenly jumped up and nailed Mu right in the chest with a knee strike, catching him completely off guard. She was barely a meter tall, and Mu had been casually standing there with his hands in his pockets, expecting anything but that. That hit landed hard, way harder than Mu could handle with his current body. He crumpled to the ground, totally stunned and unable to process what just happened. Letting his guard down around this little demon turned out to be a huge mistake. That's when the girl finally revealed who she really was. She was actually one of the top 3 Godori members and introduced herself as Chun-gu, the true final opponent Mu had completely missed. Mu looked like someone who couldn't even catch his breath, let alone swallow his saliva. However, it wasn't so unexpected for him. He had sensed everything from the tension in Chun-gu's muscles that indicated she was about to attack. Still, He had purposely chosen not to dodge or block or strike. He wanted to take the first hit, thinking it would officially kick off the fight. What he didn't expect was just how hard Chun-gu would hit him, hard enough to leave him totally unable to move, never mind put up a fight. That brutal blow somehow temporarily knocked Mu out of commission, and all he could do was watch as Chun-gu walked away. Off to the side, the tall girl was waiting in case her shorty friend needed backup. When she saw Chun-gu, her whole demeanor changed. She looked totally ashamed and instantly started apologizing for letting her guard down and causing trouble. But Chun-gu didn't get mad or anything. Instead, she just told her teammate to hurry up, and the two of them took off, hoping to get out of there before anyone saw them. Meanwhile, Mu was barely able to crawl toward the street. His voice was shaky and weak as he whispered, "Don't go, I can still fight." But when he realized they were already gone, he quickly called out to Dragonling, asking for his healing orb so he could chase after them. Unfortunately, Dragonling was nowhere to be found. That's when Mu realized he hadn't seen Dragonling since they left the arena. Without any more explanation, the scene shifted to another part of the city, where Lee's bully was rushing down the street, carrying something suspicious hidden under his shirt. He was sweating and clearly panicked, wondering how he'd ended up in such a mess. It all started a few days ago, when Huang introduced him to a gambling site. He got curious and started playing a few games online. At first, he just wanted to make a little money on the side, but things quickly spiraled out of control. In just 10 minutes, he lost 5 million won from his mom's bank account. At first, it was only a small loss, but every time he tried to win it back, he ended up betting more. Before he knew it, he was in way over his head. He knew if his parents found out about this, he'd probably end up homeless, or worse, considering how much he deserved it after what he did. So, desperate to fix things, he grabbed something valuable and ran to a spot that gave out loans to students his age if they brought in something worth enough as collateral. A few minutes later, he finally made it to the place and dropped his shirt and whatever was wrapped up inside it on the desk. The man in charge gave him an annoyed look and asked, "What is that? And what do you want?" Catching his breath, the battered bully started unwrapping his shirt, and, just as you might have guessed, something familiar appeared. That something was Dragonling, with his hands and legs tied up, and of course, he couldn't speak. Right away, the kid pulled out his phone and showed a picture of a tuatara, a rare species of lizard from New Zealand. He held his phone next to the poor Dragonling, trying to convince the man that Dragonling was actually a mutated tuatara, making him incredibly rare and super valuable. The guy at the counter looked skeptical. He didn't really care about the kid's story and instead glanced over at someone quietly sitting in the corner, the real boss. The beaten-up kid kept rambling, totally unaware that the man behind him was actually the one in charge. But with just a slight nod from the boss, everything was settled. They decided to give the annoying kid his loan, and that was that. He came out of the place, but he didn't look too happy. He'd only managed to get 1 million won. Still, he tried to cheer himself up as he started heading back, convincing himself that this was the best way to get his mom's money back as quickly as possible. Just as he was having his little moment of relief, a guy in a hoodie walked right past him, not even giving him a second glance. It seemed like this person was heading to the same place the bully had just left, climbing up the stairs to the same building. Whoever he was, the hoodie guy made it to the office and placed a Daljun school ID card on the table as collateral. He nervously asked if he could get as much money as possible in a short-term loan. The guy's nerves were written all over his face, so the man in the black suit told him to take off his hoodie to make sure he hadn't just stolen someone's ID. The person did what he was told and pulled off the hoodie. It was obvious this wasn't Daljun, but there was a definite resemblance, just different hair and eye color. It was hard to tell if this person was a boy or a girl, but one thing was clear. They were terrified of getting caught, and their nervousness was off the charts. The man behind the counter didn't make a fuss, and with a nod from his boss, agreed to give 450,000 won to the one pretending to be Daljun, reminding them to make their payments on time. With that, the person left the place as quickly as possible, glancing around nervously, still worried about getting caught. Just a few seconds later, while they were trying to figure out which way to go, the mastermind behind all of this, Youngjo, stepped in and stopped them. With a curious look on his face, Youngjo asked if they'd managed to get the money or not. Still shaking from nerves, the person pulled out the pocket of cash to show him, confirming that the mission was a success. Both kept walking, and Youngjo, clearly pleased that they'd scored some money, started explaining why he couldn't be seen anywhere near that place. Back inside that place with the quirky name, Grandma Money Collateral, the boss, wearing his ugly purple hoodie, was fiddling with Daljun's ID card. His employee, looking a bit uneasy, walked over and asked why the boss agreed to give loans to those suspicious students, since it was obvious they wouldn't be able to pay it back. The boss just smirked, flicked the card with a practiced hand, and made it stick right into the wooden board in front of him. He said there was nothing to worry about because there were plenty of ways to get his money back. Strangely enough, the board where he just stuck Daljun's ID card was exactly where Dragonling was tied up, right in the middle, surrounded by a bunch of other ID cards. The next day at school, a loud scream echoed through the halls. It was President Kim. She had just found out that the Dragonling had been missing since yesterday, and she couldn't believe it. Mu had only mentioned what happened to the Dragonling because he assumed it had gone to the girl's place, but now, seeing Kim's reaction, he realized that wasn't the case at all. President Kim lost her cool for a moment and started searching all over the classroom, convinced the Dragonling was just napping somewhere. However, when she couldn't find it there, she rushed out to check the rest of the school. Mu was taken aback by how much she was freaking out, totally unaware that the person behind him was actually the one responsible for his little winged lizard's disappearance. Meanwhile, in another classroom, the door suddenly flew open and Kim burst in, yelling the Dragonling's name over and over. Just like before, she started checking every cubby and corner, one after another. Coincidentally, Kang was sitting in that very class. He didn't really know her that much, but her frantic search and panicked shouts grabbed his attention, just like everyone else's. A few minutes later, Mu was relaxing at his desk when the door creaked open and someone tried to slip inside. It was the class president, but this time she was being carried in by the teacher like she weighed nothing. The teacher gently told her to go straight to her seat and not cause any more trouble. She did what the teacher told her and went back to her seat, which was right in front of Mu. Looking disappointed, she told Mu that she had searched every inch of the school but still couldn't find the Dragonling. Mu, on the other hand, seemed pretty calm. He already knew she wouldn't find his little lizard there. But when he casually mentioned that he hadn't lost the Dragonling at school, but actually after the arena, Kim got a little annoyed with him and asked why he hadn't said it sooner. Suddenly, Mu pulled out a hand-drawn map and set it on his desk. The girl's eyes widened in surprise because she recognized it instantly. It was the same map she'd drawn the other day and given to the Dragonling, hoping it would help them find the arena more easily. Mu didn't bring out the map just for show. He wanted to point out exactly where he'd last seen the Dragonling. The moment he pointed to the spot, Kim snatched the map out of his hands and, without thinking twice, dashed out of the classroom. But just as she was about to make her escape, the teacher noticed and hurried after her, yelling, "Why are you trying to ditch class?" It only took him a few seconds to catch up to President Kim, and no matter how much she pleaded with him to let her go just this once, he wouldn't change his mind. Just like last time, the teacher brought Kim back into the classroom, warning her to sit down before he had to get really serious. She reluctantly returned to her seat, feeling awful that she couldn't go look for the Dragonling. Mu didn't say or do anything, not to help her, not even to comfort her. It was like he didn't care what happened to the poor little creature at all. Honestly, Mu's mind was somewhere else completely. He was still thinking about his unfinished fight with the top 3 Godori members. Every time he got close to wrapping things up, someone would butt in and ruin it. He couldn't stop thinking that he needed to do something about it, but there was a problem. His body was in rough shape, and that really annoyed him. Sure, he only pushed a few muscles to their limit for a short time, but now his whole body felt worn out and desperate for a break. Like always, the pain and exhaustion were kind of exciting for him. He actually liked feeling this way because it made him feel alive more than ever. Still, if he wanted to get back in the ring and finish what he started swiftly, he knew he'd need another healing orb, and to get that, he had to find the Dragonling first. The school day dragged on much longer than usual, but finally, it was over. As soon as the bell rang, Kim wasted no time. She grabbed Mu's aching hand and started pulling him along in a hurry, determined not to waste another second. As soon as they reached the stairs, they accidentally bumped into Kang. Kang recognized Kim and asked why she was in such a rush and what all the panic was about earlier that morning. Kim started to explain that the Dragonling was missing, but before she could finish, Daljun cut her off, complaining that she couldn't find her wallet. Kim seemed to forget about the little lizard for a second and suddenly blurted out, asking if Daljun was Kang's girlfriend. Both Kang and Daljun quickly denied it, making faces like the idea was just gross. Kim realized how awkward she'd made things and immediately apologized, but then she started crying, telling them she desperately needed help to find the Dragonling, which she thought of as her own beloved pet. Kang had seen the Dragonling around a few times, but he still didn't really get what Kim was talking about. Mu tried to explain that the Dragonling used to be huge but had shrunk down to a much smaller size, hoping that would help everyone know what to look for. Mu did her best to describe what the Dragonling looked like in more detail. However, only after a few moments, he realized everyone else had wandered off and no one was even listening to him anymore. He stood there, a bit stunned and feeling kind of left out. But then he shrugged it off, deciding to use as a chance to focus on his own training and recovery, while the other three went off searching for his dragonling assistant in his place. Meanwhile, in the school bathroom, Yangzhou was multitasking, trying to take care of business and play a game on his phone at the same time. But this wasn't just any game. It was the same gambling app where the Dragonling's thief had lost all his parents' money. Everything seemed to be going fine until a loud bang on the toilet stall door changed the whole vibe. Of course, it was Yangzhou himself, accidentally headbutting the door out of sheer excitement, not because he'd lost all his money, but actually the opposite. On his last possible attempt, he'd hit the jackpot and scored what looked like a massive reward. Yangzhou was over the moon. After losing everything earlier, this win felt like a miracle, and he started imagining all the things he could do with the money. He decided he should cash out right away before he did something stupid and lost it all again. But when the big guy finally found the button to claim his reward, his happy grin froze. Something was definitely off. He tried again, just to make sure, and this time his suspicions started to feel like cold, hard truth. A wave of sweat rolled down his face, then over his whole body, as he realized the game was a total scam. He hadn't won anything. In fact, he'd lost all his money the moment he started playing. There was nothing he could do about it now, and the crushing realization left him stunned and helpless. 6 days later, the scene shifts back to Mu, who was acting a little wild again. Instead of joining the search for the poor dragonling, he was just standing in middle of path, staring at the teacher with his signature creepy grin, clearly trying to provoke him and maybe even start a fight. Meanwhile, President Kim and Daljun had spent the last 6 days launching a huge search party, looking everywhere near the spot where the dragonling was last seen. Kang helped out as much as he could too, but even with all their effort, they still hadn't found a single trace of the dragonling, not even a stray scale. On the 6th day, after hours of searching, the girls were exhausted and finally found a place to sit and catch their breath. President Kim, feeling guilty, apologized to Daljun for dragging her into all this and causing so much trouble. But Daljun just smiled and told her it was no big deal. Still, as grateful as Kim was to Daljun, she was equally frustrated with Mu. She blamed him for not lifting a finger to help, even though he was the dragonling's owner and the one who lost it in the first place. Wanting to do something nice for Daljun to make up for all her help, Kim offered to grab her something to drink and told her to just relax until she got back. What Kim didn't realize was that just moments after she left, a suspicious man appeared behind Daljun, who still had no clue she was in any danger. From the ID card in his hand, it was pretty obvious who he really was and what he was doing there. A few minutes later, Kim came back holding a pack of drink, but something immediately felt off because she couldn't find Daljun. Strangely, her seat was empty, and she was nowhere to be found. Before anything else, let's clear something up. We saw Mu acting weird in front of the big teacher, but it wasn't because he wanted to provoke him or start a fight. Honestly, Mu was just really impressed by the teacher's well-trained body, something he hadn't seen anywhere else. The teacher, on the other hand, was totally thrown off by Mu's odd behavior. He had no idea Mu was just checking out his muscles. For a split second, the teacher almost lost his cool when Mu touched his chest and commented on how hard he must have been working out on that spot lately. The teacher wasn't thrilled about Mu speaking to him so casually, but since Mu actually noticed all the effort he'd put into building those muscles, he decided to let it go. The real shock came when Mu suddenly announced he was joining the teacher's training session, acting like he didn't even need to ask for permission. That's when the teacher was left completely stunned. He had no clue what was really going on in Mu's head. Meanwhile, the scene changed to another part of the city, where someone was holding Daljun's ID card. Of course, that someone was the guy in charge of the grandma's pawn shop, and Daljun, alive and well, was right there, yelling at him to give her card back. The man shot Daljun a scary look and told her he had her ID card because she'd left it with them as collateral when she borrowed money before. Daljun was totally shocked and tried to convince him that she had never set foot there or borrowed any money. That's when the boss suddenly stepped in and punched the desk to get everyone's attention. In a firm voice, he demanded to know why Daljun was pretending not to remember, especially when it was time to pay up. Backing up his boss, the guy in the black suit chimed in and said they had her card because she'd given it to them herself. That's when Daljun realized arguing with them wasn't going to get her anywhere, so she just asked how much she needed to pay to get her ID card back. The employee told her the total amount she owed was 550,000 won, and only 50,000 won of that was interest. Daljun tried to act cool, pretending it wasn't a big deal and saying she could pay them back soon. She was hoping they'd just hand over her card right then, but of course, it wasn't that easy. The intimidating guy just opened a drawer and tossed her ID card in, telling her she had 1 week to pay up before they came looking for her again. With that, Daljun started to leave, but not before demanding that they make sure not to lose her ID card. A moment later, Daljun stormed out of the room and slammed the door behind her as hard as she could. The loud bang really annoyed the employee, but unfortunately, his irritated expression gave his boss the wrong idea. The boss thought the guy was annoyed at him, and as soon as he brought it up, the employee started sweating and rushed to explain himself before things could get worse. Things calmed down pretty quickly once the man apologized and promised it wouldn't happen again. The rest of that day went by without any exciting thing happening. The following night, that same employee finished up at the office, locked the door, and casually tossed the key onto a flower pot before heading out. He grumbled to himself about why he had to take orders from that kid, someone who couldn't even go to the bathroom by himself. As he walked down the stairs, he had no idea Daljun was hiding upstairs, waiting for just this moment. Once the unlucky employee left, Daljun quietly made her way toward the office, planning to grab her ID card and get out as fast as possible. At first, she didn't expect the door to be locked, but luckily, she spotted the key gleaming on the flower pot. She snatched it up and unlocked the door without making a sound. What she didn't realize was that, right after she slipped inside, someone else quietly entered the building as well. Without wasting any time, Daljun headed straight for the desk and yanked the drawer open. It didn't take her long to find her ID card, and when she finally had it in her hands, she couldn't have been happier. She quickly decided to get out of there before anyone could show up, but as she was walking past a commode, something inside suddenly made a loud noise. Naturally, the sound grabbed Daljun's attention. Even though she was nervous, her curiosity got the better of her. Just for a second, she wanted to know what had caused that noise. She carefully opened the commode door and discovered something inside, locked up in a cage. It was too dark to see clearly at first, but whatever it was started to move. The first thing Daljun saw were a pair of glowing eyes, and then its whole face came into view. Of course, it was none other than the poor dragonling, who immediately started shouting to be set free, not even realizing who had opened the door. Daljun had never come face to face with a dragonling before, and seeing a little lizard with wings and horns making such a ruckus scared her half to death. She instinctively took a few steps back, totally freaked out. Things got even more complicated when she realized she'd bumped into something big, and a bit soft. She turned around to see what it was and just froze. Standing right behind her was Yangzhou. She didn't recognize him, but just seeing him there in that situation made her forget all about the dragonling for a moment. Yangzhou was just as surprised as Daljun, but when he saw that she was about to scream and draw unwanted attention, he quickly put his hand over her mouth and whispered for her to stay quiet before anyone found out he was there. It only took Yangzhou a few seconds to recognize Daljun. She was the one whose ID card he'd used to borrow money the other day. Realizing she was just there to get her card back, Yangzhou explained that he was after his own ID card too. He suggested they both get what they came for, keep things quiet, and then get out of there fast. Daljun nodded, feeling much better now. She picked up her ID card and grabbed the dragonling before leaving. The only reason she decided to rescue Dragonling was that she remembered his face on the poster Kim had drawn when Dragonling was missing. As Daljun was about to leave the building, she couldn't help but think how terrible these people were, not only stealing people's ID cards, but even locking up someone's pet. She had no idea what had really happened in that office, and even less of a clue that a security camera had caught her actions on tape. The next morning, on her way to school, Daljun spotted Kim and ran straight toward her, calling her name over and over until Kim finally noticed. Kim was totally shocked to see Daljun. She hadn't expected to see her safe and sound after she'd gone missing the day before. As Kim tried to express how worried she'd been about Daljun disappearing without a word, Daljun just smiled and didn't bother explaining what had happened. Instead, she apologized and told Kim she had a surprise to make up for worrying her. She unzipped her backpack, and right then, a pair of little dragonling hands popped out, followed by the rest of its body, gasping for air after almost running out of oxygen in the bag. As soon as Kim saw the dragonling, she couldn't help herself. She rushed over and scooped the poor thing up, hugging it tightly. While Kim was squeezing and fussing over Dragonling, telling him how much she'd missed him, Dragonling suddenly caught a familiar scent coming from a little way off. Not paying any attention to Kim anymore, he wriggled out of her arms and dashed straight toward the source of the smell, Moo. Moo was just walking when Dragonling suddenly managed to grab his arm, unaware that Moo's arm was already at its limit and covered in sores. Without thinking, Moo swung his hand so hard that the poor Dragonling fell to the ground. Only then did Moo realize it was Dragonling who had suddenly latched onto his hand. Instead of apologizing or showing any sign of happiness at seeing him again, Moo simply told Dragonling to be more careful, explaining that his whole body hurt from training. Seeing this, Kim rushed over and blamed Moo for the way he treated Dragonling, especially after just finding him. But as always, Moo didn't care, neither about his assistant nor about Kim's complaints. That was what was happening with Moo, but things were way more intense over at Grandma's money collateral loans. The staff there had already noticed that 2 ID cards and the Dragonling were missing. When they checked the security cameras, they saw exactly how Daljun had snuck in and out with the Dragonling, and then Yangzhou followed after her, got his own ID card, and left. The guy in the black suit turned to his boss and casually asked what they should do about it. That question just made the boss furious. He could barely hold back from giving his employee a real lesson for being so careless with the keys. At the very last second, he stopped himself from actually hitting the guy and tried to calm down. Still, the idea that two high school kids had the nerve to break into his office and challenge his authority was almost more than he could handle. A few hours later at school, while the students were outside for gym class, a bunch of them started playing soccer. One of the kids, who was pretty excited, had control of the ball and decided to take a shot, completely unaware that Mu was standing right in front of him. To everyone's shock, Mu didn't even flinch. He just stood there and let the ball smack him right in the face. At first you might think he just didn't know the rules of soccer, which is true, but as you well know, the real reason Mu let the ball hit him, and gave himself a bloody nose, was because he never backed down from any kind of preemptive attack, and this time wasn't any different. The ball dropped to the ground after hitting, and as Mu's face came into view, he suddenly rushed at the bald boy who'd kicked the ball at him. The boy had no clue why Mu hadn't moved to dodge or why he was now charging at him. Before he could figure out either, Mu reached him and landed a punch right in his stomach, totally catching him off guard. The boy fell to the ground, and Mu stood over him. The other students quickly realized that if they didn't jump in now, Mu might neuter this guy too. So, they all rushed to stop Mu, and things got chaotic. So much so that the teacher on the other side finally noticed something was wrong. Mu, not caring about anything going on around him, kept fighting anyone who tried to get in his way. He was actually having a blast, thinking all of this was just part of gym class. Meanwhile, a little farther away, Kim and Dragonling found a quiet spot to themselves. Kim, not even paying attention to Mu's brawl, handed Dragonling her old phone. She told him he could use it to text or call her if he ever needed anything. Since she knew neither Mu nor Dragonling had a phone, she figured it was probably a good idea for Dragonling to have hers, just in case they needed to get in touch. Dragonling looked a little surprised as he checked out the phone, while Kim chatted away about Wi-Fi and messenger apps. But honestly, he had no idea what any of that meant. Kim could tell he was totally lost, so she figured she'd better start with the basics. But before she could even get going, Dragonling's attention snapped to something else. A few meters behind them, Lee's old bully was sitting there, still playing that stupid gambling game, and, as usual, losing his money. Dragonling recognized him right away. After all, this was the guy who'd kidnapped him and kept him locked up. Without thinking twice, Dragonling dropped the phone and dashed straight toward him. The bully saw Dragonling coming, but before he could even ask what was going on, Dragonling leapt at him and latched onto his face, biting his forehead as hard as he could. The guy freaked out, flailing and doing everything he could to pry Dragonling off before things got any worse. After a struggle, he finally managed to toss Dragonling to the ground and then took off running as fast as he could. As he was fleeing, it started to dawn on him who Dragonling really was. Not far from that event, Mu was walking with the teacher, who was doing his best to explain that Mu couldn't just attack anyone who touched him, otherwise he wouldn't be allowed to join the training sessions. But right at that moment, the same bully, in his panic, accidentally bumped into Mu, lost his balance, and ended up crashing to the ground, getting pretty banged up in the process. Mu glanced over at him and a grin spread across his face, saying, "Hey, it's gym time." He pounced on the boy and started beating him up without holding back. He didn't stop until the teacher finally stepped in and had to physically pull Mu away from the fight. Mu's exciting day ended way sooner than he'd hoped. On the way back to Lee's house, Kim decided to walk with him. While Mu was daydreaming about having gym class like that every day, Kim tried to explain that real PE wasn't anything like what he thought it was. Since Kim knew there was no changing Mu's mind, she switched topics. She asked if she could hang out with Dragonling for the rest of the day. To sweeten the deal, she even invited Mu over to her place, saying she could show both of them how to actually use a phone while they were there. Just a few meters ahead, Daljun and her classmate were busy chatting about girly stuff, laughing and having a good time, not paying attention to anything around them. Kang was walking the same route, a little behind Daljun and of course Mu, rubbing his sore neck and wondering if he just slept funny last night. Not far behind him was Daljun's brother, Hyjin, deep in conversation on the phone with his class president. Out of nowhere, someone suddenly stepped into Daljun's path and called out to her. But, not knowing her name, they just shouted, "Hey, wallet owner." That definitely got Daljun's attention. She turned around and saw Yangzhou standing right in front of her. For some reason, Yangzhou looked like he'd been through the ringer, bruised, beat up, and now was asking Daljun for her student ID. Daljun was totally shocked. She barely even recognized Yangzhou, and had no idea why he suddenly needed her ID card. That's when Yangzhou blurted out what they'd done and mentioned that both of them had been caught on the security cameras. It still wasn't clear why, but Yangzhou said he needed to return Daljun's ID card to whoever was looking for it. His explanation didn't make much sense to Daljun or her friend. When Daljun hesitated, mostly because her friend shot her a nervous look, Yangzhou got frustrated and started yelling, demanding her ID right then and there. Since Daljun wasn't cooperating, Yangzhou decided to dig through her own backpack to try to find it himself. That's when the commotion caught Kang's and Heijin's attention. It only took them a few seconds to realize that some big guy was hassling little Daljun. The second they figured it out, both of them snapped. Fueled by anger, they lost their cool and charged straight toward Yangzhou and Daljun as fast as they could. On their way, they rushed past Mu, who still had no idea what was going on right in front of him. Stunned and confused, Mu couldn't help but wonder what all the fuss was about. But in the next moment, he put two and two together and realized the current situation. Meanwhile, Yangzhou was doing everything he could to grab Daljun's ID card, warning her that there would be consequences if she didn't give it to him. However, before he could do anything else, Kang and Heijin suddenly leapt into action, literally jumping into the air to give Yangzhou the payback they thought he deserved. Both of them swung at him at the same time, fully expecting their punches to land. But none of their hits connected. Out of nowhere, Mu appeared and blocked both their punches. As expected, he wasn't doing it to help Yangzhou. He just wanted to finish his own unfinished business with him, one-on-one. Heijin and Kang were totally dumbfounded. They never expected Mu to step in and actually save Yangzhou, so they were left standing there, stunned. Even Yangzhou was confused, with no idea what had just happened or who these new people were. But as he looked closer, something about Mu started to jog his memory, reminding him of their last meeting. Which, honestly, hadn't ended well for Yangzhou at all. Instead of just standing around, Yangzhou took the chance to grab Daljun and make a run for it. Somehow he actually pulled it off, even as Mu just stood there watching like a total clueless goof, while Daljun shouted and called for help. Heijin and Kang, though, weren't nearly as slow to react. They took off after Yangzhou right away, leaving Mu behind looking confused all over again. But when Mu saw the two of them chasing after Yangzhou, he figured they wanted to fight him too, so he started running after Yangzhou as well, yelling out that he called dibs on the fight first. It didn't take long before Yangzhou ducked into an alley, hoping to lose those three crazy guys chasing him. But no such luck. All three of them followed right behind him. Whether it was on purpose or not, Yangzhou soon found himself cornered with no way out. Kang, on the other hand, recognized the place instantly. He realized he'd been here not too long ago. This was the same alley where he and Mu first ended up, back when Daljun was being held captive. Right then, Yangzhou dropped Daljun from his shoulder, making her land on the ground with a small thud. She hit the pavement hard on her butt, but at least she wasn't being carried anymore. Next, he tossed his backpack to the ground and squared up in a fighting stance, basically daring all three of them to come at him at once. Mu stepped forward and announced that he'd be the one to fight Yangzhou alone. Heijin shot Mu a sideways glance and then started yelling. He'd only met Mu a few times and didn't even know his name, but one thing was obvious to him. Mu was just messing around. Looking frustrated, Heijin demanded to know why Mu had blocked their attacks earlier and was now putting his sister's life at risk just so he could go one-on-one with Yangzhou. It was easy for Mu to see that Heijin was really angry, but instead of apologizing for acting reckless, Mu challenged Heijin to a fight after he finished dealing with Yangzhou. Right then, someone placed a hand on Mu's shoulder. And of course, it was Yangzhou. Seeing Mu distracted, Yangzhou took advantage of the moment. He didn't just rest his hand on Mu's shoulder, he squeezed it, hard. Pain shot through Mu's shoulder and spread across his body. He turned his head and found himself face to face with Yangzhou. Yet despite the agony making his right side tremble, Mu's usual grin remained plastered on his face. With a sudden move, Mu managed to break free from Yangzhou's grip, but it didn't last long. Yangzhou grabbed his shoulder again, clearly with a new plan in mind. After Yangzhou put his hand on Mu's shoulder, he slipped one foot behind Mu and used a judo move, a quick leg sweep, to flip Mu into the air and slam him hard onto the ground. With Yangzhou's huge frame compared to Mu's smaller body, he had a big advantage with this technique. Mu hit the ground with a heavy thud, his eyes going wide from the shock and pain. In the middle of all this, Heijin suddenly dashed over, not to help Mu, but to use the chaos to his advantage. While Yangzhou was distracted, Heijin grabbed Daljun's hand and started running in the opposite direction. In his mind, the smartest way to survive in this world was to avoid fighting whenever possible, especially when his sister's safety was on the line. Yangzhou noticed what was happening, but he wasn't in a position to stop them, not even if it meant losing his chance to get Daljun's ID card. Mu, on the other hand, looked totally fine. Strangely enough, he didn't feel any pain, even after that brutal takedown. Even Mu himself was surprised. He'd expected to be hurting, but then it hit him. All the tough training with his teacher must have paid off, turning his back muscles into a kind of natural shield. In one quick move, Mu tightened his back muscles as much as he could, then released them all at once. Just like that, he managed to stand up from the ground without even using his hands. Yangzhou, who had been distracted by Heijin and Daljun, suddenly realized Mu was already back on his feet, looking like nothing had happened. Before either of them could jump back into the fight, Kang calmly asked Mu if he needed any help finishing off Yangzhou. Mu confidently turned him down, insisting he had it under control. But then, he made the same mistake as before, losing focus for just a second. Yangzhou spotted this and tried to catch Mu off guard again. This time, though, Mu was ready. He'd been keeping an eye on Yangzhou's movements, so he dodged just in time. Yangzhou first aimed a strike at Mu's head, but when Mu managed to dodge it, Yangzhou switched tactics. He grabbed Mu's right arm and then grabbed hold of his shirt with his other hand. Using his strength, Yangzhou lifted Mu off the ground again and slammed him down like he weighed nothing. Oddly enough, Mu didn't feel much pain, and he was starting to believe it was all thanks to his tough training. What he didn't realize until the very last moment was that he wasn't the only one taking those hits. Each time he hit the ground, his poor dragonling companion acted like an airbag, cushioning the blow and taking the brunt of the damage, never complaining, never saying a word. The next thing Mu knew, Yangzhou's foot was coming straight for his face. Forgetting all about the dragonling for a second, Mu quickly jumped out of the way to avoid the blow. He paused at a safe distance, his expression turning serious. In his mind, Yangzhou had just tried to attack his beloved assistant on purpose, and that really ticked him off. Without thinking twice and acting like he truly cared about the dragonling, Mu launched a flurry of punches at Yangzhou, not giving him a moment to breathe. Yangzhou, for his part, was struggling. All he could do was shield his face from Mu's heavy punches. Under the onslaught, Yangzhou couldn't help but feel helpless, wondering how someone as light as Mu could pack such a powerful punch. Mu kept swinging, yelling that it was payback for the dragonling. But honestly, it seemed like he was just enjoying the fight, and using revenge for the dragonling as a flimsy excuse. That's when Yangzhou realized he had to do something fast, or he'd completely lose control of the situation. The only idea he had was to use his size to his advantage, so he rushed at Mu, hoping to body slam him. Mu's excited grin vanished in an instant as he realized what was happening. In that moment, Yangzhou didn't look like a person anymore. He looked like a huge boulder barreling toward him. Mu found himself trapped with nowhere to run, so he made a split-second decision to stand his ground and defend himself. He braced his legs as hard as he could and faced Yangzhou head-on, ready for the impact. No matter how hard Mu tried to stop Yangzhou, the difference in their size and weight was just too much. Yangzhou pushed Mu back so forcefully that Mu couldn't hold his ground and ended up getting tossed aside. Even though it all happened pretty fast, Mu managed to land near Kang without hurting himself, looking surprisingly graceful. Kang, who had been calmly watching the fight the whole time, still didn't step in. Knowing Mu's wild personality, and just to be sure, Kang asked again if Mu really didn't want any help getting rid of this gorilla. Instead of answering directly, Mu handed the dragonling over to Kang and told him to take good care of him. So Mu put on a brave face in front of Kang, but deep down he had no clue how he was going to take on such a huge guy head-to-head. The challenge, though, was exactly what fired him up. Suddenly, Mu got an idea and rushed at Yangzhou, thinking he could take him down bit by bit by aiming for his weak spots. Since Mu was much smaller, he was also way faster, and he figured that was his best shot. Using his speed, he zipped around to Yangzhou's blind spot and landed 2 quick punches to Yangzhou's side and the back of his thigh. Right after, Yangzhou spun around to defend himself, but Mu was so quick that he managed to leap to the other side before Yangzhou could even throw a punch. That's when Mu saw his chance and landed 2 solid punches right to the front of Yangzhou's thighs. The impact nearly knocked Yangzhou off balance. He had to use his hands to steady himself so he wouldn't fall over. Yangzhou was starting to panic, realizing he couldn't keep up if Mu kept darting around and fighting like a sneaky little rat. So he got clever for a second and came up with a plan. Out of nowhere, Yangzhou pointed behind Mu and yelled, "Hey, this is supposed to be one-on-one. 2 against 1 isn't fair, Iljime." Our not-so-bright main character totally fell for it and spun around to tell Kang not to join the fight, only to see that Kang hadn't moved an inch since Mu handed him the dragonling. Before Mu could put 2 and 2 together and realize he'd been tricked, Yangzhou was suddenly behind him. In a flash, Yangzhou wrapped his arms tightly around Mu's neck, locking in an MMA move called a rear naked choke. Mu realized too late what Yangzhou was up to, and now there was no way to break free from his grip. On the other hand, Yangzhou was confident in his technique, certain that Mu wouldn't last more than 15 seconds before passing out from the pressure. As soon as Kang saw Yangzhou pull that dirty trick and caught Mu completely off guard, he realized things could get really dangerous for Mu. Still, he hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should step in or not. But when he saw Mu's face turning colors and looking totally hopeless as he struggled with all his might, Kang knew he couldn't wait any longer. He started moving toward them to help before it was too late. Just as he was about to reach them, Kang felt a wave of nerves hit him, worried about what might happen if Yangzhou actually broke Mu's neck. Meanwhile, Mu was desperately trying to say something, but it wasn't easy with Yangzhou squeezing his throat so tight. There were only 2 steps left between Kang and the others when Mu suddenly summoned all his strength and managed to choke out, "Don't help!" That was enough to make Kang freeze in his tracks. He wasn't sure if Mu was really okay in that situation, but then he caught a glimpse of Mu's usual grin, even though he was practically choking. Seeing that, Kang decided to trust him and let Mu finish this fight on his own. Just like he expected, Mu found himself in a tough spot. He could feel Yangzhou's arm muscles squeezing so hard that they were cutting off the blood flow to his brain. Mo realized that if this kept up, he might black out any second. But he had a plan for a situation like this. Making that sneaky grin crept back onto his face. All of a sudden, Mu tensed up the muscles in his neck, just like he did earlier with his back, making his neck even thicker than Yang Zhou's. Then, in the next instant, he did the exact opposite. He contracted his neck muscles as tightly as he could. This made his neck shrink to almost half its size, creating just enough space for a split second. Mu didn't hesitate. He quickly slid both of his hands into the gap between his neck and Yang Zhou's arms, crossing them over one another, but he wasn't done yet. With his neck now reinforced, he finally had a chance to fight back. Using all the strength in his forearms, he gripped Yang Zhou's arms and squeezed with everything he had. It only took a few moments before Yang Zhou couldn't handle the pain anymore and had to let go. Just like that, Mu managed to break free. Neither Yang Zhou nor Kong ever expected Mu to pull off such a rare move and turn the tables to free himself. They had no idea this guy was anything but ordinary. Yang Zhou was getting angrier by the second, which only made his actions more predictable, especially since he was already in bad shape. Just by watching him, Mu could tell Yang Zhou was at his limit. He looked like a massive boulder that only needed one solid punch in the right spot to break apart. That's when Mu clenched his fist, getting ready to finish Yang Zhou off, but he wasn't going to make it that simple. As I mentioned earlier, Mu had spent a few days training with the class teacher. One of those days, the teacher brought Mu to the gym to watch his workout routine. The teacher decided to show off a bit by doing some heavy squats. He got under the barbell, lifted the weight, and began squatting up and down, demonstrating how he trained his legs every day. At first, Mu just watched and checked out the teacher's leg muscles, curious if this exercise really made them stronger. It turned out it definitely did. When the teacher put the barbell back on its rack and was about to take a short break before his next set, he noticed Mu walking over to give the squat a try himself. The teacher was shocked when he saw Mu step up to the barbell. He thought Mu was just trying to copy him and would give up soon, especially with all those heavy weights loaded on. But to his surprise, Mu actually lifted the barbell off the rack and took a step forward. What really threw the teacher off was that Mu's face didn't show any sign of strain or difficulty at all. However, Mu's legs were telling a different story. They started to wobble and bow out like parentheses. There, the teacher quickly realized that Mu was really planning to do squats with that kind of weight. Worried, he tried to talk Mu out of it, convinced that Mu would just end up hurting his knees or back. But Mu wasn't the kind of guy who listened to other people easily. He wasn't being reckless, though. He just had a totally different perspective. What the teacher didn't know was that Mu had the experience and control of someone who's been around for 3 million years. As I mentioned back in the earlier chapters, Mu had complete control over his body, and that included his muscles. If he could control the flow of blood through his veins, then moving strength from one part of his body to another was actually pretty easy for him. Almost 1 million years ago, Mu had mastered a technique that let him make any muscle group in his body much stronger whenever he needed it. With this skill, he could do things that were almost impossible for normal people, like smashing a building as big as the pyramids of Egypt with just a single punch. It had been a long time since Mu last used this technique, mostly because he hadn't needed it. But now he had a plan to bring it back, shifting most of his arm muscle fibers down to his lower body all at once. So, right in front of the teacher, Mu started cranking out squats, moving even faster than the teacher himself. That was just a few days ago, and now he had a similar idea in mind. This time, he moved the muscle fibers from his left arm over to his right, making his right arm nearly double in size and power. Kang was watching closely, checking to see if Mu was really okay after that, and of course, nearly getting choked out by Yang Zhou. Mu glanced at Kang, but didn't answer his question. Suddenly, a memory flashed in Mu's mind, the technique Kang had used when they first fought in class. Mu quickly made up his mind. He realized that copying Kang's move was probably the most effective thing he could do right now. Just as he planned, he mimicked Kang's technique and threw a heavy punch straight at Yang Zhou's midsection. This time, Mu didn't focus on speed, but pure power. Yang Zhou tried to block the punch with both hands, hoping to lessen the blow, but it didn't make much difference. As soon as Mu's fist landed, Yang Zhou realized he couldn't handle this one. That punch shot through Yang Zhou's defense like a missile, breaking down that huge boulder into a bunch of smaller pieces. Or at least, that's how it would have looked if Mu's strength could truly shatter people. In reality, Yang Zhou just blacked out and collapsed to the ground in a heap. Mu stood over him, feeling pretty triumphant after taking down a guy twice his size. But it only took a couple of seconds for Mu to realize he'd forgotten something important. Just like with his last opponents, Mu quickly hopped over to Yang Zhou, tore off a piece of his ear, and marked him as neutered. With that, the fight was officially over, and Mu had taken care of one of the biggest troublemakers in Godori. A few blocks away, Heijin and Daljun were on their way home. Heijin decided it was a good time to ask his sister if she knew why that guy kept coming after her and causing so much trouble. Daljun knew how much her brother cared about her, so she apologized for getting him involved again. Then, she started to explain everything that had happened. She began with the day Heijin first stepped in to save her from those thugs, and how she accidentally dropped her wallet before they could get away. She wasn't sure exactly how, but somehow her ID card ended up in a pawn shop with a debt of 550,000 won tagged to her name, and also mentioned, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't convince the shop owners that she wasn't the one who borrowed the money. As we already know, things went downhill from there. Daljun went on to describe how she managed to get her ID card back, and how, while she was trying to escape, she ended up running into Yangzhou. After hearing the whole story, Heijin was furious, almost to the point of losing control. He usually tried to avoid fights, but now he realized it was time to handle things differently. He pulled out his phone and called the class president, letting them know he wouldn't make it to today's meeting. A few minutes later, at the grandma pawn shop, the boss and his employee were sitting in their usual spots, chatting about business. Suddenly, the door slammed open and Heijin stormed in, grabbing everyone's attention. The boss, clearly annoyed, turned around to see who had barged in so rudely, only to get his answer with a solid punch right to his face. Heijin didn't hold back. He kept pummeling the boss while the employee in the black suit stood there, stunned. For a moment, the shock on his face turned into pure happiness. Finally, someone was giving his bully boss a taste of his own medicine, and he couldn't help but feel relieved. Between heavy blows, the boss managed to glance at his employee and told him to do something before he got seriously hurt. Not wanting to get in trouble himself, the employee quickly grabbed the phone and called for backup. It didn't take long. Two massive guys came charging in from the next room, rushing to block Heijin's way and ready to teach him a lesson for his wild behavior. But Heijin stared them down, completely unafraid, as if none of them could touch him. Normally, Heijin was the calm type, but right now, something inside him was changing. A side of him was coming out. A side with the blood of the very demon he hated most. A side that could be unstoppable and wild if pushed. Unaware of that fact and without hesitation, and of course without caring that he was outnumbered 4-1, Heijin left the boss on the sofa and leaped at the newcomers, determined to take them all down by any means necessary. The door, which had been kept locked to keep their voices from reaching the neighbors, was now hanging open, smashed in by one of the big newcomers who'd just been thrown out. You could see the marks from Heijin's punches all over the guy's chest and face. Honestly, it took Heijin less than a couple of minutes to take them all down, and he barely got scratched himself. Still catching his breath, Heijin demanded to know why his sister needed to pay them money when they had never borrowed anything. The guy in the purple hoodie tried to warn Heijin about what would happen if he messed with people like him. But it was obvious Heijin didn't care. Not about the consequences, and definitely not about who he just beat up. After making it clear he'd punish anyone who bothered Daljun, Heijin left, promising to come back if they ever showed up near his sister again. Meanwhile, the boss, who couldn't even stand, was fuming. Even though he was beaten up and humiliated, he swore he'd make Heijin regret it. While all this was happening, on the other side of town, Kang and Mu were walking down the street. Mu was feeling great after his fight with Yangzhou and how it turned out, while Kang just stared at him in disbelief. Finally, Kang got up the courage to ask about what happened earlier, specifically how Mu made one of his hands twice as big before hitting Yangzhou. Noticing Kang's curiosity, Mu decided to show him. He shifted the muscle fibers from one arm to the other right in front of Kang, making his left arm swell up this time. Kang watched the whole thing go down, but he had no idea how Mu actually pulled off that crazy move. When he tried to copy it himself, all he managed to do was make his muscles twitch awkwardly. Mu laughed and gave Kang some advice, explaining, "You have to learn to actually talk to your muscles if you want to do this trick. Not all muscles are the same, man. You've got to listen to each one separately," Mu went on, trying to make it clearer. "If, and only if, you really figure out what each muscle wants and can get them all working together, you can make them do whatever you want. It's kind of like being the boss of a bunch of stubborn workers. They'll only listen if you know how to talk to them." Kang just looked even more confused after hearing that. He started trying to communicate with his muscles, not realizing that it had taken Mu hundreds of years to master this skill. At that moment, the Dragonling finally spoke up, curious about why Mu was teaching his secret techniques to an Earthling. But Mu just shrugged. He figured that if Kang ever did manage to learn this move and get stronger, it would just make things more interesting for him. Besides, Mu admitted, he needed tougher opponents if he wanted to level up faster than before, and honestly, he thought it would be a lot more fun that way. And on top of all that, Mu needed to reach a level where he'd actually have a shot at facing Lucifer when the time finally came. Mu's pet was pretty confident in the earth barrier around Mu's territory, assuring him that Lucifer couldn't break through it, so there was no need to rush. But unlike the Dragonling, Mu saw things differently. He believed that sooner or later, Lucifer would figure out a way to break the barrier, and Mu wanted to be ready when that happened. Determined not to get completely crushed when the showdown with Lucifer came, Mu announced that from now on, he was going to focus on training, way more seriously than before. The scene shifts to a few hours later, where the boy in the purple hoodie has been called in by the real boss. the big boss of the whole area, who also happens to be his uncle. The boy started complaining about how tough his job was, saying he was doing his best but still struggling, while his uncle just made easy money from those gambling websites. The uncle, known for his flashy gold teeth, just smiled at his nephew, sensing he needed a bit of encouragement. He told him that every job has its ups and downs, and he shouldn't give up or whine about it. After all, he needed to prove his skills and show he could handle things, because the gold teeth boss planned to hand over the business to him one day. Still, the uncle couldn't help but feel a little disappointed seeing how his nephew was struggling to run even a small pawn shop, especially when most of his customers were just high school kids. Even so, the uncle stood up from his seat and decided to let it go for now. He tried to help his nephew relax, gently leading him out of the room to show him something. Meanwhile, in the same building but on a different floor, 3 of the guys who worked at the pawn shop and had all been beaten up by Heijin were gathered together, but this time they were all stripped down to nothing. Apparently, they'd been roughed up again, this time by the big boss's men, as punishment for failing to take on just one high school kid. Suddenly, the guy with the club pointed at the blonde-haired guy and told him to open his mouth. The guy did as he was told, and right away, the man tossed a blue pill into his mouth. Just then, 2 men in black suits came in and dragged the blonde guy away, warning him in a serious tone not to spit the pill out under any circumstances. Back with the big boss, CEO, he was taking his nephew down to the lower floors in the elevator. On the way down, CEO started talking about his nephew's not-so-great business. Sure, his nephew only managed to run that shop because CEO backed him, but there was still a major problem. His only customers were high school kids. In CEO's opinion, no matter how hard his nephew tried, he was never going to make real money with that kind of crowd. Just then, the elevator stopped and the doors slid open. Not long after, CEO stepped out of the elevator and his nephew followed right behind him. But after just a few steps, they both came to a stop. What they saw in front of them made CEO look extra confident, while his nephew just stood there, totally stunned. It turned out they were looking out over a massive underground arena, already packed with hundreds of rich people, all eagerly waiting for the next match to start. The purple hoodie kid couldn't believe his eyes, and that's when CEO turned to him and said, "If you want to make real money, you've got to get into the big leagues. After all, big money only comes with big games." The gold-toothed boss had brought him here to inspire him, to get him to think bigger, but instead, the kid was just in shock, realizing for the first time how his uncle was really making all that money. Just then, one of the fighters entered from the side, and CEO nudged his nephew, telling him to pay close attention. The guy looked anything but normal. Purple veins were popping out all over his neck and body. It didn't take long for the nephew to realize it was the blonde guy who had worked for him at the pawn shop just a few hours earlier, the same one who'd been forced to swallow that weird blue pill. The kid was even more shocked now, having no idea what had happened to his employee. Unaware of the truth, he wondered if the guy had always been that ripped and he just hadn't noticed before. Within seconds, both the blonde guy and his opponent stepped into the arena, ready to fight. Not long after that, the match kicked off and the blonde guy shot toward his opponent at lightning speed. He grabbed the man's arm and went in for a punch with his other hand. The other guy was ready, with his guard up, thinking he could block it. But strangely, the moment the punch landed, he realized he was in serious trouble. Every bone in its path shattered from the sheer force, even though nothing should have happened. The poor fighter didn't even have time to scream. Before he could react, another punch came from the opposite direction, crushing his face and skull in less than a second. Despite absorbing the overflowing power from the pill, the blonde guy remained fully conscious the entire time, and he was clearly reveling in his sudden, insane strength. Up in the VIP section, the nephew and CEO watched the one-sided fight play out. That's when CEO pulled out the same blue pill that gave his employee all that crazy strength and showed it to his nephew. He explained, "This is the power of just one of these pills. With them, I can decide who wins any match and rake in tons of money from betting on them." The boy stared at the pill, looking terrified, still struggling to believe that something so small could have such a massive effect. Meanwhile, down in the ring, his guy was completely dominating, crushing his opponent and having the time of his life. A few days later at the gym, Mu was in the middle of his daily workout. He was finishing up with his favorite move, squats, wrapping up the day's routine. After his last set, he racked the barbell and stepped back. Oddly enough, his entire body looked way bigger, with veins popping out in that way you usually only see on bodybuilders after years of training. Suddenly, Mu turned to the teacher and announced, "Man, I feel amazing after that set. My whole body's tingling like crazy." The teacher just stared at him, completely shocked and at a loss for words. When he glanced at Mu's arms and legs, he couldn't help but blurt out, "I've seen plenty of gym junkies, but I've never seen anyone bulk up this much in such a short time." Even though they always worked out together, the teacher couldn't help but wonder if Mu had started using some kind of performance-enhancing drugs or supplements. Sweat was still running down Mu's face as he tried to clear things up because he didn't even know what those things were. But before he could get a word out, the teacher cut him off and started lecturing him about the dangers of using that kind of stuff. He only stopped when Mu finally managed to insist, "Seriously, I don't even know what you're talking about." The truth was, the teacher had no idea that Mu was pushing himself to the absolute limit every single day. In Mu's mind, he still wasn't strong enough. Not if he was ever going to be ready to face Lucifer. Later that day, just as the sun was about to set, Mu was wandering around the area where he'd once fought in the arena. The Dragonling was with him, wearing Kim's phone like a belt around his waist. All of a sudden, the phone started ringing, and the Dragonling noticed right away. The vibration made him a little jumpy at first, but remembering what Kim had taught him, he picked up the call, then he pressed the phone, along with himself, right up to Mu's ear and told him he needed to answer it. As soon as Mu said, "Hey," Kim started yelling at him, wanting to know where he was and why he hadn't let the Dragonling show his face to her since last week. Mu didn't bother explaining much. He just said he'd come to check out the results of his hard training. A few minutes later, in the same alley where Mu had been beaten up by that little girl, the two girls were there again. They were feeling pretty good, having earned some money as usual with 8 participants and donations from streaming, completely unaware that Mu had already found them. Not long after, they both sensed someone nearby and turned their heads at the same time to see who it was. That's when Mu put on a wicked grin and said, "Long time no see." The small girl, Chungo, immediately jumped to her feet and stuffed the money into her pocket, wondering why Mu had decided to show up after what she thought was a lesson he'd never forget. In a split second, Chungo dashed forward without even checking with her friend first. As she charged at Mu, he just stood there, letting her come at him. Just like last time, the little girl leapt into the air and landed a heavy knee right into Mu's chest. For a moment, Chungo felt pretty good about herself, thinking she'd nailed the move and that things would go the same way as before. But as soon as she landed, Mu just took a single step back, his hands still casually in his pockets. The Dragonling, a bit worried, asked if he was okay after taking such a hard hit, a blow that should have knocked him out. But then Mu flashed his usual grin, making it clear that it was no big deal to him. Seeing his reaction, Chungo felt both disappointed and a little shocked. She had no idea how Mu was still standing after what she thought was a finishing move. But Mu wasn't about to make the same mistake he made last time. Before the fight even started, he'd made sure to tense up and protect that spot with his muscles, blocking the attack before it could do any real damage. After taking the first hit without a scratch, Mu decided it was time to fight for real. He charged in, with Dragonling perched on his head, cheering him on. Using his newly gained muscle strength, Mu moved at lightning speed, closing the distance and swinging his fists at Chungo, left, right, up, and down. The little girl suddenly found herself in a tough spot, barely able to defend herself against the onslaught. That's when Mu realized the tables had turned. Now he was the bigger one, just unlike when he'd faced Yangzhou. He figured this gave him the upper hand. Not wanting to give Chungo even a second to recover, he followed up with a heavy kick to her side. He landed the kick hard, and he could feel it, his usual grin growing even wider. But to his surprise, the little girl barely seemed fazed. She actually managed to grab Mu's foot in midair. Now Chungo looked seriously ticked off, both from getting hit and from Mu acting like she was weak just because of her size. In one wild, quick move, she used all her strength to slam her elbow right into Mu's knee, figuring that would hurt him the most. And she was right. The hit was dead on, catching one of Mu's weak spots. After that, Chungo let go of his leg and hopped back, watching as Mu struggled to keep his balance after her strike. Still, she'd expected him to go down, and it was clear he'd changed a lot since their last fight. Realizing she couldn't take him lightly, Chungo decided to stop holding back. While Mu was distracted and favoring his knee, she dashed at him and, in a blur, started hitting him with a sharp horizontal elbow to the jaw, then followed it up with an upward elbow to another spot on his jaw. And to finish things off, she spun around and tried to land a spinning elbow strike to his side, putting every ounce of her strength into the move. She really went all out and landed every one of her moves perfectly, which made Dragonling worry about his master's safety again. But Chungo's confidence crumbled when she realized Mu should have been knocked down by now, yet he was still standing there. When she looked at him, she saw that creepy smile of his, not knowing that Mu had managed to tense his muscles just in time to soften the impact of her strikes. Mu took advantage of Chungo's distraction and, in a quick move, grabbed her by the collar, just like Yangzhou had done to him the other day. Mu slammed her down onto the ground and then went in to smash her face, but Chungo dodged it at the last second, just like Mu had escaped Yangzhou's attack before. Mu wasn't about to let her come up with a way to fight back. He quickly shifted most of his muscle strength from his upper body, even his neck, down to his lower half, especially his legs and hips, and charged at Chungo. This way, he could move a lot faster than before. But that wasn't all. Right before he reached Chungo, he did the opposite, transferring all his muscle power from his lower body to his upper body, to body slam the little girl as hard as he could. He did it, and as you might expect, Chungo was thrown back several meters, only stopping when she slammed into Kwak Du-gyeon, the taekwondo girl, who blocked her path. That's when Kwak Dugyeon started to really worry about her friend and decided to jump into the fight herself. Without any hesitation, she rushed at Mu and started hitting him with her long legs, just like she did last time. Mu, on the other hand, managed to block most of the kicks, and quickly realized he needed to close the distance between himself and Dugyeon. He knew that if he got in close, the tall girl would lose her advantage. So, in a move she didn't expect, Mu gathered his strength in his legs and leaped forward. In the blink of an eye, Dugyeon found herself caught off guard, unable to dodge out of the way. Mu didn't hesitate. He swung a punch straight at her face, not holding back just because she was a girl. He was ready to take her out right there. But just a split second before his fist landed, Chungo jumped in and stopped him with an elbow right to his face. Even though the little girl's elbow almost put a new hole in his face, Mu didn't back down. Instead, he tried to grab her small head, planning to do some dirty trick on her. But this time, Dugyeon was ready. She landed a solid kick right to Mu's face and stopped him cold. In that moment, both girls realized they couldn't beat Mu alone. If they wanted any chance, they'd have to team up. So, without even needing to talk about it, they started attacking Mu together, throwing kicks and punches from every direction. Mu could barely do anything but try to hold his ground as he got pushed back by the two of them. Even so, he couldn't help but feel a little relieved. His training was actually paying off. Just a few days ago, he knew he wouldn't have stood a chance against both of them at once. Still, if he wanted to turn the fight around and make things fairer, Mu knew he needed a new strategy. He glanced over at Dragonling and suddenly announced he'd found a way to extend his attack range. Without explaining what he meant, he grabbed the poor Dragonling by the tail and started spinning him around like a helicopter, charging forward and shouting, "It's 2-on-2 now. Let's see what you've got." Both girls froze for a second, completely bewildered, not sure what to do next.